The first thing I felt in this world was a stranger's thumb pressing into my wrist. Not a handshake, not a rescue. He was checking my pulse the way a butcher checks a cut of meat before he decides on a price. 2 seconds, a grunt. Then he wrote something on a slip of bamboo and moved to the boy next to me. I opened my eyes on the floor of a cart. There were 19 of us in it, 18 strangers and whatever I was now. All young, all clean, all wearing the same undyed hemp robe, and all of us tied at the ankle to a single rope that ran the length of the cart like we were a string of fish. My body was 18 years old and already dying. I could feel it. There was a cold in my chest that had nothing to do with the weather, and a memory in my skull that had nothing to do with me. His name had been Ling Wei. Mine is now too. He had been sold by his village 3 weeks ago, along with a cow. The cow got a better send-off. Let me be straight about the first 10 minutes, because everybody who hears this story assumes I woke up scheming. I did not. I lay on my back in a cart that smelled like sweat and pine resin, and I thought, with complete sincerity, that there had been a mistake and someone would fix it. That is what a modern upbringing does to you. You spend your whole life inside a system that at least pretends to have a complaints department. Then the cart came out of the pass, and I saw where we were going, and the complaints department closed forever. A mountain range that went up past the clouds and then kept going. Peaks with palaces built into them like teeth in a jaw. Rivers of light running between them that were not water. Above all of it, so high it looked painted on, a sea of cloud with buildings floating in it. And I mean floating. I mean sitting in the sky with nothing under them and no apology for it. The Primordial Saint Sect. Jiangbei's crown jewel, 9,000 years old, and 19 of us tied to a rope being delivered to the front door like a fruit basket. Somebody in front of me started crying. Somebody else told him to stop because crying used up water and they hadn't given us any since dawn. I filed that away as the first useful thing anyone had said to me in this life. Then the panel opened in my eyes. Now look, I'd read enough of this stuff in my old life to know exactly what should have happened next. A blue box, a cheerful voice, 10 free attribute points, a beginner's gift package, a talking sword, maybe a hot fox spirit who's contractually obligated to like me. That's the deal. You get isekai'd into a body that's about to die, the system shows up, and it hands you a pistol. What I got was a book. No stats, no points, no shop, no voice. Just a book hanging in the middle of my vision, thick as a brick, bound in something I decided not to think about too hard. And on the cover, 4 words. Book of 100 Lifetimes. I flipped it open with a thought and found exactly 1 page of instructions, which I will now summarize because it took me 4 deaths to actually believe them. 1. The book has 100 pages. 99 of them are blank. 2. When I die, a page turns and I wake up again at the moment of my arrival. Right here. Cart, rope, thumb on my wrist. 3. When I restart, I carry 1 thing forward, 1 treasure, or 1 lifetime of cultivation, or 1 lifetime of lifespan. Not 2, not 1.5. 4. Or I abandon everything I gained. All of it. And the book will look at how I lived and how I died, and grant me a talent instead. 5. When the last page turns, I stop. I sat there with the rope on my ankle and the mountain filling the sky, and I did the math 100 times, which is not a figure of speech. And every single time, I got the same answer. The system had not given me a weapon. It had given me 100 tries, which is a beautiful gift, and I'd like to formally thank it. And also, it meant that the fastest way to make progress in this world was going to be dying in it. On purpose, repeatedly, with planning. Cool. Very cool. Love that for me. The cart stopped in a courtyard the size of a town square, and a man in gray robes came out with a register and a brush, and he did not look at us. He looked at the paper. That is a small detail. Hold on to it, because it explains the entire sect better than anything else I could tell you. How Kingdom Tribute, named disciples, batch 4, 19 head. Head. They cut the rope and made us kneel in a line. And the gray-robed man walked down it reading names off the register, and each of us was supposed to say yes. Simple. 19 names, 19 yeses, and then, presumably, lunch. He got to the 6th name and stopped. How Kai. The boy 4 down from me said yes with his whole chest, and I remember thinking, oh, this one still thinks he's at a job interview. He was maybe 17. Good bones, clear skin, straight back. And he had the specific glow of somebody whose village had told him he was special so many times that he'd started doing the math on it. The gray-robed man actually looked up, first time all morning. How Kai. Spiritual root assessment, upper grade. Bone age 17. Meridian clarity, excellent. He said it the way you'd read a shipping manifest. Very good, truly very good. And How Kai's face lit up like a festival. Then the man drew a line through his name. Let me set down what happened next accurately, because I have described it inaccurately before and it always comes out sounding like a fight. It was not a fight. There was no blow. How Kai's smile was still on his face when his knees hit the flagstones, and it was still on his face when he tipped forward, and it was still on his face when they rolled him over and he was dead. Crossing out the name did it, that's all. The register was the weapon. Nobody screamed. The gray-robed man was already reading the 7th name. 2 attendants came out with a stretcher, and they were not gentle, and they were not rough. They were efficient. And one of them said something to the other that I have carried in my head through every single life since. He wasn't even being cruel. He was doing inventory. Upper grade root, blood to alchemy, bones to refining, organs to beast taming. Don't let the blood sit. That was the moment I understood where I was. It is not that they kill you here. Lots of places kill you. It's that they had a form for it. There was a department. There was a workflow. Somewhere in this 9,000-year-old immortal sect, there was an old man whose entire job was deciding which of a dead teenager's parts went to which peak. And he was probably very good at it. And he probably had a favorite tea. The word they used for us was named disciple. It sounds like a rank. It is a shipping label. A named disciple is a person the sect has looked at, priced, and entered into a ledger. And the only question left open is whether you'll be more valuable as a cultivator or as ingredients. Hao Kai got the answer immediately because he was too good. Upper grade spiritual root meant his parts were worth more than his labor. That's it. That's the whole reason. The boy died because he was talented in front of 18 other children as a demonstration. They didn't even frame it as a warning. It just happened to also be one. They processed the rest of us in under an hour, and I got my assignment from a woman who looked at my face for about 4 seconds and then wrote 3 characters without looking down. Joyous Union Hall. I asked what that meant. She said, "It means you're pretty." They handed me a jade token the size of my thumb with my name on it. A life lamp. There's one for every disciple in the sect, sitting in a great dark hall on a rack, glowing while you're alive. When it goes out, they know. It sounds thoughtful, doesn't it? Like the sect cares. It is not that. It's a stock counter. That hall is where they find out an asset has depreciated. I hung mine around my neck and thought, in the tone of a man being handed a hotel keycard, well, at least I'm not the alchemy one. Reader, I should have been the alchemy one. Joyous Union Hall sat on the sunny slope of a lesser peak, and it was, I have to admit, the nicest building I'd seen all day. Red pillars, warm stone, a pond with fat orange fish in it that were absolutely worth more than me. They gave me a robe that actually fit. They gave me a room with a bed instead of a mat. And they gave me a bowl of rice with meat in it, which after 3 weeks of a dead boy's memories was almost enough to make me trust somebody. Then they gave me a book called The Ode of Ling Wei Great Bliss, and a senior sister named Mei Li came to collect me. She was beautiful in a way that I found genuinely unfair, not sect flower beautiful, colder than that, and better dressed than that. And she came into the room already talking, already halfway through the sentence, because whatever this was, she'd done it 400 times and I was a Tuesday. "You're the new one. Sit. Don't talk. You'll be tested tomorrow at dawn." I asked what the test was. She smiled at me then, actual warmth in it. That's the part I couldn't figure out for the longest time, and it took me about 6 lifetimes to understand that she wasn't faking the warmth. She just genuinely didn't connect the warmth to the outcome. The test, she said, is me. Let me explain the Ode of Ling Wei Great Bliss the way it was explained to me, which is to say badly and one day too late. The Joyous Union Hall's whole art is transfer. 2 cultivators sit across from each other. They open the meridians and the chi moves. That's it. That's the mechanism. And in a fair world, it moves both directions and you both come out ahead, which is what the manual says in the same font and everything. In practice, the direction of the flow is decided by whoever has the higher cultivation. I was a mortal with nothing. She was at the 9th layer of chi refining, 1 step off the wall that had been in front of her for 6 years. And she needed a specific amount of pure, unspoiled foundation chi to break through it. Foundation chi that a body only makes once, around 18, in someone who's never cultivated. I was not her junior brother. I was a battery with cheekbones. At dawn, they took me to a hall with an audience. That's the detail sit with. There were 11 other disciples watching from cushions, with tea, like it was a recital, because it was. This is how the Joyous Union Hall does business. And everybody there had either already been the battery or was hoping to graduate to holding one. It took about 4 minutes. I've been stabbed, burned, crushed, dissolved, and once shot into a mountain by an actual dragon. And I'm telling you, nothing has ever felt like that first morning. It wasn't pain. Pain would have been a courtesy. It was the specific horror of feeling something leave that you didn't know you had, and knowing with total certainty at the halfway point that you were not going to have it again. My hair went white in patches. My hands went to bone. My vision browned out at the edges like an old photograph. And she stood up. The chi came off her in a column that cracked 2 of the roof tiles, and I lay on the floor being drained of the last of it. And I watched from below as Mei Li broke into the foundation-adjacent layer she'd been stuck at since she was 19. Her face when it happened was not evil, that's the thing. She looked like somebody who'd finally gotten a promotion. The 11 watchers applauded. Then one of them, a girl with a very neat braid, asked the obvious question. She asked what the material was, and Mei Li looked down at me, at the thing on the floor with the white hair and the collapsed chest, and she gave the honest, professional assessment. Trash, barely got me over, mid-grade root at best. I'll need a better one next month. Now, I had about 90 seconds of life left. My meridians were gone. I couldn't stand, couldn't lift my arm, and there was no version of the next 90 seconds where I got up and became somebody. I'd had one day in this world, and I'd spent it being a consumable, so I used what I had. "Senior sister," I said, and my voice came out like a door in an empty house. I should probably mention something. She was still glowing. She barely turned. "What?" "I have syphilis." The hall went extremely quiet. I kept going because when you have 80 seconds left, you may as well fill them. Village doctor confirmed it 2 months back. He said it's the bad kind, the one that gets into the marrow. And he said whatever you do, don't let it into your chi. I did my best to look apologetic. I did try to bring it up yesterday. "You told me not to talk." For one entire second, I watched a woman who had just achieved a 6-year breakthrough do the arithmetic on whether her breakthrough was made of disease. It was worth it. Whatever came next, and what came next was her heal, it was worth it. She beat me to death on the floor of that hall in front of 11 people with tea. And she did it fast and sloppy and furious, which was the first honest thing anyone in the Primordial Saint Sect had done in front of me. The last thing I saw was my own life lamp token on the floor by my hand, going dark. The last thing I heard was somebody asking if she should get it checked. And then a page turned. The state I was in when I came back deserves an honest account, because I've told this part like a joke for so long that it started to sound like one. I woke up on the floor of the cart. The thumb was on my wrist, the mountain was in the sky. The boy in front of me was crying again, and someone was telling him again that crying uses water. Everything was exactly where I had left it, down to a chipped board by my head, and my body was whole, and my hair was black, and none of it had happened. Except I remembered all of it. I sat in that cart for the whole ride to the courtyard with my heart going like a bird in a box, and I did not feel like a man with a cheat code. I felt like a man who had just found out that dying doesn't end anything. Because that's the flip side nobody mentions. If death is a page, then death is not an exit, it's a chore. I could not leave. I could only lose. Then the book opened and offered me my choice, and I stopped feeling sorry for myself because I had gained exactly nothing in that life. No treasure, no cultivation, no lifespan. There was nothing to carry. Which left option 4, abandon everything and take a talent, granted according to how I had lived and how I had died. I'd lived one day. I'd died as a battery. The book thought about it for a moment, then the page filled in. Talent acquired, dual cultivation prodigy, white grade. The description was 3 lines long and I read it about 40 times. In any chi transfer, the flow direction is mine. Always. Regardless of cultivation, regardless of technique, regardless of intent. Anyone who opens their meridians to me is not taking, they're pouring. White grade. The lowest tier the book has. A junk drop. And it was, objectively, junk. It does nothing in a fight. It does nothing to your talent, your speed, your lifespan, your comprehension. In 99 sects out of 100, it is a party trick that makes you slightly harder to rob. But I hadn't been assigned to 99 sects. I'd been assigned to the one with the transfer department. And the woman who ran my intake was going to walk into my room in about 36 hours with a 6-year bottleneck and an appointment. I got off the cart. I knelt in the line. I watched Hao Kai say yes with his whole chest. And I watched the brush come down through his name. And this time, I knew it was coming and it was worse. And I made myself watch anyway, because I'd already learned the only lesson this place teaches. Everything here is priced. The only question is whether you know your price before they tell you. They looked at my face for 4 seconds. Joyous Union Hall. I said thank you. Mei Li came in already halfway through her sentence. Sit, don't talk, test at dawn. I asked what the test was so she could smile and say, the test is me. And I could look appropriately nervous, which took some acting because what I actually wanted to do was ask her to hurry. At dawn, we went to the hall with the cushions and the tea and the 11 witnesses. She sat down across from me. She opened her meridians the way you'd open a tap over a glass, and the glass drank the house. I have never in 10 lifetimes seen an expression change that fast. She got maybe 2 heartbeats of confusion, that little frown of a professional whose tool has stopped working. And then it hit her that the current was running backwards, and that she could not close the connection, because the connection wasn't hers anymore. She said my name, first time she'd used it. Then she said it again, differently. 6 years of accumulated chi came out of her and into me in under 3 minutes. And I sat there in a borrowed robe and took delivery. Her hair didn't go white, she was too strong for that. But her skin went gray and her lips cracked, and her hands came down on the mat to hold herself up. And the 11 watchers stopped drinking their tea. I could feel her cultivation arriving in me like furniture being carried into an empty apartment. My meridians opened one after another, a line of doors down a dark hallway, and something turned over in my dantian that had never been there in either of my lives. First layer of chi refining. She fell sideways. Somebody caught her. The girl with the neat braid was standing up with her mouth open, and I remember very clearly that nobody moved to help me. And nobody would have, and this was the single most useful piece of information available in that room. They didn't stop it because there was no rule against it. There was only a rule about who was supposed to be on top, and the rule had just been embarrassed in public. I got up. My legs worked. My hands were mine. And Mei Li, half-conscious on the floor with her breakthrough sitting in someone else's dantian, looked up at me with an expression I had absolutely earned and asked me what I had done. I told her I was a fast learner. Then I helped her up because I'm a good person, and because a senior sister who owes you her dignity is more useful than one who owes you nothing, and because I had already noticed that everyone in this sect who ever hurt me had done it while smiling. And I was starting to think they were onto something. The 11 watchers filed out very quietly. 3 days later, a woman I had never met came up the mountain path to Joyous Union Hall specifically to congratulate me. Her name was Shui Lan. Heaven-mending peak, outer affairs, and she smiled the entire time. And I mean the entire time. In a way that I would later learn was not a mask at all. That's what got me. If she'd been sinister, I'd have run. She had the manner of a really excellent recruiter. Warm, funny, remembered your name, asked about your village. Junior brother Ling Wei, she said, you've made quite an impression. I said I'd been lucky. No such thing here. She took my arm like an ant. Come, you've been reassigned. Somebody wants to make sure you're taken care of. And I went with her. Of course I went with her. I was 1 day and 3 hours into the first cultivation of my life, and a beautiful senior from a great peak had just told me I was special. And I was 18 years old in a body that had been sold with a cow. She walked me all the way up to Heaven-mending Peak and gave me the tour. That tour is the single most educational hour I have ever spent, and I've spent hours in other people's memories. She showed me the pill gardens, which were beautiful. She showed me the beast pens, which were loud. And then she took me through the treasure refining hall, and that's where the sect stopped bothering to pretend to me. Because in the middle of the floor, there was a young man cross-legged inside a chalked formation with a sword blank floating above him, and he was cultivating, and he looked focused and calm and about 19, and Shui Lan walked me right past him and pointed out the ceiling joinery. Then an old refiner tapped a bell. The young man's chi turned inside out. I watched his back arch. I watched him try to say something. I watched him come apart from the inside and go up into the sword blank as a spiral of white light and pale dust. And the blank drank all of it and rang like a struck bowl, and the ringing went on for a while. The refiner picked it up and turned it in the light and said the bone content was good this year. I stopped walking. Shui Lan turned back, and she wasn't embarrassed, and she didn't rush me. She waited with that same warm smile until I looked at her. And then she gave me the thesis statement of the Primordial Saint Sect, the sentence that runs under every single thing that has happened to me since. And she gave it kindly, the way you'd explain rain to a child. There's no trash in the Saint Sect, junior brother, only different products. Let me get to that. I understood the sentence right then. I didn't. I understood the words. I nodded and made a face and told myself I'd landed somewhere dangerous and I'd need to be careful, which is what everybody thinks, and which is why the sect has never once run short of material. What I actually thought, walking out of that hall with my knees still shaking, was that I needed to become valuable enough that they'd want to keep me. That's the trap. That's the whole trap. It took me 2 more deaths to see the shape of it. They don't want to keep anything. She set me up beautifully. A cave residence on the good slope, a 4-piece welcome package, free, which she made a small joke about, because nothing in the Saint Sect is free, and we both laughed. A bone jade sword, a bottle of key nourishing pills. A human-faced owl in a cage, which is a messenger bird with a person's face and an expression of permanent disappointment. And a cauldron to be delivered later. 50 contribution points to start me off. Then she taught me the economy, and the economy is the sect. Rent on the cave is 30 points a month. A mission a first-layer disciple can actually survive pays about 20. That is not an accident, and nobody hides it. Everyone starts underwater. The sect is extremely happy to lend. The rate on a disciple loan is 36%. I asked what happens if you can't pay. Shui Lan smiled and said nobody in the Saint Sect has ever failed to pay, which is true. It's true the way it's true that no fish has ever failed to be caught. They just change what you pay with. Then, almost as an afterthought, she gave me the thing she'd actually climbed the mountain for. Since you have a gift for transfer arts, you should have a proper technique. This one's rare, don't show it around. The innate Tao book. It was half a manual, just the front half, the chi refining portion. When I said so, she waved it off. The rest was in the archive. She'd bring it once I'd digested this much. Perfectly normal. Every sect does that. You don't hand a whole legacy to a kid who might sell it. The technique itself was incredible. In 10 days, I went from the first layer to the third. That's not fast. That's deranged. That's the kind of progress that gets songs written about you, and it wasn't pills doing it. The innate Tao book takes the ordinary muddy chi in your meridians and refines it towards something called primordial true chi. And every time it converted a little more, my body got lighter, cleaner, faster off the mat. By day 8, my skin had a shine to it in low light. By day 10, I could feel my chi as one continuous thing instead of a network. Not chi in my meridians, just chi in the shape of a man. That was the night I finally sat down and thought about Mei Li. Not romantically. I want to be extremely clear. I thought about her because of a thread that had been snagging on me for a week. In my first life, she drained me at dawn and broke through by breakfast. She was fine, better than fine. So why had Shui Lan of Heaven-mending Peak come all the way down to Joyous Union Hall 3 days later to congratulate a nobody? The official story was that senior sister Jia had fallen ill after her breakthrough, and I'd been reassigned. Illness. In a woman who just absorbed the purest foundation qi a human body ever makes. Sure. But in my first life, she hadn't gotten ill. In my first life, she was on top of the world, and nobody brought anybody anything. The difference between the two lives was me. I'd taken her cultivation instead. So this time, the joyous union hall had a hole where a promising senior sister used to be, and Xuelan came down the mountain inside 72 hours with a rare technique in her sleeve and a smile on her face. Which meant the technique was not for Mei Li. It had never been for Mei Li. It had been brought to the person who could refine his own body into primordial true qi in 10 days. I got up off the mat. My hands were glowing faintly in the dark, which I'd been very pleased about an hour earlier. And I stood there in my nice free cave with my nice free sword and my nice free owl, and I read the manual the way you're supposed to read a contract. There was no combat application, not one. No palm, no sword form, no defensive art. Just refinement, refinement, refinement. Purity, purity, purity. It wasn't a cultivation method, it was a marinade. I got about 4 seconds with that thought before the door came off its hinges. Xuelan came in over the wreckage, still smiling, and the air had that ringing quality it gets right before something expensive happens, and in her hand was a single page, the second half of the innate Tao book. You're ahead of schedule, she said, and she sounded genuinely delighted, like a teacher whose student turned in an essay early. 10 days. Junior brother, I've had this take 6 months. I went for the sword. She read the second half out loud. I didn't finish standing up. Here's what the back half of the innate Tao book does. It's not a cultivation technique either. It's the second half of a refining formula. The first half spends 10 days turning a human being into a single homogeneous block of very high purity primordial true qi. And the second half is the part where the smith picks the block up. My arms went first, not cut, converted. I watched my own hand stop being a hand and become a smooth white nothing. And it did not hurt. That's the obscene part. It was warm. And my qi was singing, and every instinct in the technique I'd spent 10 days perfecting was telling me this was correct. This was the goal. This was what the purity had been for. I said her name. She crouched down beside me with the page and patted my shoulder while it dissolved. Don't fight it. It's cleaner if you don't. I asked her why, and she told me. That's the thing about Xuelan. She never once lied to me. Not in any life. Not even here. Because you're an excellent product, she said. Best I've handled in 11 years. Do you know how rare it is to find a body that takes the innate Tao book cleanly? Mei Li would have wasted it. You didn't. Then, still warm. Thank you, junior brother. Truly. The last of me went into a ball of white light about the size of a fist. Xuelan put it in a jade box. The box closed. Page 98. I sat in the cart with the thumb on my wrist and the mountain in the sky, and I did not think about revenge for 1 second, which surprises people. I thought about the box, because when the technique finished, I hadn't stopped. This is the most important thing that happened in my first 3 lives, so I'm going to be precise. When my body finished converting, I was still there, thinking, inside the ball. I could feel the shape of the jade box around me. I was a lump of extremely pure qi with opinions, and the book was offering me option 1, carry forward 1 treasure. The primordial true qi was technically a treasure. The primordial true qi was also technically me. I took it. So when I woke up on the floor of the cart with a rope on my ankle, I had a second body. Not a clone, nothing that clever. Picture a fist-sized ball of white qi living in my chest that I could move like a limb. It could leave me. It could hold things. It could hit things. And no cultivator below Foundation establishment could see it because it didn't read as a technique or a treasure or a person. It read as ambient qi, an invisible extra hand made of the most refined energy in the sect. It had cost me my entire second life. Here's the fastest way to explain what it did to my third. I never let anyone escort me anywhere ever again. My third life is the one where I stopped being a victim and started being a problem, and the transition was not dramatic. It was administrative. I did nothing for a month. That's the whole opening play. I got off the cart, I knelt in the line, I watched the brush come down through Hao Kai's name, and then I went to Joyous Union Hall, and I was polite and unremarkable and slow. I let Mei Li drain the boy in the room next to mine, because if I took her cultivation again, Xielan would come down the mountain again, and I could not survive Xielan. His name was Ren Jie. I heard it through the wall. I'm not going to pretend that was hard for me, and I'm not going to pretend it was easy. I'd been the boy in that room twice. The honest version is that I lay on my mat and listened and did the arithmetic on how many pages I had left. And the arithmetic won, and I have never gotten the sound all the way out of my head. I made him a promise while I listened. You'll see whether I kept it. A month later, I broke into the first layer on my own. At night, off the ambient qi, my second body was constantly hoovering up. No breakthrough light, no column, nothing for anyone to notice. Nobody came up the mountain to congratulate me. Nobody brought me a rare technique. Nobody handed me a free owl. I have never been so relieved to be worthless. That bought me the run of the sect, and the first place I went was the library. In my first 2 lives, I'd let other people hand me my information, and both times the information had a hook in it. The Outer Peak Library is 9 floors and smells like a barn. and it's run by an old man named Guo Tian who hasn't stood up since the rain before last. He sits in a rocking chair by the door with a bowl of melon seeds. He doesn't check tokens. I got about 40 seconds into a polite introduction before he told me to stop performing and go read something. I liked him immediately. Took me 4 lives to admit it. The free shelf, which is the shelf a named disciple is allowed to touch, had exactly one thing worth taking. The Dragon Tiger Intercourse Ode, Qi refining portion only. Yes, everything in this sect is named like that. No, it doesn't improve. For anything real, you pay. And the number that mattered to me was on a scroll behind his chair. Divine Firmament Sword Control, 1,000 contribution points. I had 11. What the library had instead was a lending desk, and the lending desk had a rate, and the rate was 36%. And I stood in front of a 9,000-year-old immortal sect and took out a student loan with absolutely no intention of ever paying it back. Guo Tian stamped it without looking up from the seeds. Delivery in 3 days, he said. I asked what delivery meant. He said the sword technique needs a cauldron and one would be sent. 3 days later, 2 attendants carried a wooden crate up to my cave, set it down, got my thumbprint, and left. I opened it. There was a girl inside. Bound at the wrists and ankles, gagged, wearing a sect uniform, and not one of ours. Pale blue, silver trim, and a badge I'd seen exactly once, in a book, on a page about the 4 great powers. Jade Pivot Sword Pavilion. Jiangnan, the righteous path. The people my sect has been at war with for 9,000 years. She was maybe 17. She was still fighting the ropes when the lid came off, and when she saw my face, she stopped fighting the ropes and started trying to chew through the gag so she could say something to me. That is what a cauldron is. I had ordered a sword manual. The manual came with a person. And the sect hadn't thought this was worth mentioning because the sect did not think of it as a separate item. It was on the same invoice. Her name was Xianxia. I got that out of her about an hour later, along with a great deal of creative language, and she was not begging. She had been rolled up a mountain in a crate by an enemy sect and dumped at a stranger's feet, and what she was doing was threatening me, at length, in detail, with specifics about my spine. I sat on a rock and let her finish, because I had a problem. The Divine Firmament Sword Control is genuinely magnificent. You compress your chi into a pellet, the pellet moves, you go where it goes. 100 meters in a blink. It's the single best escape tool available below Foundation establishment. And the entry requirement, the thing that gets your chi dense enough to compress it all, is a large donation of Foundation chi out of somebody else's meridians. The sect's answer to that requirement is the crate. My answer was a talent that made me the direction of every flow, and a second body made of primordial true chi. And about 4 days before anyone came asking, so I did the transfer, and I stopped halfway. Enough for the pellet, not enough to hollow her out. She came out of it dizzy and furious and entirely intact, and she sat against the wall of my cave staring at me with her mouth open, waiting for the rest of it. And I got up and started practicing my sword lights. She asked what I was doing, learning to run away very fast. She told me she'd swear on her magic sword to kill me. I said that was fair. She asked why I'd stopped. I said because I only needed the pellet. And then, because she was 17 and furious and had spent 3 days as freight, she made a mistake. She told me exactly what her sect could do that mine couldn't, at volume, as a threat. That's how I learned about the sword pellet's second stage, and about how Jade Pivot Sword Pavilion binds a flying sword to the soul instead of the dantian, and 6 other things that were not in the manual I'd just gone 1,000 points into debt for. I let her talk for 2 hours. Then I put her out the back of the cave with a bag of dry rations and pointed her at the pass, and told her that if she made it home she should mention to nobody where she'd been, because the sect prices its crates and an empty one gets investigated. She stood in the dark, holding the rations like they'd insulted her. She asked me why. I said I hadn't decided yet. That was true. Stayed true for about 6 lifetimes. I've done a great many things since that would make that girl's sword arm itch, and I've never once been able to explain the back door, except that I was 3 lives into a place with a workflow for children, and I wanted to know if I could still do something that wasn't on an invoice. She got 10 steps and turned around and said her name properly. Full name, sect, master's name, like a challenge. Zhang Xinyue. Remember it, it comes back. A week later, I got summoned to the Hall of Merit, which is where the sect turns people into missions. The man behind the desk was named Tao Lei, and he had the exhausted good cheer of a middle manager 3 years from a pension he is never going to receive. He pulled my file. He read it. He got to the part where a first layer nobody had borrowed 1,000 points, and his eyebrows went up. And for the first time in my 3 lives, somebody in this sect looked at me with genuine professional respect. Ambitious, he said. Then he introduced me to Hui Heng. Hui Heng was at the 6th layer, wore very good boots, and had the specific energy of a man who is about to do you an enormous favor. He clapped me on the shoulder before he'd finished saying his own name. He called me junior brother 11 times in the first 4 minutes. I counted. And within a quarter of an hour, he had explained to me that a young man with my prospects should really be thinking about marriage. and that it so happened the master of a certain lesser peak had a daughter, and that the introduction fee was negligible, and that he personally, out of pure affection, would arrange the whole thing. I said I was flattered, but I had syphilis. That line has now ended 4 separate conversations across 10 lifetimes, and I have never once regretted buying it. Hui Heng's face did a thing. He recovered beautifully. He said that was a shame and pivoted and gave me the actual pitch, which was the job. The job was the Ling Wei immortal flower. Simple. You get a seed, you plant it in a spirit field, you tend it for a year. The sect buys the mature flower for a fixed price. Guaranteed contract, no combat, no travel, perfect for a new disciple. The seed costs 500 points. I didn't have 500 points, but Hui Heng knew a fellow at the Sanhe Association who could arrange a loan. And the Sanhe Association is a private lender that operates inside the sect with the sect's blessing. And their rate was actually better than the libraries, which should have told me everything. I asked for a moment to think, which he took as a yes. And then I went outside and sat on a step and did the arithmetic. 500 points for the seed, interest over the year, rent on a spirit field, which they'd mentioned late and quietly, rent on my cave, 30 a month, 12 months, water rights, the sect's cut on the sale. The mature flower sells for 1,100. I ran it 4 times. Best case, a full year of daily labor, no failures, no pests, no theft. And I finished the year 11 points ahead of where I started. 11 points. That's a third of 1 month's rent. Now here's the part that took me a minute. My first thought was that this was a bad deal and I should negotiate. My second thought was that it wasn't a bad deal at all, because it wasn't a deal. It was a leash with a job attached. The Ling Wei immortal flower does not exist to make disciples money. It exists to keep several thousand young cultivators busy, tired, and precisely 1 bad month from default for a year at a time, in a place where the default clause is your body. So I went back in, and I smiled, and I signed for the 500 points. And then I went straight down the mountain and spent all of it on 10 bottles of Origin Cheap Hills. I did not buy the seed. I have thought about that afternoon a lot. It's the first genuinely free thing I ever did in the Primordial Saint Sect. Not the smartest, not the safest, but I stood in that shop with 500 borrowed points and understood, all at once and forever, that I was never going to get anywhere by being a good tenant. 2 days later, a woman came to my door with a delivery. She introduced herself as Fairy Fei Yan, and fairy is a title people give themselves, and she'd given it to herself with enthusiasm. She was radiant. She was charming. She brought me tea I hadn't asked for and sat down in my cave like she'd been coming here for years, and inside of 10 minutes, she had gotten around to a business opportunity. There was an immortal cave, ancient, recently surfaced. Senior brother Hui was putting together a small expedition. Quiet, only the promising ones, and she had thought of me first. I said no. She blinked. I don't think she'd budgeted for no. She tried again with more warmth on it, and I said no again. And then a third time, with the numbers, actual numbers, real shares, and I said I was flattered, and I had syphilis. She left with her tea, and that, as I found out much later, is the meeting where Fairy Fei Yan and Hui Heng decided to kill me. Not out of malice, understand that. It was a cash flow decision, because here's the thing about the loan I had just taken. The Sanhe Association is not stupid. A first-layer disciple with no backing and 500 points of debt is not a good credit risk, and everybody involved knows it. So the loan is not secured against my future earnings. It's secured against me. The sect maintains a price list. Every named disciple has an assessed corpse value, updated at intake, based on spiritual root grade and bone age and meridian clarity, blood to alchemy, bones to refining, organs to beast taming. My number was on file before I ever borrowed a point. The loan can't go bad. It's a purchase order with a waiting period, and the fastest way for a lender's associate to close out a bad account is for the debtor to die somewhere inconvenient, ideally in an ancient cave, ideally after signing an expedition waiver. I understood approximately none of that at the time. What I understood was that 2 people I'd never met kept trying very hard to get me to walk somewhere with them. And in my experience of this sect, walking somewhere with people is how you end up in a jade box. So I went home and burned every pill I owned, 10 bottles, straight down. I'd bought Origin Cheap pills specifically because they're crude and unrefined and cheap, and any normal cultivator taking 10 bottles in one sitting would blow their meridians into confetti. But I wasn't refining that chi with my own body. I was pouring the whole flood through the second body, the primordial true chi, which is a purification engine that cost me an entire lifetime. And it took 10 bottles of garbage and handed me back a river of clean fuel. I hit the wall between the third layer and the middle stage at around midnight. Then I fed the second body into the wall too, and the wall came down. Fourth layer. Then fifth. I stopped there because the sun was coming up and I had started to smell like a pill furnace. 2 nights later, 3 men in cloth masks pried the door of my cave. It was over in about 9 seconds and I spent most of it surprised. They came in expecting a first-layer disciple asleep on a mat. What was in the room was a 5th-layer cultivator who had spent 40 hours awake practicing sword lights and an invisible fist-sized ball of primordial true chi hanging in the corner of the ceiling. The first one died before he got through the doorway because the sword pellet went through his throat from an angle that doesn't exist. The second one got his hand up and I hit him with the innate 1 chi great hand handprint, which is the second body, in his chest from the inside. Because the second body had been standing behind him since he stepped in, the third one turned to run. I did not do anything clever to him. I hit him with the sword light while he was in the doorway. It was not a duel, it was closing a door. Then I sat down on my own floor with 3 corpses in my cave and shook for about 20 minutes, and nobody came. That is the piece stay with. I killed 3 sect disciples in a sect residence and dumped them off the back cliff at dawn, and nobody investigated, nobody asked, nobody so much as looked in. Because disciples killing disciples is not a crime here, it's a market correction. As long as the life lamps go out in the right order and nobody's dragging a corpse through the main hall, the sect's position is that the inventory has simply reallocated. Their purses had 400 points in them, which I have always felt was a nice touch. The sect had sent 3 men to collect my body, and they'd carried the fee with them. One of them had a manual on him too. Qi concealment art. Low grade, cheap, and it does exactly one thing. It makes your cultivation read 1 full stage lower than it is. I have used that technique in every life since. It is the single most valuable thing I have ever taken off a corpse. Now, the thing I actually wanted, the thing I'd been building toward, was the sword pellet's 2nd stage, and the price on it was 2,000 contribution points. 2,000. I just done the math on a year of honest labor netting 11. 2,000 points is 20 years of being a good tenant. It's a number designed to be a horizon, so I bought something else instead. 300 points, 3rd shelf, no queue. The killing curse. The killing curse is a garbage technique. It is a genuinely bad purchase, and the clerk gave me a look. You brand it into your own soul, and thereafter, at any moment you can say the word, and your chi detonates outward, and you die. That's it. There's no version where you survive. It's a bad trade against anyone weaker, and a wash against anyone stronger, which is why it sits on the 3rd shelf gathering dust next to the fireworks. But I had a problem no other disciple in this sect has ever had. The book only turns the page when I die. I had spent 3 lives at the mercy of other people's schedules for that. Mei Li's temper, Shui Lan's timing. If a life goes wrong and I get captured or sealed or kept alive in a jade box by somebody patient, the whole system stops. No death, no page, no restart. Just me in a box, forever. I wasn't buying a weapon, I was buying an exit. Now, 2 more things from that life, because both of them come back, and one of them is a number I have carried for 7 lifetimes. The first was the karma pool. There's a lottery on 10,000 Treasures Peak, a real one. You pay in contribution points, you draw a fish out of a pool of karmic water, and the fish tells you what you've won. Most people get a copper fish and a pat on the head. The pool has been accumulating for over a century. That season, a brand new outer disciple named Yi Lei walked up to the rail, paid, reached in, and pulled out a colored karma fish. Nobody in living memory had drawn one. He took the entire century-old pool, something in the neighborhood of 1 billion points of accumulated value, converted into treasures, on his first attempt, 3 weeks after joining. The whole sect talked about it for a month. Child of destiny, they said. Heaven's favorite. That boy's going to be a foundation establishment true person before he's 30. I stood in the crowd and I watched them announce it, and I wrote down the only part that mattered. His ticket number, 2025113. I said it to myself every night for the rest of that life. I have said it in every life since. If I ever get hit hard enough to forget my own name, I will still have that number. The second thing was Guo Tian, and this is where the shape of my 4th life came from. I came into the library one afternoon, and the old man wasn't in the chair. He was sitting on the floor behind the desk with his back against a shelf, and he'd been drinking, and when he looked up at me, his eyes were red. Substitute shadow puppet corpses had crashed. I had no idea what that meant. He explained it badly and at length, and I got most of it later. Substitute shadow puppets are consumables. You put one in your storage pouch, and when something kills you, the puppet dies instead and you walk away with a nosebleed. Every cultivator wants one. Almost nobody can afford one. They're made from the corpses of a specific insect that only breeds in one pit on one mountain in Jiangbei, and the sect that controls the pit has been in a low-grade shooting war over it for 200 years. Guo Tian had put 40 years of savings into corpse futures. That week, the sect announced the pit had been lost. The price went through the floor. 40 years, gone in about 6 hours, and an old man who had never once stood up from his chair for me was sitting on his own floor with a jar. I didn't help him. I had nothing to help him with. I sat down and drank some of his wine and listened. And he told me something at hour 3 that I did not understand until my 4th life, and it belongs here. He said the reason he was in that chair was that he'd chosen a safe technique at 19, low grade, reliable, cheap on resources. It got him to the 7th layer by 30, and it has kept him at the 7th layer for 140 years. And he said there had been 3 techniques on the shelf that day, and the other 2 would probably have killed him. Then he said the sentence, "The dangerous ones are dangerous because they cost you something you can't get back." That's all. That's the entire secret. Everybody in this sect is a coward about a thing they're only going to have once anyway. He fell asleep against the shelf. 2 weeks later, Fairy Fei Yan came back to my door, and this time she had leverage because my loan was due. The Immortal Cave expedition was leaving in 3 days. Hui Heng was leading it, 14 disciples, and she pointed out, very gently, over tea, that a man with my debts could not really afford to keep saying no. She was right, so I went. Serpent Bloom Island sits in a lake 3 days east, and it's a real ruin with a real legacy in it, and everything Hui Heng told the 14 of us on the boat was true. That's what made it work. He wasn't lying about the treasure. He was lying about the number of people leaving. He waited until we were in the inner chamber. Then he took out a blade I hadn't seen him carry, a thin black thing with a mouth on it, and he killed Su Xiaomei, who was standing next to him and had been laughing at his joke, and the blade drank her. Blood Demon's soul-slaying blade. It gets stronger with every soul it takes, and it's a one-use consumable at the top end, and Hui Heng had budgeted 14 souls to get it there. He got 13. A word on my own conduct here, because I have told this story to people who assumed I fought him. I did not fight him. I went into a crack in the wall the second the blade came out, with the Qi concealment art running and my second body pulled all the way in. And I sat in the dark and listened to 12 more people die in a room I could have reached in 4 steps. I knew all their names. We'd been on a boat for 3 days. Fairy Fei Yan was the last but one. She saw it coming because she'd helped plan it, and she was the only one who got a sentence out. She asked him why. He said the blade needed one more, and she was the strongest one left, and he genuinely thought about it. Then he took the legacy off the altar. 2 pieces, the 9 transformations. Dragon transformation art, a 3rd grade cultivation technique, which in a sect where the free shelf holds 4th grade garbage is like finding a cannon in a knife fight. And the Dragon King Ascension treasure scroll, which is a foundation establishment method. A foundation establishment method. In the hands of a 6th layer disciple. He came out of that chamber the richest man in the outer sect, and he was very, very tired, because he just used a soul blade 13 times. I met him on the causeway. I'd had 4 hours while he looted, and I'd spent all 4 setting up, because I had already learned the only lesson that matters about fighting people stronger than you. Don't fight the ground they're standing on. 4 maze banners at the corners. A formation I'd copied out of a scroll I couldn't afford and had memorized in the library while pretending to sweep. It doesn't hurt anyone. It just makes leaving take longer than it should. Then sword lights out of the fog. I killed Hui Heng 11 times on that causeway. I'm not exaggerating and I'm not proud. 11 times in about 2 hours. And 11 times a substitute shadow puppet went off, and a straw doll burst into ash, and Hui Heng stood back up with a nosebleed and a slightly worse temper. That's what the corpse market pays for. He'd bought at the bottom, after the crash, with the money from a job he was about to murder 14 people to complete. The man had a business plan. By the 12th attempt we had reached an understanding. He couldn't catch me. I was in a formation, invisible, with a sword pellet and no fixed position. And I couldn't kill him. He had puppets and I could not count them. He started talking through the fog. Very reasonable, very warm. He called me junior brother a great deal. He offered me the 9 transformations dragon transformation art. I said keep it. He offered points. He offered a share. He offered to sponsor my intersect application, which I thought was a nice touch, given the 14 bodies behind him. I asked for the Dragon King Ascension treasure scroll. He laughed. He said absolutely not. And that was the only honest moment we had, because the foundation establishment method was the one thing on that island worth more than his own life. I told him I'd sit in the formation until he starved. We negotiated for another hour. He gave me the scroll. He gave it to me because he'd counted, and he knew I was 5th layer. And he knew a 5th layer disciple cannot use a foundation establishment method any more than a cat can drive a cart. And he fully intended to kill me over the next month at leisure with the resources of a man who now owned a 3rd grade technique. He was right about all of it. I read the scroll standing there in the fog, cover to cover, 20 minutes, and I have a very good memory when the alternative is dying stupid. Then I dropped it on the stones and walked out of my own formation. Hui Heng was, to his credit, immediately suspicious. He asked me what I was doing. I said I was making a deposit. Then I said the word. The killing curse went off about a meter from his face and took the causeway, the fog, both of us, and, going by the noise, a fair amount of the lake. He had puppets. He was fine. That was never the point. The point was that I had a foundation establishment method memorized word for word, and 13 dead recruits I could not fix, and a page that only turns when I die. Page 97. Thumb, wrist, mountain, rope. This time I took cultivation, and when I woke up on the floor of that cart, I nearly gave myself away in front of 19 witnesses, because I came back at the 4th layer of Qi refining. Not the 1st, not the 5th I'd died at, the 4th. I sat there running my hands over my own meridians like a man checking his pockets, and it took me most of the ride to work out what the book had actually done. And when I did, I had to put my head down and breathe. The book does not average my lives. It does not give me a discount. When I take cultivation forward, it takes the cultivation I had at the end and hands it to a body that starts with nothing. And the delta lands as a permanent floor. I'd started life 3 at 0 and ended it at the 5th layer. So life 4 started at the 4th, which means the floor rises every single time, forever. However many lives it takes, whatever I do in between, whatever I lose, the number at the start of the next one is built on the number at the end of this one, and there is no ceiling in the instructions. I had been playing this like a man with 100 chances. I was actually a man with 100 compounding chances, which is a completely different animal, and it is the reason I stopped panicking in that cart and started planning in it. First thing I did on arrival was run the Qi concealment art until I read as 1st layer. Second thing I did was walk up 10,000 Treasures Peak and buy a ticket to the Karma Pool. A brand new named disciple, 11 contribution points to his name, standing at the rail of the sect's lottery with a slip of paper in his hand. And on the paper, the number 2025113, which I had memorized across 2 lifetimes and a death. The attendant took my points. I reached into the karmic water. I felt something bump my fingers. I pulled out a purple fish, not the colored karma fish, a purple one. 6th prize, a bottle of pills and a polite nod. And I stood there dripping with my 6th prize fish, and I laughed, out loud, in front of the attendant. Because I had just learned something worth 100 times more than a billion-point pool. The number was not a lottery number. If the pool were honest, ticket 2025113 draws the colored karma fish no matter whose hand is on it. The number 1. That's what a lottery is. It didn't win for me, which means it never won for Ye Lei either. The jackpot wasn't drawn. It was awarded. Somebody in this sect had decided in advance that an outer disciple named Ye Lei was going to walk up to a 100-year-old pool and pull a billion points out of it in front of the entire sect. And then the entire sect was going to talk about it for a month. That's not a prize. That's a broadcast. I ate the pills. They took me from the 4th layer to the 5th, which is objectively the worst return on a piece of information that valuable in the history of the Primordial Saint Sect. And I have never once resented it, because I walked down that mountain understanding for the first time that the visible events in this place are advertising. Now, the substitute shadow puppets. I had one piece of information nobody else had and about 3 months to use it. So let me lay out the timeline the way I knew it and the way the sect experienced it. What the sect knew. The corpse pit was contested, prices were volatile, everyone wanted puppets. What I knew. The sect was going to announce a loss of the pit, prices would crater, and then, later, they would announce it retaken. I'd been in the library on the wrong side of both, so I went to Hui Heng. Yes, that Hui Heng. Alive, healthy, 6th layer, in his good boots, 3 years before he'd get anywhere near Serpent Bloom Island, with no idea that I had already watched him kill 13 people and had personally blown his face off. I let him call me junior brother. I let him get all the way to the marriage pitch, and then I told him, with the nervous energy of a young man who has heard something he shouldn't have, that I had it on good authority the corpse pit was about to change hands. He went very still. Then he asked me how much I wanted to put in. I said I didn't have anything to put in, which was true, and he offered to lend me 2,000 contribution points at a rate I won't repeat. And I accepted, and I was not tricking him at that moment. Everything I told him was accurate. He made a fortune on it. That's what made the rest work. The market did exactly what I remembered. 200 points a corpse, then 300, then 5, then a manufactured crash on a rumor which shook out the nervous ones, and then a real war scare, and then 1,000, and then 3,000. And by the end of the 2nd month, there were outer disciples in my sect who had never held a spirit stone walking around discussing yield curves. Everybody got rich. That is the bit people forget about a bubble. It isn't a scam that fools some people. It's an event that pays everybody, right up until the second it doesn't. Hui Heng cashed out at 2,800, which was smart. Then he watched it go to 3,002, and he re-entered with everything, which was human. I sold at 2,000, 10 times my money, a little over 20,000 contribution points, and I spent the same afternoon walking the entire loan back into the Sanhe Association's window in one lump, in front of witnesses. Because I had discovered in my 3rd life exactly what the collateral is on those loans, and I have never carried one since. 15 days later, the sect leader announced the pit had been retaken. The market went from 3,200 to 50 in about a quarter of an hour. I sat on the cliff outside my cave that night and watched the mountain, and it was the quietest I've ever heard the outer sect. No shouting, just every so often, somewhere out in the dark, a small, hard light where somebody's cave had gone up. Because a cultivator who has lost everything can at least choose the manner of it. Nobody stopped it. Nobody counted them. I've thought about my share of that a lot. Here's where I've landed, and you can do what you like with it. I didn't inflate that market, I didn't announce the pit lost, and I didn't announce it retaken, and I didn't set the timing on either. And the men who did are still up on that cloud sea with very good tea. But I knew, and I sold at the top. And the people I sold to lit up the mountain. I'm not going to pretend that keeps me awake. It doesn't. I'd just rather say it out loud than have you notice I skipped it. Hui Heng came to my door about a week after the crash. He'd lost everything. Not most of it. All of it. Plus the loan he'd taken to re-enter. And he had that awful bright cheer that men get in the first week of a catastrophe. And he had a proposal for me, which was an ancient cave, recently surfaced, quiet, only the promising ones, Serpent Bloom Island, 3 years early because I'd wrecked him 3 years early. I told him I was very sorry and that I was just an outer disciple and that frankly, I'd been lucky. And I made myself as small and as boring and as useless as I have ever made myself in 10 lifetimes. He believed it. He'd needed to. Then he went off to find 14 other people. I spent the next stretch on housekeeping, pills up to the 6th layer, purchased openly, cheaply, nothing that draws attention. And the cleansing pill, 40 points, which cured my syphilis. Yes, I actually had it. The body came with it. That's why the line worked so well for 3 lifetimes, because I have never once had to fake the sincerity. And I want the record to show that curing it was a genuine strategic loss. And then I went to see Guo Tian, and this time, I got there first. I came into the library 2 days before the crash, and I told the old man in the chair to sell. He looked at me over the melon seeds for a long moment. He asked me what I knew. I said nothing, which he correctly identified as a lie. And then he asked me why I was telling him, which is a question I did not have a good answer to, and still don't. He sold. All of it. 40 years of savings, out at 3,000 and change. 2 weeks later, he had me in the back of the library with a jar of something that could strip paint. And he was crying a little, and he was 90% of the way to being the only friend I had in that sect. That's the night I got the 3 techniques, because I asked him. I told him I wanted the ones nobody takes, not the good ones, the ones on the shelf that make librarians make a face. And he sobered up faster than I've ever seen a man sober up, and he asked me if I was in trouble. And I said I was in a hurry, and he said those were the same thing here. Then he told me about 3 high-cost divine abilities in the sect's archive that nobody had drawn in a century. He talked for 2 hours. 2 of them I'm saving for later, because they matter later. The one I took was the Heavenly Demon Blood Transformation Divine Light. Here's what it does. You flay yourself, all of it, alive. Then you take your own skin and you feed it over 81 days into a treasure of your choosing, while your unskinned body sits in the middle of the formation staying alive on chi and spite. At the end of 81 days, if you are still there, you are no longer exactly a person. You are a blood shadow, and the treasure is your anchor. And as long as the treasure is intact, you do not die. Cut off a limb and it comes back. Take off your head and it comes back. Kill you and the shadow just goes home and puts its skin back on. The costs in the order the manual lists them. Your lifespan is halved. Your cultivation is permanently frozen at whatever layer you entered at. Not slowed, frozen. You will never advance again in this body for the rest of your life. That second one is why nobody takes it. That is a career-ending clause. That is the entire reason it sits on the shelf. I read it 3 times and then I laughed so hard I had to sit down on the library floor. Because Guo Tian had told me the secret 2 weeks before and hadn't known he was telling me anything. The dangerous techniques are dangerous because they cost you something you can only have once. Everyone in that sect had exactly 1 lifespan and exactly 1 cultivation ceiling. I had 97 pages. I bought it that afternoon. Full price. Cash. The 81 days are not something I'm going to walk you through in detail, and that's not modesty. I've described most of my deaths to you already. This one I've only ever described once, to someone who needed to know, and afterwards he stopped asking me questions for a year. The short version is this. You cannot be unconscious. The technique requires you to direct the transfer with your own intent, continuously, which means you have to be awake, which means you have to be there for it. There's no pill for it. There's no seal for it. The manual says, in the driest possible language, that the practitioner should prepare a cloth for the mouth. I used a rag off my own robe. I did the left forearm first because I thought it would be easier, and it was not. And about 6 hours in, I understood that the pain was not going to be the hard part. The hard part was that it had to be done well. A sloppy transfer wastes the material, and there was exactly 1 set of material, and it was on me. So I got good at it. Around day 9, I was better at flaying a human being than most butchers, and the human being was me, and I was still doing quality control. I chose the sword pellet as the anchor, small, portable, already bound to my chi, and it goes where I go. Somewhere around day 50, the pain stopped being an event and started being weather. Somewhere around day 65, I stopped being able to tell the difference between the chi in the formation and the chi in me, which the manual says is normal, and which is also more or less the definition of losing your mind. On day 81, the formation went out. The thing that stood up in that cave was a shadow the color of old wine with no face and no edges, and it stood there for a while getting used to having a shape. And then it reached down and picked up its skin and put it back on. It fit. That's the detail that finished me. It fit perfectly, like a coat off a hook. And then, standing there in my own reassembled body in a cave that had smelled like an abattoir for 3 months, I broke through to the 7th layer. Late stage, on the spot, off nothing but 81 days of not stopping. I have gone up realms on divine treasures and stolen legacies and the corpses of better men, and none of it has ever felt like that one. Because that one was not a resource. That one was just the price of admission for a thing I had decided to do. Then, because my cultivation was now frozen forever, I never advanced in that body again. Worth it? Ask me in about 400 years. I took the pellet up above the cloud sea to test it 2 nights later, and that is where I met Ye Lei. The Divine Firmament sword control at full charge puts out hundreds of sword lights at once. They come off you in a sphere. Every one of them is a killing edge, and none of them are where you're actually standing. And the correct response is to die. He dodged. A skinny kid, maybe 16, outer sect robes, and when the sphere came off me, he pulled a little gray banner out of his sleeve and folded sideways out of the world, and reappeared 40 meters away looking mildly inconvenienced. Void escape flag, a treasure that takes you out of space itself for a heartbeat. There are Foundation establishment true persons in this sect who do not own one. Then he apologized to me for being in the way of my practice. And when I stood there with my mouth open, he got embarrassed and offered me the flag as a gift to make up for interrupting. I'm not going to dress that up, but I also ran the chi viewing technique on him while he was handing it over, and here's what I saw. Every single object on that child was glowing. The pouch, the belt, the pin in his hair, the soles of his shoes. He was not a boy carrying treasures. He was a boy upholstered in them, and he had no idea. And he was giving one away to a stranger because he felt rude. That's when I threw out my theory. I'd spent 2 months certain that Yi Lei was a plant, an actor, somebody's nephew, propped up in front of the sect with a rigged lottery ticket for reasons above my rank. He wasn't acting. Nobody is that good. The kid was genuinely, ludicrously, physically lucky. Things fell into his hands. He drew the impossible fish because the fish came to him. And the sect had noticed. And the sect had put him on stage in front of everybody with 1 billion points of pool, and I did not yet understand why. I understood the shape of it though. When somebody in the Primordial Saint Sect makes you visible, it is never a reward. It's a lure. I just hadn't figured out what they were fishing for. I'd find out in about 6 weeks, standing on his corpse. Yi Lei asked me to go to the karma pool with him, not for a share. He'd already won everything a person can win there. He wanted company, because he'd been in the sect 4 months, and nobody had spoken to him like a person since the day the pool paid out. And he'd decided the man who nearly cut him into ribbons at midnight seemed friendly. That's the kind of judgment he had. I want that on the record before I tell you the rest. We got about 2/3 of the way up 10,000 Treasures Peak. The path there runs through open cloud sea, which is beautiful, and which is also the single worst terrain in the sect for anybody who wants to be somewhere else quickly. No cover, no walls, nothing but a stone road on a spine of rock with a lot of very pretty nothing on both sides. They came out of the nothing, 13 of them, in a spread, in the formation you use when you don't want to fight, you want an arrest. And at the front, in very good clothes, smiling the way she smiles, was Xuelan, which is when a great many things I'd been carrying around separately clicked into one shape. The substitute shadow puppet crash hadn't just burned outer disciples, it had burned inner ones. It had burned people with rank and connections and 11 years of savings. And the sect's answer to a few hundred ruined cultivators had been to do precisely nothing, because the sect's position is that a market is a market. So the ruined ones had gone into business. That's what was standing on the road, not bandits. 13 respectable members of the Primordial Saint Sect bankrupted in the same 15 minutes, who had made the entirely rational decision that the fastest way back to solvency was standing right in front of them wearing every treasure he owned. And next to Xuelan, holding her arm, was Fairy Fei Yan, alive, whole. 3 years from an island she was never going to see in this life because I'd wrecked Hui Hung early and the expedition had never gone. She'd landed on her feet the way people like her do. She'd found a stronger patron. She looked at me and did not recognize me at all, which is the single most useful thing anyone has ever done for me. Xuelan was polite about it. She's always polite. She explained that senior brother Ye had been very fortunate, and that fortune is a communal resource, and that if he handed over his storage pouch, there'd be no unpleasantness. Then she looked at me and added, in the same warm tone, that the other one could be processed as well. Processed, not killed. She had genuinely just done the inventory in her head. Yi Lei stepped in front of me. I need you to understand how ridiculous that was. 16 years old, 3rd layer, in a robe he hadn't grown into, standing between a 7th layer blood shadow and 13 armed adults. And what he did next was press something into my hand behind his back. A treasure-breaking cone. One use. It punches a hole in any formation smaller than a mountain, and it is exactly the tool you'd need to get off that road. Then he said, quietly, that he'd hold them and that I should go. And I stood there and worked out in about 2 seconds what was actually being offered. Because I've made that offer. I know what it costs and I know what it buys. And it does not buy the other person's life. 13 people are not going to watch one man run and shrug. Whoever leaves that road first has their back to it. The heroic sacrifice was a lightning rod, and he was handing me the rod. I don't think he'd worked that out. I think he genuinely meant it. That somehow makes it worse. I also worked out one more thing while I was standing there, and this one I've never gotten comfortable with. I was on that road because a lucky child had asked a stranger to walk with him. He had asked me because he was alone, and the reason he was alone was that the entire sect had watched him win a 100-year pool and decided he was a walking prize. And 13 ruined cultivators had been sitting in the clouds for a week waiting for him to travel. He didn't need a friend. He needed a shield. He just didn't know that's what he was shopping for. I took the cone. Then I went the wrong way. Because this is the only part of my 4th life I'd do again exactly. I did not turn and fight 13 people. I let them take me. I went at them in a straight line with a bad sword form and a lot of shouting. And I made it about 4 steps before somebody caught my collar and threw me into the middle of the group, which was the entire objective, because I needed to be surrounded by all of them at once. And that is difficult to arrange politely. Then I set off the heavenly demon blood transformation divine light. It comes out of you as a red wind. There's no explosion. That's what nobody expects. It's quiet and it's fast. And it goes through robes and armor and defensive talismans without touching any of them. because it is not looking for those. It's looking for the part of you that is warm. 12 of them came apart from the inside in about the same second. Not corpses, skins. 12 empty sets of very good clothes, standing up for a moment in the wind on a stone road, and then not. The wind came home and put its face back on. Xuelan survived it because Xuelan always survives the first move. She had a light around her before the red wind reached her. And she came out of it with her hair down and her sleeve gone, and for the first time in 3 lifetimes, no smile on her. And behind her, Fairy Feiyan threw down a cloth. I'll give her this. Feiyan was fast and she was good, and the 9 Palaces skylocking cloth is a genuinely excellent piece of work. It came out of her hand as a square of silk and unfolded into a grid across the whole road. 9 cells, each one its own little world with its own rules about where up is. It caught me in the 3rd cell. It also caught 4 of her own side, which was fine because there weren't 4 of her own side left, which she hadn't looked up long enough to notice. That's when Xuelan took out the banner. I'd like to tell you I recognized it. I didn't. What I saw was a thing of gray cloth on a black pole, about the length of a forearm, and when she shook it out, the light on that whole stretch of cloud sea went thin, like somebody had put a lid on the sun. The Primordial Chi Myriad Spirit Banner. You put souls in it, cultivators mostly. They keep their techniques and their instincts and some fraction of their minds, and they come out when the holder shakes the pole. And they do not stop because they cannot be tired and cannot be scared, and are, in the most literal sense, already finished. Xuelan had a lot of souls in that banner. She called out one. He came out as a young man in white with a very calm face, maybe 22, and the chi that came off him was not a banner spirit's chi. It was 3rd grade. It was cleaner than anything on that road, including mine, and when he moved, the air moved politely out of the way. Xuelan said his name like she was introducing him at a banquet. Li Xiaobo. I did not know the name then. Here is what it means, and it belongs here because it changes the shape of everything that happens for the next 6 lifetimes. Li Xiaobo was a true disciple of Heaven Mending Peak, not an outer disciple, not a named one, a true disciple, direct line, and the son of the Heaven Mending Peak Master, who is one of the 4 peak masters of the Primordial Saint Sect, and a Foundation Establishment true person, and, at that point in my life, roughly as far above me as weather. He had gone missing 11 years earlier. There had been a search. It had been extremely thorough and completely fruitless. He was in a banner, on a pole, being carried around by a mid-ranking outer affairs officer who had killed him and who had never been caught and who was standing on a road in broad daylight waving him at people. I asked her how, and Xuelan, who has never once lied to me, told me while her banner spirit was busy taking me apart. She said the innate hermit gave it to her. She said it the way you'd mention a difficult relative, some ancient thing, long dead or long hidden, that had reached down into the outer sect and handed a nobody a legacy she had no business holding, and had done it, as far as she could tell, entirely out of spite for somebody else. She had not been chosen. She had been used as a message. She'd worked that out years ago, and she had decided, in her cheerful, practical way, that a message with a soul banner attached is still a soul banner. Then she noticed her formation had holes in it because most of her formation was standing around on the road as empty clothes. And she solved that problem the way she solves every problem. She turned and killed Fairy Feiyan, mid-sentence, from behind, slotted her soul into the gap in the 9 Palaces grid like a man putting a coin in a slot. And the grid closed, and I heard Feiyan get out about half of the word senior. I have known a lot of monsters. Most of them wanted something. Xuelan is the only one I've met who was simply extremely good at her job and had never once been told to stop. Li Xiaobo was killing me at this point, in the 3rd cell, competently. That's when Ye Lei set off his real one. I'd seen every treasure on that boy, and I had missed this, which tells you what it was. It came out of his sleeve as a model the size of a thumb, and it went up into the sky over the cloud sea and unfolded, 9 stories, gold on gold. And the light off it hit the underside of the clouds and turned the whole sky the color of a temple lamp. A 9-story pagoda, a genuine spirit treasure. There were maybe 6 of those in the outer sect. There may have been 6 in the entire sect. A 3rd-layer disciple was holding one because things fell into his hands. He looked at me across a road full of empty clothes, and I saw him make the decision. He wasn't confused about it. He knew what the pagoda was, and he knew he could not use it, and he knew what setting it off would do. Then he set it off. The top of that mountain is a different shape now. Everybody on that road died. Xuelan died. Li Xiaobo, who was already dead, was scattered so thoroughly that his banner spirit had to be recalled in pieces. The 9 Palaces cloth went to ash with Feiyan still inside it. 13 ruined cultivators, 1 outer affairs officer, 1 banner spirit, and 1 child of destiny in a single event in under 4 seconds. And I stood up. Because I am a blood shadow, and my anchor was a sword pellet, and the sword pellet was fine. That's the entire trick. It's not toughness. There is nothing heroic in it. The thing that got hit by a spirit treasure was a body, and the body is a coat. I walked around on that ruined spine of rock for a while, putting myself back together, and I picked up the Primordial Chi Myriad Spirit banner out of a crack in the stone. and I picked up Fei Yan's formation manual, the secret explanation of the treasure formation, which had somehow survived because manuals always do. And then I found Ye Lei. He wasn't dead yet. He'd been at the center of it, and he had 4 spirit treasures worth of protection on him, and it had bought him about 90 seconds. He was lying against a rock with his legs the wrong way, and he was still awake, and he recognized me, and he was, I promise you, relieved. He said good. He said he'd been worried I hadn't gotten out. I sat down next to him, and I ran the transfer. I took everything he had left, his chi, his foundation, the last of a lucky boy's cultivation, out of a body that had about a minute left in it either way, and into mine, where it did nothing at all, because my cultivation was frozen forever on day 81, and would not move for any amount of fuel. I did it anyway. It's not waste if you're the one holding it. He knew what was happening. He didn't say anything about it. Near the end, he asked me if the pagoda had worked, and I said it had worked, and he said good again, and that was it. Here's what I noticed while it was happening, and it's the only reason I'm telling you this part instead of skipping it. The light went out. Every treasure on him. The pouch, the belt, the pin, the shoes. That soft glow I'd seen in the dark 2 nights before, the one that made him look upholstered in fortune, was gone before his heart stopped. Not scattered, not damaged. Switched off, like somebody had reached over and taken it back. I was still thinking about that when the sky changed. There is a specific feeling when a foundation establishment true person arrives, and I'd only felt it once before, from very far away, and everything in your body wants to get on the ground. He came down out of the cloud sea in a red robe with his hands behind his back. Taoist Jiangbei, vast fortune they call him, and he had the pleasant, unhurried manner of a man arriving at a fishing spot he visits every week. He looked at 13 sets of empty clothes. He looked at the crater. He looked at Ye Lei. And then he made a small sound of professional disappointment, the way you'd sound if a delivery arrived cracked. Then he explained it. Not to me, he was talking to himself while he checked his catch, and I happened to be standing there. Ye Lei's luck was not his. It had been lent. There is a thing you can do at a certain height where you take a great mass of accumulated fortune and you pour it into a nobody. And for a season, that nobody becomes the most blessed creature alive. Things fall into his hands. Impossible fish come to his fingers. And then, when the loan matures, it drains out, and the vessel dies of the perfectly ordinary bad luck he should have been having all along. They'd done it to fish the karma pool. The colored karma fish was not a prize. It was something an immortal master wanted out of a century-old karmic pool that he could not reach into himself, and the correct tool for retrieving it was a mortal boy with enough borrowed fortune to draw it by accident, in public, so that the sect would see a legend instead of a transaction. The 1,000,000,000 points were the tip. The boy was the rod. The whole broadcast was so that nobody would ask what the fish was for. He'd been dead from the day he won. Taoist Jiangbei turned around and looked at me for the first time. I have never been read like that before or since. He didn't touch me, and he didn't speak. He simply looked, and I felt something go through my history the way you'd flip a ledger. And I stood there absolutely certain that he was about to find the book of 100 lifetimes, and that my 4th life was going to end in the next 2 seconds. He didn't find it. I still don't fully know why. My best guess, 6 lifetimes on, is that the book doesn't sit in my karma at all. It sits somewhere further in the place a soul goes when it stops. It isn't a treasure I carry, it's the thing that happens to me. What he did find was a 7th-layer disciple who had permanently frozen his own cultivation and burned half his lifespan for a self-resurrection trick, and he lost interest, out loud. He actually said it out loud, to nobody, in the tone of a man setting down a fish that's too small. A blood shadow. Ah, a dead end. Then he took the innate Tao book off Shulan's remains, because that had been his all along, and he'd only ever loaned it downward, and he went back up into the clouds, never asked my name. I have never been so happy to be insulted in my life. I lay flat on a rock for a while afterward, and grinned at the sky like an idiot, but I also went down that mountain with the actual lesson, and it's the one that runs under my next 5 lives, so here it is plainly. I had spent 4 lifetimes thinking I was in a competition. Disciples against disciples, outer against inner, get stronger, get treasures, climb. We aren't competing, we're stock. There is a pond, and there are fish in it, and the fish spend their whole lives arguing about who owns which corner. Above the pond, there are men with rods, and they are not cruel, and they are not even paying much attention. They are simply fishing, and every so often one of them needs a particular fish out of a deep spot, so he baits a smaller fish with borrowed fortune and drops it in and waits. Ye Lei was bait. I'd been bait twice and hadn't noticed either time. I bought the 9 Transformations Dragon Transformation art off Huiheng about 2 months later. He was still ruined. He'd never gotten to the island, so he'd never gotten the 3rd grade technique. But that isn't quite what I said, is it? He had it in this life the same way he'd had it in the last one, because a man like that finds his way to a soul blade eventually, and he'd found his way to a different island with fewer recruits and a smaller prize. He sold it to me for 1,500 contribution points, because the Sanha Association was at his door, and because a 3rd grade technique is worthless to a man who has to hand over the proceeds before sundown. He called me junior brother the whole time, 14 times. I counted again, and then I spent 20 years in a cave. Give that its proper weight, because it sounds like a sentence, and it was a decision. My cultivation was frozen, my lifespan was halved, which meant I had about 40 years total, and I'd used up 18 of them. I could not get stronger. So I got better at something that doesn't care how strong you are. Formations. Feiyan's secret explanation of the treasure formation is a genuinely great manual, and it has a personality problem, which is that the man who wrote it was a comedian. Page 3 is a diagram of a 9-point array with an annotation underneath explaining that this configuration cannot exist, and inviting the reader to construct it anyway. It took me 2 months. When I finished it, the ink on the next page changed, because of course it did, and what it said was that the exercise had no practical application and had been included to humble the reader before the real material began. I laughed for about 10 minutes, and then I went back to page 4. And I stayed on that book, and the 11 after it, for 2 decades. Rank 9 Formation Master, Sect certified, at the end, which cost me a bribe in an afternoon. Formations are the only art in this world that does not ask what layer you are. A formation asks what the ground is like, and how much time you had, and whether the other man walked in through the door you left open. I have killed things 10 realms above me with a chalk line and 40 minutes of preparation, and I have never once regretted the 20 years. I spent the last 4 of them building one thing, an array treasure, a formation with no ground under it, folded into an object so that it deploys the instant I want it and needs no chalk and no time and no door. Everybody knows the theory. Almost nobody does it because you have to inscribe the entire structure by hand into a medium that fights you. And the medium in this case was my own sword pellet, and it took 4 years. I finished it at the age of 40, in the dark, with my hands shaking so badly I had to brace my wrist with my other arm. Halved lifespan. That's what 40 means for me. I'd known the date for 22 years. The blood shadow started to dissolve about 2 hours before the end, which is not something the manual warns you about. And the last thing to go was my hands. Whatever runs that technique understood the assignment. I set the final stroke with about a minute of life in me. The Blood Sun sword pill lit up on the table, deep red, turning slowly. 20 years of work in a thing the size of a plum. I sat and looked at it for the whole minute. Then I put my head down on the table, and this is the only one of my deaths that I have ever described as a good one. Page 96. Thumb, wrist, mountain. I took the treasure. Obviously, I took the treasure. 20 years of my life were sitting in that plum-sized ball of red light, and I would have carried it out of a burning building over my own mother. So my 5th life started with a first layer body and no cultivation and no lifespan and no allies. And one array treasure that a rank 9 formation master had spent 4 years inscribing by hand. The Blood Sun sword pill deploys with a thought. No chalk, no ground, no 40 minutes. I ran the substitute shadow puppet play again, and this time I did it alone. Because I no longer needed a rich idiot to front me capital. Because a rank 9 formation master can walk into the Hall of Merit on day 1 and take contracts that pay 60,000 contribution points. Then I did something that horrified 2 separate shopkeepers. I dispersed my own cultivation. Everything I had, gone, on purpose, in an afternoon. And the reason matters because this is the move that separates my first 4 lives from every life after. Every cultivation technique in this world is a road. The 4th grade garbage on the free shelf is a cart track. It goes somewhere. It takes forever, and where it goes is a village. The 9 transformations dragon transformation art is a 3rd grade technique out of a foundation establishment legacy, and it is a paved highway, and the entrance ramp is at the very beginning. You cannot merge onto it later. That's the whole problem. Once you have built a foundation with one method, your chi has a shape, and the shape is wrong for every other method forever, which is why cultivators cling to whatever they got at 15, and why Guo Tian has been at the 7th layer for 140 years, and why an entire world of people who live for centuries will not spend 3 of them fixing the worst decision of their lives. I had 96 pages. 3 years to get back to where I started is not a cost, it's a Tuesday. So I burned it all down and rebuilt on the true dragon path. And 38 months later, I was at the 6th layer again, with a body that had stopped being a body in any sense the sect would recognize. 9 transformations, 9 forms, and each one grants a power while you hold it. The fish gives you water, the serpent gives you a body with no joints to break, the jiao gives you weather, and so on, up a ladder that ends somewhere I could not see from the bottom. And the flying fish, the first one, does something the manual mentions in one line and does not explain, which is that it breaks a bottleneck. Not helps with, breaks, once, on demand. I did not use it. For 3 years, I sat on the single most valuable button available to a chi refining cultivator and did not press it. And that took more discipline than the 81 days did, because a bottleneck breaker is only worth anything at a bottleneck that matters. I was saving it for foundation establishment. 96 pages of patience. I'd like some credit for the patience specifically. Hui Heng found me in the 3rd year. He did not come alone, and he did not come with 14 recruits. And that was my first sign that something in the world had gone sideways. Because in every previous life, Kuei Heng's entire method was volume. He came with 6 people, and one of them was Ling Qiankun, inner sect, 9th layer, the kind of cultivator who gets pointed out to newcomers. And he came up the path to my cave with the flat, professional calm of a man executing a warrant. And the first thing he said to me was not a threat, it was a question. He asked me where Serpent Bloom Island was. I said I had no idea what that was, which was, in the narrow legal sense, a lie. And Ling Qiankun said, without any particular heat, that Serpent Bloom Island had ceased to exist 11 months ago. Not sunk, not raided. It was on the maps, and the lake was there, and the island was not. And the legacy inside it had never been recovered by anyone in this generation. And a master had done a karmic deduction on the whole affair and gotten one answer. The technique had already been taken, out of sequence, before the island's fate matured, by somebody who had learned the 9 transformations dragon transformation art years earlier than the world's causality had budgeted for. And when the karma of a thing gets taken early, the thing goes with it. I had bought that manual off a bankrupt Kuei Heng in my 4th life, and I had carried the knowledge across a page. And in doing so, I had reached back and pulled the island's entire destiny out of the water like a plug out of a drain. That is the moment I understood that karma in this world is not poetry, it's plumbing. And I had just been identified by a Foundation establishment true person as a leak. Then Ling Qiankun showed me why they'd sent 6. He had a golden mirror, and when he turned it on me, the chi concealment art came off like wet paper. 6th layer, it said, out loud, in a voice. And it also said, blood shadow, which I did not have this life. And it also said, formation master rank 9, which I had never once put on a form. That mirror had my file. He had a primordial magnetic gold seal, which is a slab of metal about the size of a book that makes flying swords weigh what they actually weigh. My sword pellet dropped out of the air and lay on the stones like a dead bird, and the 4 disciples behind him had each swallowed a soul-binding pill, which chains their lives to Ling Qiankun's, so that if he dies, they die. Which sounds cruel until you realize what it actually does, which is make it completely pointless to pick them off. Every tool I had ever used in 4 lifetimes had a counter standing on my doorstep. Not that they were strong, that somebody upstairs had sat down with a complete inventory of my methods, including methods I had used in lives that no longer existed, and had briefed a squad. I had been read, so I used the one thing that had never happened in this world. The blood sun sword pill came off my palm and the sky went red. Here's the thing about an array treasure built by a man with 20 spare years and a halved lifespan. Nobody can calculate it. The deduction techniques these people use follow cause back to effect, and every cause of that object was in a life that ended. There is no thread to pull. As far as heaven was concerned, that formation had no history at all. It simply began, on a mountain path, that afternoon. The Bloodbath Heavenly River Sword Formation is a river. That's not a metaphor. It comes out as a band of red about 40 meters wide, and it goes around the whole engagement like a moat. And it is made of sword chi, and it moves, and the current has opinions. And the reason it is not simply a very good formation is that there is a formation master inside it. Every fixed array in the world has a weakness, which is that it is fixed. You find the eye, you break the eye, you go home. But the Blood Sun Sword pill has no eye, because the eye is me, walking around inside my own river, adjusting. Kuei Heng went in the first 30 seconds. He had puppets. He always has puppets. Puppets substitute for one lethal event. They do not substitute for standing in a river of sword chi, because a river is not an event, it's a condition. And the puppets went off one after another like a string of firecrackers, 5 of them. And then there was no 6th, and there was a great deal of Kuei Heng distributed along about 100 meters of current. 4 soul chain disciples went with him, because I killed Ling Qiankun's escort last, and by then their pills had done exactly what pills do. Ling Qiankun himself lasted 9 minutes. That's genuinely respectable for a 9th layer in a river. And at the end of the 9 minutes, with the mirror cracked and the seal at the bottom of the current and his own chi coming apart, he did the thing they must all be trained to do. And he reached into his robe and broke a jade tablet. I had about a second and a half to appreciate the view. Then the sky above the cloud sea filled up with a face. It was a face the way a mountain is a rock. It was enormous, and it was calm, and it had the mild, interested expression of a man watching a beetle in a jar. And it did not have to speak loudly to be heard on the entire peak. The heaven-mending peak master, one of the 4, Foundation establishment true person, a person to whom the entire outer sect is a spreadsheet. He looked down at my river of sword chi and my 6 corpses and my 6th layer body, and he said, in the tone of a man confirming a delivery address, that this one would do nicely. And then he explained it to me. That is the detail I've never gotten over. He explained, because Foundation establishment true persons do not talk to chi refining disciples. There is no reason to. But this one had been running a search for 3 years, and the search had a purpose. And the purpose was so mundane that he told me about it out of what I can only describe as good manners. He was shopping for a son-in-law. His daughter needed a match. A true disciple's daughter cannot marry sideways. And what a peak master looks for in a candidate is not talent, because talent is cheap, and not loyalty, because loyalty is purchasable. He looks for karma. He looks for a young man whose cause and effect run thick and strange, who keeps turning up at the center of things, who has an island's fate wrapped around his wrist and can't explain it. Because that's a man whose luck is heavy, and a heavy luck son-in-law can be married into the line, and then, in due course, harvested for the family's ascension. The Master of Heaven Mending Peak had spent 3 years and a squad and a golden mirror finding me, and what he wanted was to make me family. That's the sect. That's the whole sect in one sentence. The single most flattering thing that ever happened to me was somebody deciding I'd make good stock. He told me to kneel and come up the mountain. Somewhere below us, in a cave on that same peak, Xuelan was sitting very still and not coming out, and had not come out in 3 years. Because Li Xiaobo was in her banner, and Li Xiaobo's father was currently taking up the sky. That was the funniest thing available to me at that moment, and I did think of it. I didn't kneel. The honest version of why, because it wasn't courage. I did the arithmetic, the way I always do. Kneel, and I am married into the heaven-mending line and then eaten on a schedule. And the Book of 100 Lifetimes goes into a jade box with me for as long as they find that convenient. And I have already told you what a box does to a man whose only exit is dying. Refusing was the cheaper option. It cost 1 page. So I pulled my river in, all of it, 40 meters of sword chi compressed down into a column, and I swallowed it, flatly. This was not clever. There is no technique where you drink a formation. What I actually did was take the entire output of the Blood Sun sword pill into a 6th layer body for approximately 4 seconds. And for those 4 seconds I was, briefly, the most dangerous object on that mountain. And I went up at the face in the sky with everything I had ever built. It was, objectively, the strongest attack of my first 5 lifetimes. He put out a finger, not a hand. A finger, at the distance of a mountain, in the gesture you'd use to stop a door from closing. And that was the end of my 5th life. Page 95. Let me tell you the 2 things I actually took away from that, because the death itself is not the lesson. First, I had spent 5 lifetimes climbing a ladder inside a system, and I had gotten good enough that the system noticed me. And the instant it noticed me, the correct response of the system was to absorb me. Not kill me, marry me. There is no level of the Primordial Saint Sect where you stop being material. There is only a change in the department that processes you. Second, and this is the one I built the next 5 lives on, he read me perfectly. Every tool, every technique, every method, all of it deduced in advance by someone who has never met me, because everything I do leaves karma, and karma can be read, except the Blood Sun sword pill, which could not be read, because its entire history happened in a life that no longer exists. That's my actual cheat. Not the deaths, not the compounding, not the treasures. I am a man whose causes are in a place they cannot look. Every single thing I do from here is built on that one sentence, and the first thing I did with it, in my 6th life, was go find the woman who refined me into a lump of chi and make sure she never got to smile at anybody ever again. This time, the book gave me something for the way I died. In the last quarter second before that finger arrived, with a river of sword chi in my throat and nothing at all to gain, I had broken a bottleneck in my sword art. Not a big one. It didn't save me. It didn't even land. It was the reflex of a man who was going to die in a moment and use the moment. The book saw it. Talent acquired. Got a few tricks. Purple grade. Purple, not white. 2 full tiers up from the junk drop I'd started with. And the description was 1 sentence, and I read it about 200 times. Any attack that falls within my limits can be handled. That's all it says. There's no number in it, no cooldown, no clause. Within my limits, which means the talent grows exactly as fast as I do, and it does not care what the attack is. And it does not need to know what the attack is, and the answer arrives before I do. It is the perfect defense with a moving ceiling. It also meant that for the first time in 6 lives, I could afford to let somebody swing at me on purpose. So the very first thing I did in my 6th life was solve Xuelan. Here's the deduction, laid out flat, because it's the first time I ever caught one of them with arithmetic instead of a page. Xuelan killed Li Xiaobo, a true disciple of Heaven Mending Peak. Direct line, son of a foundation establishment, true person. And the search that followed was, by every account I ever got, exhaustive. They didn't find him. They never found him. And Xuelan walked around the outer sect for 11 years, cheerful and promotable, with the corpse in her pocket. That does not happen here. Not against a peak master. A foundation establishment true person doing a karmic deduction on his own son will find him under a mountain, in a bottle, in another century. Unless the killer is holding something that cuts the thread. Nobody at her rank owns a thing like that. Which is why she told me, in a life that no longer existed, about a hermit who handed a nobody a legacy out of spite. It wasn't a story about the banner. It was a story about what came with it. So I did not go hunting. I sat in a cave on the outer peak with a 1st layer body, and I let her come to me, because Xuelan always comes. She'd come for me in 3 separate lives on 3 separate schedules, and every single time the trigger was the same, which is that I got interesting. I made myself interesting. It took 11 days. She kicked in the door with her whole entrance ready and stepped into the Bloodbath Heavenly River sword formation, which I had inscribed into the doorframe, and which is not a fight, it's a lid. Then I sat down across from her and ran the transfer. She talked the entire time. Not begging. Xuelan does not beg. She negotiated, all the way down, and the offers got genuinely good near the end. And the last thing she said, when her hand stopped working, was that this was a waste of an excellent product. Then I refined her into the banner, her own banner. I want that understood. The Primordial Chi Myriad Spirit banner was on her belt when she came through my door, and I put her in it. And I did it the careful, slow way that keeps the memories intact. Because a banner spirit with the mind scoured out is a guard dog, and a banner spirit with the mind left in is a filing cabinet with 11 years of outer affairs in it. Shui Lan has been in my banner ever since. 6 lifetimes. Still smiling. Still the best administrator I have ever worked with. And on her body, in an inner pocket, folded into a square of yellow paper the size of a thumbnail, was the thing I'd come for. The innate, primordial, chaos divine talisman. Carry it, and you cannot be deduced. Not obscured, not hidden. The thread of cause and effect that runs from your deeds back to your face simply does not reach the far end. A foundation establishment true person can stand in the room where you did it and get nothing. That is the single most valuable object I acquired in my first 6 lives, and it fits inside a fingernail. Then I called Li Xiaobo out of the banner. He came out the way he had on the road, calm and clean and 3rd grade. And he looked at me with more intelligence than a banner spirit should have, and he made me an offer inside of a minute. He told me about a secret treasure on Gourd Island, location, guardians, method of entry, and a very fair proposal about splitting it, and it was a genuinely excellent pitch, and everything in it turned out later to be true. I annihilated him anyway. Not stored, not questioned, scattered entirely on the spot. And then I sat in that cave for 6 months doing absolutely nothing to confirm that nothing came looking. Because here is what a true disciple of Heaven Mending Peak is, when he is in a banner and offering you a map. He is a thread with a peak master on the other end of it. Shui Lan got away with it for 11 years by never using him. The moment I take his gift and walk to his island, I'm a man moving along a line his father can read. And I have already met that man's finger. 6 months, nothing came. And that's how I learned my 6th life was going to be different. Because for the first time since the thumb on my wrist, I was standing in the Primordial Saint Sect with a clean history, an unbreakable defense, a soul banner, and an object that made me invisible to heaven. So naturally, I spent the next 10 years being extremely boring. 10 years, straight cultivation, no schemes, no bubbles, no islands. 7th layer, late stage, on the true dragon path, plus the formation certification back up to rank 9 because a certificate is a door. That was the point. I was building a resume because I had finally understood the shape of the problem. Everything above chi refining is gated, and the gate is not strength. Foundation establishment requires resources that no outer disciple will ever accumulate honestly, and the sect distributes those resources to people it has decided to invest in. And the way you get invested in is to look like a safe bet. 10 years of good behavior is cheap when you have 94 pages. They came recruiting in the 11th year, and she introduced herself as Fairy xianxia of the Sanhe Association. The Sanhe Association is the private lender that operates inside my sect with my sect's blessing. And it also does trade, security, logistics, and a number of things it does not name. And Fei Xia was at the 9th layer and wore red and had the manner of a very good regional director. The contract was servitude. That's the actual word on it. 20 years, exclusive, with a soul clause. I signed it in front of her without reading past the 2nd paragraph, and she was so unsettled by that she asked me twice if I was sure. Yes, it's 20 years, it's 1 life. I have signed worse things for less. Then I did some quiet reading on her and found the piece that made the whole life worth living. Fairy Fei Xia, in a future that no longer exists, had been Hui Heng's partner, and Hui Heng, in that future, had come out of a place called Skull Mountain Market with a Foundation Establishment artifact. I did not know what the artifact was. I knew the shape of the situation. There was an opportunity attached to that woman and that place on a timetable, and I was now contractually obliged to be nearby for 20 years. I asked for a posting to Skull Mountain. Fei Xia thought I was ambitious. Skull Mountain Market sits in the borderlands right up against the Shenwu sect, which is the local rival, and it is exactly the kind of hardship post you give to a man you are testing. It was also, by my count, 20 years before the war there, and then I asked the Sanhe Association for my signing bonus, and I asked for it in the form of a technique, and the technique I asked for was the true method of tie-in corpse liberation. Fei Xia laughed at me. It's a fair reaction. The tie-in corpse liberation is a great divine ability, which is a tier of technique that outer disciples do not get within a mile of, and it is not one technique. It's an assembly. You build it out of 3 separate superior abilities, each of which is a career on its own, and then you fuse them. And the fusion has a failure rate that the manual describes in a tone I can only call cheerful. What it does at the end is let you die without dying, not resurrection, not a blood shadow. Corpse liberation means that when your body is destroyed, the thing that walks out is you, upgraded, with the death itself as fuel. Let me not dress up why I wanted it, because it took me 2 more lifetimes to admit it out loud. I had 100 deaths and I'd used 6. Every page I spent bought me something, but every page I spent also came off the count, and I had started, somewhere around my 5th life, to feel the number as a weight instead of a cushion. A technique that turns a death into an ascension is not a defensive tool, it's a way to stop paying. Skull Mountain Market is exactly what it sounds like. A trading town built into and on top of a very old battlefield in the neutral strip, where demonic sects and loose cultivators and Shenwu people all buy from each other under a truce that everybody honors right up until they don't. It is protected by the 100 Bones formation, which is genuinely genuinely good work, and which has 4 formation eyes, 1 at each corner. I bought one. Nobody thought that was strange. A rank 9 formation master joining a border market and taking maintenance duty on a corner is the most boring career move available. The Sanhe Association was pleased. It saved them a stipend. And then, over about 14 months, I quietly built a second formation inside the first one. That's the trick, and it's a formation master's trick. And I have never seen anybody else do it because it takes 20 years of theory and a complete lack of self-respect. A market's array is designed to keep things out. Nobody inspects it for something growing inward. I threaded my own structure through the existing one, using their lines, their chi flow, their maintenance budget, until there was a second array occupying the same space as the first with a completely different owner. I called it the Blood Robe. The market took to calling the man in the corner tower the Blood-clad Lord, which was not my idea and which I have never once corrected, because a name people are afraid of is cheaper than a bodyguard. I found Hui Heng there in the second year, broken, genuinely, finally broken, in a way I'd never seen on him in 5 previous lives. No boots, no pitch. He'd been run out of the sect over debts, and he was doing errand work in a border market at 40, and when he saw a Saint Sect disciple in a corner tower, he came over and started calling me junior brother. I let him. I bought him a drink. I bought him a lot of drinks over the next few years. Plainly, I did not forgive him, that I remembered every one of the 13 names off that boat, and that if I could have arranged his death in an alley, I would have done it that week. But he was going to find a Foundation establishment artifact in this market in about 18 years, and a broken man who thinks you're his only friend is the single best surveillance instrument money can buy. 5 years in, I was at the 8th layer, reading a 6th under the Chi concealment art, and I had the first of the 3 superior abilities finished. The second one needed a mysterious yin jade, which cannot be bought. I checked in 3 cities. A mysterious yin jade is a natural formation of pure lunar yin. It takes about 9,000 years to make one, and every single one in Jiangbei is in somebody's vault with a name on it. So I put it on the list and got on with my life, and about a year later, the corpses started walking. Skull Mountain has a horde problem. Everybody knows this. It's a battlefield with a market on it. The yin is thick, and every generation or so, the old dead come up out of the ground, and somebody has to go put them back. This one was early, decades early. Fairy Feixia came to my tower and told me to ride out with the Sanhe Association's people, and she was not asking because she had a contract with my name on it. I said no. She explained the contract. I said no. She pointed out that a rank 9 formation master was exactly what a field operation needs. I said that was true and I still wasn't going. And then, since she seemed to want a reason, I gave her my actual one. I only fight the old, the weak, the sick, and the crippled. She stared at me. I told her I meant it completely seriously. I said that a magical duel between equals is the stupidest thing 2 cultivators can do to each other, that I had never once been in one on purpose, and that everything I owned had come out of ambushes, formations, arithmetic, and other people's funerals. I said if she found me somebody dying in a ditch, I'd be down the stairs in a moment. She called me a coward and left. Correct. Cowardice has kept more of my pages than every technique I own. 2 nights later, Jiang Xinyue brought me the piece that mattered. Yes, again. And this needs explaining, because it is the kind of thing that sounds like sentiment and is not. The Divine Firmament sword control needs a cauldron. The sect ships one with the manual. In this life, as in 3 others, the crate arrived and there was a Jade Pivot Sword Pavilion disciple in it. And it was her, because the sect's supply chain is a supply chain and it makes the same run every year. I took what I needed for the pellet and stopped, same as always. The difference this time was that I had a border market, a corner tower, and a use for someone with a good ear who nobody in Jiangbei would think to watch. So I didn't put her out the back with rations. I put her on the payroll. She hated it. She told me she hated it approximately weekly. She also turned out to be extremely good at it, because a captured enemy disciple who is not being tortured hears absolutely everything in a market full of people who assume she's a slave. What she brought me that night was this: the horde wasn't natural. The Shenwu sect had triggered it, and the thing they'd used to trigger it, which 2 of their outer people had been drinking about within her earshot, was a piece of pure lunar yin about the size of a thumb, a yin moon jade, which is a trade name. The mysterious yin jade was 40 kilometers outside my door, in the hands of a rival sect at the head of a corpse army, in the middle of a war I had just refused to attend. I sat with that for a while, then I stayed in the tower. I want that on the record more than almost anything else in this life, because everyone assumes the story goes the other way. The thing I had been hunting for 6 years was walking toward me under armed guard, and the correct play was to sit in a chair, because a formation master in his own array is a god, and a formation master on open ground is a man with chalk. 11 days later the market fell, and it fell from the inside, and the man who opened the door was Ling Kun, alive in this life, because I'd never fought him in it. Inner sect, 9th layer, and he had been sent out as the Saint Sect's observer with the Sanhe Association's expedition, and the expedition had gone extremely badly, and he had gotten back to the market ahead of the horde with the Shenwu sect's elders behind him, and he opened a formation eye to get in, not to let the survivors in, to get himself in, fast, without waiting for the gate protocol. It took 4 seconds, and it was, in isolation, an entirely understandable thing for a frightened man to do. The 100 Bones formation came down like a dropped plate, and the Shenwu sect came in through the hole with a corpse army behind them, and about 600 people in that market died in the first hour. I sealed it. From the corner tower with the second array, my array, the one that had been growing inside theirs for 6 years. I pulled the blood robe closed over the entire market and reset the perimeter from scratch in under 4 minutes, which is not a thing that can be done, and which I could only do because I hadn't been maintaining their formation for 6 years. I'd been replacing it, and when it was closed, and the screaming outside had turned into the specific rhythm of an army settling in for a siege, I went and found Ling Qiankun. He was in a wine shop under a table. He was not a coward in any way that would have mattered to his own sect. He was a 9th layer inner disciple who had watched a foundation establishment level operation collapse on him, and he had run, and everybody runs. I pulled him out from under the table and told him I'd saved his life. He agreed enthusiastically. I said the market would probably want to talk to him about the formation eye. He agreed less enthusiastically. And then, because he was clever, he skipped the middle of the negotiation entirely and went straight to the part where he opened his storage pouch. And he took out the thing he had personally cut off a Shenwu formation officer during the retreat, and he put it in my hand. A piece of lunar yin the size of a thumb. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I told him nobody would hear about the formation eye from me, which was true, and I went back up to my tower, and I was almost annoyed. 6 years of searching, 200 inquiries, 3 cities, and in the end the man who wrecked everything handed it to me under a table to buy his life. Because that is how this world actually works, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling seeds. The siege lasted 9 days, and on the 9th they sent in Mo Jian. Shenwu sect, true disciple, direct line, qi refining great perfection, which is the top of the ladder I was on, and 2 full steps above where I was standing. And he came in carrying 2 spirit treasures, which at that level is obscene. And it is worth explaining what a spirit treasure actually is before I tell you what happened, because it matters. Everything below foundation establishment uses magic tools. A magic tool is a good sword. A spirit treasure is a thing that has its own opinion about physics. He had the Taizhao mirror, which shows you the true nature of a formation, and the heavenly armor of the Ling Wei, which is a defensive treasure with a detonation clause. He came through the 100 Bones formation in about 40 seconds, which was fair since it was full of holes and I'd stopped feeding it. Then he walked into mine. I watched him figure it out. That's the best part. He got about 200 meters into the market with the mirror up, and the mirror was working perfectly, and it kept telling him the formation he was standing in was broken and defeated and lying in pieces around him, which it was. It just wasn't the formation that was killing his men. He got there eventually. He was not stupid. He turned the mirror sideways, and it stopped seeing the corpse of the 100 Bones array and started seeing the blood robe. And I will admit that his face at that moment paid for a lot of the previous 9 days. Then he came for the corner tower, and I sent Shulan at him. Here is what a banner spirit actually is, in tactical terms, and why the Primordial Qi Myriad Spirit Banner is the single most cost-effective object I have ever owned. A banner spirit does not fear death. It cannot. It has already had the death. So the correct use of a banner spirit is not as a soldier, it's as ordnance. I sent Shulan in with every drop of qi I could pour into her and instructions to detonate on contact. She did, cheerfully. She's very good. And then I shook the pole and she came back out, intact, slightly diminished, ready to do it again in about 90 seconds. I did that 11 times. Mo Jian burned through his defensive layers one after another against a woman who kept exploding on him and then walking back out of a piece of cloth, and around the 8th time I watched a true disciple of a great sect start to look genuinely rattled, which is not something the Shenwu sect trains for. On the 11th he lit the heavenly armor. That is a spirit treasure being spent, permanently, in one go, to buy about 4 seconds of absolute invulnerability and a shove hard enough to leave. It cost him more than the whole siege was worth. He went out of my market in a column of white fire and cleared the wall and kept going. And he did not stop for 1,000 feet, which is exactly as far as I needed him to get. Because while he was busy being on fire, I was doing something upstairs that nobody in that market knew about, and I'd been ready for 6 days. I melted the mysterious yin jade, straight into my dantian, unrefined, no formation, no preparation, in the middle of a siege, which is the sort of thing that kills people. But the jade was the last component, and the manual for the second superior ability had been sitting in my head for 6 years waiting for it, and when 9,000 years of concentrated lunar yin went into me, the whole technique assembled itself in about the time it takes to fall down a flight of stairs. The mysterious yin body-seizing technique. What it does is simple, and I've never met anybody who liked hearing it. When a cultivator burns a treasure or a technique at full output, they leave residue, a trail of their own qi, hot, structured, uniquely theirs. Everybody leaves it. Nobody thinks about it. The way nobody thinks about footprints. The mysterious yin body-seizing technique takes hold of that residue and treats it as an address. Mo Jian had just lit a spirit treasure inside my array. I took his residue in both hands and I split it, vertically, the way you'd have a log. 1,000 feet away, over open ground, in front of his own sect's forward camp, a true disciple of the Shenwu sect came apart from the sky scalped down. Nobody touched him. Nobody was near him. There was no attack, no light, no sound, nothing anyone could point at. One of the great sect's most promising young cultivators simply opened in two in the middle of a retreat. The Shenwu sect lifted the siege that night. Their soul lamp hall had lit up, obviously. That's the other thing about killing a direct line disciple. Somewhere in a dark room on their mountain, a lamp with his name on it went out, and it went out in a way that told them nothing at all about how. Because the innate primordial chaos divine talisman was folded in my inside pocket and had been the whole time. They knew somebody in Skull Mountain Market had done it. They could not find out who. They came back 4 separate times over the following years trying to establish who, and they never got closer than the name the market had already given me, the Blood-clad Lord. Which sounds impressive and which deserves deflating because the man they were hunting was a chi-refining 8th layer disciple who read his 6th and who had never once in his life left the market and who was, at the moment they named him, sitting in a tower doing accounts. I put Mo Jian in the banner. 2 things came out of that. The first was the witch ghost secret realm. His spirit knew about it, and I got it out of him in about a day. And the fact that the Shenwu sect knew and my sect did not was the single largest piece of intelligence I had ever held. There is a secret realm under Skull Mountain, old, sealed, witch ghost Dao, which is a dead lineage nobody has said out loud in 4,000 years. I filed it. I did not go and look. I would like a moment of appreciation for that because I wanted to go and look very badly. The second was the Tai Chao mirror. Spirit treasures have restrictions. That's the whole reason you can't just kill a man and take his. There's a soul brand in it, and if the owner dies, the treasure locks, and prying it open takes a refiner and a furnace and about a decade. The mirror came to me on its own. I mean that literally. I picked it up off the ground where he dropped it, and it warmed in my hand, and the restriction did not fight me at all. And after about 4 days of extremely cautious testing, I worked out why. And the answer is that a spirit treasure has enough of a mind to have preferences, and its previous owner had just been split in half 1,000 feet from home, and the mirror had made a decision about which way the wind was blowing. It behaved, I'm sorry to report, like a dog that had changed households. The restriction was still technically there, so I bypassed it the lazy way. I kept Mo Jian in the banner, and whenever I needed the mirror's deeper functions, I had him operate it. His treasure, his brand, my banner. He was very unhappy about this arrangement for approximately 200 years. An elder came for revenge in the spring. Mo Lei, uncle of the deceased, chi-refining great perfection with the temperament of a man who has been told no for the first time in 40 years. He camped outside Skull Mountain for 6 weeks. He challenged me 11 times, in writing, with escalating insults, and he stood on a hill within sight of my tower and shouted. And he offered terms, and then he offered better terms, and at one point he offered to fight me with one arm sealed. I did not go outside. He genuinely could not process it. That is the piece I enjoyed most. I got a report from Jiangbei, who was picking things up in the market the way she always did, that Mo Lei had been heard asking, sincerely, of no one, what kind of man kills a great sect's true disciple and then refuses to come out of a building? This kind. Hello. He went home in the 7th week. Hui Heng was in a bad way through all of this. He'd been trying to borrow from the Sanhe Association for 2 years, and xianxia had cut him off entirely. And the reason she'd cut him off was me. I was the association's rising asset in that market, and he was a 40-year-old errand runner with a debt history, and xianxia was not a sentimental woman. He asked me to speak for him. I said I would. I didn't. That deserves saying flatly, because it's the kind of thing I'd normally dress up. I did not intend to help him. I told him I would, and I let him spend 3 months believing it, because a man waiting on a favor stays where you can see him. xianxia and I were trading techniques by then, and she gave me one that I have used in every life since. The returning wind and fire talisman. You burn it, and your body and chi return to peak condition. Wounds close. Exhaustion resets. It has a 3-month cooldown, and it is the reason I have won a great many fights I had already lost. And then, in the 4th year of the siege aftermath, Hui Heng walked into my tower with a scroll case and pawned a foundation establishment method, stealing heaven's secrets. 30,000 contribution points, redeemable in 3 months, and he needed the cash immediately. And he was standing in front of me with sweat on him and a story about a cousin. Now. A genuine foundation establishment method is not something a broken errand runner has. It is not something that turns up in a border market. It is not something a man pawns with a 3-month redemption window. It was a hook. Somebody wanted me holding a foundation establishment method with a clock on it, because a man with 3 months to read the most valuable text of his life will travel for a quiet place, or a resource, or an elder's guidance. He will leave the tower. I told Hui Heng I'd take it, and I paid him the 30,000. And then I filled out a deposit form and put it in the Sanhe Association's vault under an 80-year seal. 80 years. Non-negotiable. Unretrievable. By me. By him. By anyone. He stared at me and asked what the point of that was, and I told him the truth, which is the funniest way to lie. I said that a text like this should be read carefully. 80 years is fine. I'll read it next life. That was the winter everything started pulling at once. The Sanhe Association summoned me to their main branch. I declined. Hui Heng started trading on my name in the market, telling people the Blood-clad Lord was backing his ventures, which created 3 separate situations that could only be resolved by me going somewhere. I declined all three, and Fairy Xianxia came up to my tower one evening with wine and no business. She was warm. She had never been warm. She'd been professional for 11 years, and now she leaned on my table and laughed at things that weren't funny. And she asked me why I never went anywhere with her. And it was, in fairness, quite well done. It also felt exactly like being handed a rare technique by a smiling woman on day 10. I've had that feeling 3 times now. I know the shape of it. There is a specific artificial quality to good fortune that arrives on schedule. And by my 6th life, I had learned to treat warmth from a superior as a fire alarm. I thanked her for the wine. I told her the tower had to be manned. She sat there for a moment with her hands still on the table, and something in her face went flat. And then she picked up her cup and left, and she did not speak to me again for 2 years. 6 days later, Huiheng went out to a village on association business and did not come back. I heard him die. That's the detail. The market has relay talismans, and he had one, and he screamed into it for 11 minutes, and the Sanhe Association's response flight went out and arrived exactly as fast as it needed to arrive to be too late. I have thought about it a great deal. Here's my honest reading, and I've never seen a better one. He was not killed for himself. He was killed at me. He was a man everyone knew I drank with, and killing him was the last and crudest tug on a line that had been going for 4 years. And if I had gotten on a flying sword that night to go and look at his body, I would have died within the hour, 40 kilometers from my array, in open country. I stayed in the tower. I don't feel good about it, and I've never claimed to. And in the spring, the whole design finally showed itself, and it was much bigger than a market. Han Kai, Immortal Master, head of the Sanhe Association, foundation establishment, true person, and the man whose signature is on the contract I'd cheerfully signed without reading 11 years earlier because it was only one life. He wanted the Witch Ghost secret realm, not the treasure in it, the realm itself, and the karma attached to it, and specifically the thing sleeping at the bottom, which is a sword that belonged to a golden core true monarch, and has been down there since before my sect existed. And a realm like that cannot simply be opened. It has an inheritance condition. It wants a specific kind of person to come and knock. And the kind it wants is a disciple of the Primordial Saint Sect with a heavy load of karma and a demonic path foundation. He'd been growing one in a border market for 11 years. Everything, the posting, the recruitment, the hardship assignment right on top of the buried realm. The techniques he'd let Xianxia trade me. The foundation establishment method with a clock on it. Xianxia herself, at the end, leaning on my table with the wine. Every single one of them was a hand on my back, pushing me toward a door in the ground. And I had spent 11 years refusing to go outside for reasons that had nothing to do with any of it. He gave up on me that spring. I found out later he'd concluded I was defective, a Saint Sect disciple with no ambition, no greed, and an unexplained refusal to leave a building. So he went and got a different key. He fetched a true disciple of the Jade Pivot Sword Pavilion instead. While all of that was going on, I was running a factory. The details matter here because people always ask how a chi refining disciple in a border market ended up outproducing a sect. And the answer is genuinely ugly and completely obvious. Talismans are the great equalizer of the lower realms. A talisman does not care about your cultivation. It cares about the chi that went into it, and the hand that drew it, and whether you have one when you need it. A cultivator 2 full stages above you can be killed by a man with enough paper. The problem is that drawing them is slow, and it burns your own chi, and a living cultivator gets tired. Banner spirits do not get tired. I had, at that point, about 200 souls in the Primordial Chi Myriad Spirit Banner, Mo Jian's escort, the siege dead on both sides. Assorted contributions from 11 years of a market where people go missing. I put them to work. Shui Lan ran the floor, naturally. She's the best administrator I've ever had, and she took to it immediately. And she organized the whole thing into ships without being asked, and came to me at the end of the first month with efficiency proposals. A banner spirit that draws talismans wears down. The chi that holds them together is finite, and the work spends it, and after enough of it, they thin out and lose the memories, and then lose the shape, and then there's nothing. I asked Shui Lan once whether that bothered her, given her position, and she told me, smiling, in exactly the voice she'd used on a mountain path in a life that no longer exists, that the ones who can't work have no value. I've thought about that answer for 6 lifetimes. She's the only person in this entire story who has been completely consistent from the first day to the last. She was that when she was collecting me. She was that when she was killing Fei Yan to plug a formation. She is that now, on a pole, in my sleeve, running a workshop of the dead. She has never needed to lie about anything, because she has never once wanted something she was ashamed of. The stock in the tower, by the end of that winter, was a little over 500 finished talismans, which is why, when Jiangbei finally came for me, it went the way it did. She came in through the roof of my own tower, which nobody had ever managed, and she did it without breaking the formation, which nobody had ever managed either. Jade Pivot Sword Pavilion. Pale blue, silver trim, the badge I'd first seen on a girl in a crate. True disciple, direct line, and she stood on my floor at Chi refining great perfection with a flying sword she hadn't drawn yet. And she had Jiang Xinyue's face, not similar, the same face, 6 years older and colder by about 40 degrees, and when I said the wrong name out loud, she looked at me with such contempt that I actually apologized. Jiang Miaofen, the elder twin, Follow me through the next 90 seconds carefully because it is the single most informative conversation I have had in 10 lives. She asked me where her sister was. I said in the market, working, unharmed. And I want the record to show I said it in the tone of a man expecting to be thanked. She did not thank me. She asked me to clarify. I clarified. And her face went through something I could not read at all. And then she asked me a question so specific that it took me a moment to understand it was an accusation. She asked if I had used her. I said I'd taken what the sword technique required 6 years ago and stopped. And Jiang Miaofen said, in a voice like a door closing, that I had ruined everything. Here's what I got out of her over the following few minutes, mostly because she was angry enough to explain herself, which people always are when they think the explanation makes them look better. 6 years ago, a Jade Pivot Sword Pavilion outer disciple named Jiang Xingyue had been captured by the demon sect and shipped north in a crate. That had not been an accident. Her own sister sold her, not for money. Nobody in that family needs money. She sold her for a calamity because the sword art that Jiang Miaofen cultivates has a tribulation stage in it, and the tribulation has to be borne by someone of the same blood, and it has to be real. 10 years of genuine ruin taken by a sister, and at the end of it, the elder twin's sword heart is forged, and the younger twin, if she is still alive, comes home. She had planned it out. She had arranged the capture and the route and which market the crate went to. And I had taken half a day's chi and put the girl on a payroll. That was the crime. That is what she came through my roof about. 6 years of a 10-year sentence had gone by, and her sister was not ruined, was not hollowed out, was in fact working in a market, and by all reports, was fine. The tribulation had not taken. The sword heart had not forged. The whole family's investment was sitting there, refusing to depreciate. She said, and I have it word for word because I have never forgotten it, that I had wasted her sister. I stood in my tower and looked at a woman who was genuinely furious that a stranger had been insufficiently cruel to her twin. And I had one very clear thought, which is that I had spent 6 lifetimes assuming the righteous path was the same machine with better manners. I was wrong. Their machine is worse. My sect will render you down for parts. My sect will price your corpse at intake and lend against it. But my sect has never once told me that it was for my own good, and it has never asked me to be grateful. And in 9,000 years, the Primordial Saint Sect has not sold a single one of its own children into ruin as a training exercise. I'm not saying we're better. I'm saying we're honest. And by my 6th life, that had started to feel like an actual difference. Then she pulled me into the sword. The Heavenly Escape Sword makes a pocket. That's its whole function. It opens a space that is not the world, about 100 meters across. And it takes you and whoever it can reach into that space. And inside it, 3 things are true. Formations do not work because there is no ground to root them in. Everything you do costs about 1/3 more. And nobody outside can see, hear, or reach you. She had come specifically prepared to fight a formation master in a place where a formation master is a man with chalk and no floor. That is genuinely excellent tactical thinking, and I'd like to compliment it before I explain why it did not work. Because she also announced, as the walls came up, that she cultivated the Tai Yi Golden Flower Elixir Book, which is a great divine ability, which is the tier I had spent 11 years assembling one of, and which she had simply been given at 15 for being the right person's daughter. And I said, out loud, that this was going to be very difficult for me. Then I opened the storage pouch. 511 talismans. A great perfection sword cultivator with a great divine ability in a sealed space of her own choosing against a man 2 full stages below her whose entire advantage has just been removed. And then it starts raining paper, explosive talismans, binding talismans, frost, wind, sound, blinding. Not one of them a threat on its own. All of them at once, continuously, for 11 minutes, from a man who had 200 dead cultivators drawing them for 4 years and had never once had to pay for the labor. She burned through her defensive treasures in the first 4 minutes. She burned through her sword formations in the next 3. And around minute 9, exhausted and half-blind and being ground down by consumables, she made a mistake. Because I had spent the previous 2 minutes telling her about her sister. Not taunting, I want to be precise. I described Jiang Xinyue's daily routine in the market, where she ate, what she was good at, that she'd taken up carving. Small, boring, entirely true details about a woman who was supposed to have been destroyed 6 years ago, delivered slowly, in the middle of a fight, by the man who'd failed to destroy her. Her guard opened by about a hand's width. I put a nail-head talisman through it, and she redirected it. I have to explain this because it is the worst thing I have ever seen a person do, and it happened in about 1/4 of a second. There is a technique in that family, same blood, shared fate, and it is the other half of the tribulation arrangement. If she takes a wound she cannot survive, she can push it sideways onto her twin. Somewhere in my market, 40 meters below and outside the sword entirely, Jiang Xinyue collapsed at a workbench with a hole through her. Jiang Miaofen did not even look tired about it. She adjusted her sleeve. And then she burned her 3 lights. That's the last resort of a cultivator at that level. Your 3 spirit lights are your essence, your chi, and your spirit, and burning them turns you into a lamp with about 90 seconds of oil. And for those 90 seconds, you are operating a tier above yourself. The true Tai golden flower opened over her head, 9 petals. Real gold light, not the color, the actual weight of it, and it came down on me and erased everything in a 40-meter radius, including the talismans, including the floor of the pocket, including me, except got a few tricks. Purple grade. Any attack that falls within my limits can be handled. The talent had been sitting quietly in the back of my 6th life, doing nothing at all for 11 years. Because I do not get hit, because I only fight the old, the weak, the sick, and the crippled. It had never once been asked a question. It answered this one. I came out of the light standing. I have no idea what it did. That's the truthful answer. There is no technique, no flare, no shield. The attack simply landed within my limits and was therefore handled. And I have stopped asking how, the way you stop asking why your hand catches a cup. Jiang Miaofen had 90 seconds of oil and had spent them on the one man in Jiangbei who could not be spent. I took the Tai Golden Flower Elixir book out of her while the light was still going out. Straight transfer, direct from a cultivator whose defenses were gone, which is the one thing my very first junk talent has always been for. Then I killed her with the Tai Xiao mirror, which she had never once considered. Because a mirror is not a weapon, and she was a sword cultivator, and it had been in my hand the entire fight. The pocket realm came apart. And I stepped back out into my own market and found 3 people waiting for me on the ground, which is when I finally understood the whole shape of the year. Guangji Chu of the Guang family, with the Tai Yi sword, there to collect his cousin. Mo Lei, back for the 7th time, who had apparently just been sitting in the region for 2 years like a stone in a shoe. And a loose cultivator named Wei Hui, at great perfection, who I had never met, never wronged, and who had no reason on this earth to be standing in my market. 3 chi refining, great perfections. All at once, all arriving inside the same hour from 3 different directions on 3 unrelated grudges. That is not coincidence. That is a schedule. Han Kai Immortal Master had spent 11 years trying to push me out of a tower toward a door in the ground, and I had refused every single time, and so he had stopped pushing and started squeezing. If the key won't walk to the lock, put the key under enough pressure that it screams and see what comes up out of the ground to answer. Fei Xia was there too, at the edge, and she had broken through to great perfection herself in the last 2 years. And she watched the 3 of them close on me with the expression of a woman reviewing a line item. She did not intervene. She no longer needed me. That's the association. So I fought 3 great perfections in the open, outside my formation, with no talismans left and a great divine ability I had held for about 4 minutes. I lasted longer than I had any right to. Got a few tricks does not get tired either. And then, in the middle of it, something plucked me. I don't have a better word. There was a sensation like a string being pulled somewhere behind my spine, and my cultivation, which had been sitting at the 8th layer for 4 years, went to the 9th in about 6 seconds, and then straight through into great perfection without stopping, in the middle of a fight, with no bottleneck and no pill and no preparation. The whole market lit up. Column of chi, cracked flagstones, the works. Every cultivator in Jiangbei knows what that looks like. That is the child of destiny treatment. That is heaven itself reaching down and picking a favorite, on stage, in public, exactly the way a colored karma fish comes out of a 100-year pool in front of a crowd. I recognized it instantly because I'd stood in that crowd and I'd watched Ye Lei die of it about a year and a half later. Wei Hui recognized it too. He was a loose cultivator, which means he had survived to great perfection with no sect, no backing, and no safety net, which means he had the best developed instincts of anyone on that field. He turned around and left immediately, without a word, mid-swing. He got about 2 kilometers. Then he ran in a slow circle for a while, and then he stopped. And then he died of chi deviation, with nobody within a kilometer of him. He hadn't been attacked. He'd simply become an obstacle to something that had already been decided. And the world took him out of the way with the disinterest of a man moving a chair. That's when Han Kai Immortal Master arrived. Foundation establishment true person. In gray, no dramatics. And behind him, the ground under Skull Mountain opened. Not a cave, a realm. The Witch Ghost secret realm came up into the world like a bubble surfacing. And it came up because my luck had just been forced to its absolute peak in the exact place it was buried. Because a realm with an inheritance condition needs the right person in the right state. And Han Kai had spent 11 years and 3 assassins arranging that state. I was not a disciple. I was a reagent, and I had just been brought to temperature. There is a sword at the bottom of that realm. It belonged to a golden core true monarch, and it has been asleep down there since before my sect existed. And when the realm opened, it looked at me. This is what that's like, and I can't. It looked at me the way a mountain would look at you, if a mountain could be disappointed. Then it checked something. I found out later what. The sword belonged to a golden core true monarch of a lineage that got exterminated, and it kills demons on sight, and it was checking whether the man standing in its doorway was one. It went back through me the way Taoist Jiangbei had once gone through me, and it found 6 lifetimes of theft and murder and market fraud, and none of that mattered even slightly. What it was looking for was whether I had ever eaten a person's soul for power. The serpent bloom legacy in my dantian is a dragon technique, not a demon one. My banner holds souls, but does not consume them, and the tie-in corpse liberation, which is genuinely horrifying, is a method for surviving your own death rather than causing anyone else's. The sword decided I was, technically, not a demon. It let me go. Mo lay, standing 11 meters away, holding a Shenwu sect grudge and a corpse refining art that he had absolutely eaten souls for, popped like a wineskin. No sound. He was there, and then he was a red mark on the flagstones and a lot of very expensive equipment falling out of the air. Han Kai collected the entire secret realm in his sleeve. Then he turned around and paid me. That is the bit that has stayed with me. He wasn't cruel about it. He wasn't even smug. He gave me the debrief the way a foreman gives you your envelope. And while he was doing it, I got my first proper look at what a Foundation establishment war actually is. The Shenwu sect siege was not a border incident. Skull Mountain Market was not a market. My own sect had been running an operation for 11 years, using the Sanhe Association as the visible hand, and the objective was not the secret realm at all. The objective was the Shenwu sect's immortal masters. All of them. The realm was chum. The whole thing had been arranged so that when the Witch Ghost secret realm surfaced, every Foundation establishment true person in the region would come to it, and my sect's people would be waiting. 11 years, 600 dead in one market, 1 true disciple split in half, 1 elder popped, 1 broken errand runner screaming into a relay talisman, all of it as the setup for one afternoon's fishing. I had been the hook, Wei Hui had been a chair in the way, Wei Hung had been a tug on a line, and Han Kai's payment for 11 years of that was to burn my luck. He was frank about it. Forcing a mortal cultivator's fortune to its peak on demand is expensive, and the cost does not come out of his account. My karmic luck had been drawn 30 years forward and spent in a single afternoon on a bubble surfacing. 30 years of nothing. Not bad luck as a curse, bad luck as an overdraft. He offered me an ascension order as compensation, which is the sect's certificate permitting a Foundation establishment attempt, and which is the single most valuable document available to a chi refining cultivator. I turned it down. I could see his face change when I said it. That was worth the whole 11 years. I asked for a comprehension treasure instead, and I named one because I had spent 4 years reading the association's catalog while pretending to do accounts. The Kai Dao Jade Slip. It doesn't fight. It doesn't strengthen. It sits in your hand and makes you understand things, and there is no ceiling on what things. He gave it to me. He thought I was an idiot. I had 30 years of guaranteed misfortune in front of me and no possible way to spend them safely. And a man who is going to be unlucky for 30 years should not be holding a Foundation establishment certificate. He should be holding a book. The 30 years were, and credit where it belongs, to them, genuinely educational. I got ambushed twice on the road home by men who should not have been able to touch me. Not strong men, ordinary bandits at the 5th and 6th layers who happened to be exactly where I was at exactly the wrong moment, with exactly the one tool that worked on me. That's what burned luck looks like. It isn't dramatic. Nothing tries to kill you. The world simply stops rounding in your favor, and the 10th thing goes wrong instead of the first, and a great perfection cultivator gets cut open by a man with a spear because a stone turned under his foot. So I stopped going outside. Completely. I went back to my sect. I took a cave on the outer peak. I sealed the door. And I stayed in it for 30 years. And for 30 years, a man waited outside. His name was Guo Lin. He was Guo Tian's grandson. And the old man in the rocking chair had died at some point in that stretch, and Guo Lin had inherited an errand along with the library. He had a delivery for me. He came up that path every few months for 30 years. He left notes. He left food early on. He aged, which is the part that got me. He came up at 31 in good clothes with a young man's shoulders. And by the end, he was making that climb at 61 and taking 2 rests. And he had stopped writing anything on the notes except the date. I heard every one of those visits. I was 3 meters away behind a stone door, and I did not open it for 30 years because my luck was overdrawn, and I had absolutely no way to know whether the old librarian's grandson was a friend or a hand on my back. When the 30 years ended, I opened the door and he was sitting on the step. He handed me the package without saying anything. He'd stopped expecting it to matter a long time earlier, and I could see the exact shape of what the weight had done to him, which is that he'd become a man who does the thing he said he'd do and no longer believes in outcomes. I have made a number of arrangements for the Guo family since. In several lives, none of them have ever known why, because in most of those lives, none of this has happened yet. The package was a technique. Guo Tian had told me about 3 high-cost divine abilities in the sect's archive, in a back room, over a jar, in a life that no longer exists. I'd taken one of them and flayed myself with it. This was the second. Saint's Theft. Saint's Theft is not a cultivation technique. That needs saying clearly, because I opened it expecting a technique and spent the first hour looking for the part where you sit down and circulate something. There is no such part. Saint's Theft is a business model. Here is the whole thing. You invent a cultivation system, not a technique, a system from the ground up, with steps and terminology and breathing exercises and a philosophy. Then you get it into a world, any world, a sealed realm, a lower plane, a valley nobody visits. Then you wait while millions of people practice it, and every single one of them, every day, generates a small amount of merit and fortune by walking a road that you built, and you take a cut, not the chi, the luck, the karmic fortune that a living being generates by making progress. You are not stealing from them exactly, in the sense that they still get everything the system promises. You are simply standing at the top of a very long road, collecting a toll they cannot see and did not agree to. The name is honest at least. It's called saint's theft because you are stealing the position of a saint. You become the founder of somebody's Tao. Millions of people thank a name at dawn, and the name is yours, and it accrues. Guo Tian had described it to me over a jar of paint stripper 50 years earlier as the one nobody in the sect could ever use. Because you need a world. And 2 weeks later, the Sanha Association, in settlement of a contract I had signed without reading, handed me one, the law refining secret realm. It is a bottle. It is genuinely a bottle, about the size of a wine jug, and inside it is a world with continents and weather and about 140 million people in it. And the sect's own catalog lists it under materials. That's the word, materials. It's a resource realm. My sect grows things in there. The people are not a side effect of the ecosystem, they are the ecosystem. And every so often, somebody harvests a crop of souls or a batch of spiritual roots, and the bottle goes back on the shelf. And it is configurable. That's what nobody outside expects. You can set the rules. You can raise the ambient chi or lower it. You can decide whether the dead reincarnate. You can, from outside, write physics. I sat in a sealed cave on the outer peak with a jug in my lap containing 140 million people, and I did not feel like a god. No polish on that. I felt like a man who had just been handed the keys to a warehouse full of something he was going to have to live with. Because I had 140 million people in a bottle, and my sect's position on them was that they were inventory. And the righteous path's position, as I had recently learned from a woman who came through my roof, was that a person's worth is decided by who their grandfather was. Something needs saying here, and then I'll get on with it. I am not a good man. I've said the opposite about 9 times so far, and you have correctly not believed me once. But I have now spent 6 lifetimes inside the most openly predatory institution in Jiangbei. And the thing I keep running into is that we at least do not pretend. Nobody in my sect has ever told a boy in a crate that his suffering was for his own growth. Nobody in my sect has ever sold a sister into ruin and been angry that the ruin was insufficient. We price you, we tell you the price, and then we take it. That's the entire difference, and it is not a small one, and I have built every decision since on it. So when I sat down to write a cultivation system for 140 million people, I wrote one that could not be used to grind them. I called it martial Tao. 3 steps, that's it. Bone forging, then blood, then the marrow. And at the top of the 3rd step, a martial artist is roughly equivalent to a chi refining late-stage cultivator, which sounds like an insult until you consider that the realm previously had nothing at all. It costs no spirit stones. It requires no pills. You need food, a floor, and about 9 years of not quitting. And I built in exactly 1 safety valve, which I am still proud of. Martial artists cannot fly. You can be strong enough to break a wall, and you will still walk to the next city like everybody else. You will still have neighbors. You will still live in a town where the people around you can see you eat. Every cultivation system I have ever encountered has the same failure, which is that the moment a person can leave the ground, they stop being from anywhere. They stop having anyone above them, and they stop having anyone beside them. And about a century later, they are a foundation establishment true person putting a finger through somebody's chest and calling it weather. I couldn't fix the world. I could keep the strong ones on the pavement. It took about 11 years to seed and about 60 to take, and I checked on it maybe twice a decade, and it worked, and I got paid. The luck came in like a tide, small, constant, from everywhere. By the 4th decade, I had recovered from Hankai's 30-year overdraft entirely and gone past it, which was the point. Because a man in the Primordial Saint Sect who cannot generate his own fortune is a man waiting to be somebody else's bait, which is when I hit the wall. The tie-in corpse liberation. 3 superior abilities, assembled and fused, and I had all 3, and I had had all 3 for years. The final step of the method is that you have to die, not metaphorically. The technique completes at the moment of death, using the death as the last reagent, and what comes out the other side is you, upgraded, liberated from the corpse. And I cannot die on purpose. I can end a life whenever I want. I have a curse branded into my soul for exactly that, and I have used it. But the moment I die, the page turns, and the book of 100 lifetimes takes me back to a cart with a thumb on my wrist, and everything the corpse liberation was about to give me stays in a life that no longer exists. I sat with that for a long time. There is a version of my story where that's the tragedy. Man with 100 lives cannot use the one technique that makes death survivable because his deaths are already spoken for. I decided it was a scheduling problem and moved on. 30 more years went by, and you should understand that I mean 30 years in a cave with a jug. That's not a montage to me. That was 3 decades of reading, seating, adjusting, and answering absolutely no correspondence. Meanwhile, in Jiangnan, the Jade Pivot Sword Pavilion was solving a problem of its own. They had lost a true disciple. Jiang Miaofen, direct line of the Guang family, dead in a border market with no karma trail and no explanation. and the Glong family had spent 4 years failing to deduce a single thing about it because of a square of yellow paper in my inside pocket. So they spent something enormous. They took the Guang family's old ancestor, who was Foundation Establishment, ancient and already on his second life, and they sent him into a third one, reincarnation, deliberately with the memories preserved. That is not a small operation. A sect does that maybe once a century. He came out the other side as a baby in a mortal kingdom called the Great Zhou, with 60 years of childhood in front of him and every single thing he had ever known still in his head. And they gave him a treasure to take with him. The Jiutian instrument. It hides you from heaven. Whatever it's sitting near cannot be deduced, cannot be traced, cannot be found by divination. It is, functionally, the exact same effect as the little folded talisman in my pocket, at a scale about 400 times larger. So the two of us spent 40 years hunting each other while both being invisible, which is as stupid as it sounds and took approximately as long as you'd expect. He found me first, and he found me through the one thing I could not hide, the karma web. He couldn't see me. He could see the shape of the hole I made. 140 million people were generating fortune every day, and it was going somewhere. And the somewhere was not on any map, and a man with 60 years and a heaven-hiding treasure can sit and watch the drain long enough to work out the size of the thing on the other side of it. He got a name out of it eventually, mine. And then he did something I have genuinely never seen anyone else do, before or since. He decided not to kill me. He worked out correctly that a man who has been sealed in a cave for 70 years cannot be assassinated, cannot be lured, and cannot be reasoned with. And he worked out something else, which is that a man who owns a system does not have to be attacked. He has to be audited. So the Guang family's old ancestor set out to break my cultivation system on purpose in order to force the founder to come out and fix it. He invented the fourth step of martial Tao, not personally. He did it through a proxy, a mortal scholar, in a way that would look entirely native to the realm. And the fourth step he built was genuine. It worked. It took a martial artist past the ceiling I had set and gave him about half the power of a real cultivator. And it did not require spirit stones either. And within about 15 years, there were 7 men in that realm standing at a height my system said did not exist. They called them the 7 Celestials. Look at what he had actually done, because it took me a while to appreciate it as engineering rather than as an insult. He hadn't attacked me. He'd introduced a competing product into my market, and every man who took the fourth step stopped generating fortune for my name and started generating it for the road he was actually walking. He was cutting my revenue to force a management response. So I responded, and I did it the way I do everything, which is from behind a wall with somebody else's face on. I sent a clone, a cheap one. A puppet body with a thread of my consciousness in it, and a storage pouch full of talismans, walking around a lower realm as a wandering swordsman. And the first thing it did was get into a fight with a man called Lei Huo, the martial king, first of the 7 Celestials and the strongest thing in that world. And he had a stance and a school and about 900 students. He was, in the terms of my own sect, roughly a chi-refining 9th layer. I was great perfection with a great divine ability and 70 years of talismans in a bag. I beat him with paper, in front of his students. Not gloriously. I stood in a courtyard and threw consumables at a man who had spent 40 years perfecting a fist, and when he was on the ground, I did not kill him, because a dead martial king is a martyr and a live one is a problem for the other 6. And the old ancestor's counter arrived about 6 weeks later in the form of a book. Somebody, somewhere in that realm, published a text arguing that the immortals above are not gods, that they farm the world below, and that a mortal who slays one and consumes the flesh inherits the road. Slay the immortal, eat his flesh. It swept the realm in a season. And it did exactly what it was designed to do, which was to take 7 extremely powerful men who all hated each other and give them a shared enemy with a face. Mine. Let me skip ahead to the man who actually mattered in all this, because he's the reason I remember that realm at all. Guo Boyuan, the Sacred Heart Scholar, 4th of the 7 Celestials and the proxy the old ancestor had used, and the man who had actually invented the 4th step. He'd done it 40 years earlier, and he had not been well since. I went to see him because he was the only one of the 7 who hadn't come after me, and I found a man in a study in a provincial city who had gone quietly and completely to pieces, and who was not surprised to see me at all. He'd built a divination method, his own, out of the 4th step, which nobody else had thought to point inward, and he had been using it for 4 decades to examine the world he lived in. And what it kept telling him was that the world was a forgery, not that it was false, that it was too good. Every mountain range in a sensible place, every river fed, every dynasty falling on a schedule that made narrative sense. 900 years of history with no loose ends, no dead branches, no waste. He'd run the numbers on natural systems, and natural systems are sloppy, and his was not sloppy anywhere. He'd spent 40 years proving that his home was manufactured, and there was nobody in the world he could tell. And the strain had taken his sleep, and then his health, and then most of his personality. He asked me if I was one of them. I said yes. And he didn't rage. He said thank you, which is the single worst thing that happened to me in that entire lifetime. And then he asked whether the people in his city were real. I told him they were as real as I was, which is true, and which I had thought about a great deal, and which is not actually much comfort from a man who has been dead 5 times. Then I borrowed his method, because I am who I am, and I ran it myself. And it showed me a city, Tianjing. 2 million people, capital of the Great Zhou, and its karma was one solid mass of violent death about 8 months out. Not a plague, not a famine, every thread ending at once. Somebody was going to kill a city. That's when I finally understood what I was dealing with. And I'd like to describe the moment properly, because it's the first time in 6 lifetimes that I was afraid of something specific rather than of the world in general. The 4th step of martial Tao did not come from that realm. The divination method Guo Bo Yuan built out of it works, and nothing in a sealed lower realm should work like that, and no mortal scholar invents a technique that lets him audit reality. There was a reincarnated foundation establishment true person in my bottle. He'd been in there for 60 years. He'd built a rival product, seeded a heresy, aimed 7 strong men at my face, and he was about to butcher 2 million people. And every single one of those was a lever designed to make the owner of the realm come out of his cave and put a hand on it. So I did the only thing available to a man who cannot win a fight and cannot afford to appear. I invented a religion. The old ancestor had made a 4th step. Fine. I could not beat him to a 5th, because he was better at this than I was and had more time, and I was not actually a genius, whatever I may have implied earlier. But I didn't need a real 5th step. I needed a believable one. I built an identity from scratch, a name nobody had heard, delivered by nobody, appearing in no lineage. Indra. I gave him a doctrine, a handful of impossible feats performed in front of witnesses, and one single promise. That above the 4th step there is a 5th, and that the 5th step is not power, it's departure. You break the void and you leave, and the world above is real and it is waiting. I called it the broken void realm, and the beautiful thing about the broken void realm, the thing that makes it the best lie I have ever told, is that it is completely unfalsifiable. Nobody who ascends ever comes back. Of course they don't. Nobody ever has. That's what ascension means. Every single culture in every realm I have ever visited has a story about people who go up and never return, and not one of those stories has ever been checked, because the only person who could check it is gone. So I had a doctrine that could not be disproved, and a promise that got more credible every time it went unfulfilled. The 7 ambushed me in the 8th month, on the plain outside Tianjing, all of them at once. The old ancestors' arrangement finally spent, and I performed the ascension. Here is the unflattering truth about what I actually did, because it was not a technique, it was theater. Saint's theft accumulates the fortune of 140 million people, and if you spend 70 years of it in a single afternoon, you can do something that looks like anything you want. I put a crack in the sky. It went from horizon to horizon, and there was light behind it, and I rose into it in front of 7 celestials and about 400,000 witnesses on the walls of a capital city, and I said one sentence about the road being open, and I stepped through. Lei Huo followed me. I had gambled on that, and I'd gambled specifically on him. Because a man who has spent 40 years being the strongest thing in his world does not watch someone else leave. He came through about 6 seconds behind me, and what he came through into was not heaven. He came out of the mouth of a jug, in a sealed cave on the outer peak of the Primordial Saint Sect, into the hands of a corpse refining specialist named Yi Mo, who I had contracted for the occasion and who was extremely pleased with the delivery. The martial king of the great Zhou, first of the 7 celestials, undefeated, ascended in glory in front of a capital city, refining stock, 2 days' work. I'm not proud of that one. He was the only one of the 7 who fought me clean. The moment I stepped through the crack, Saint's theft completed, major achievement. That's the term, and the manual is very calm about what it means. And the manual is wrong, because the manual has never had it happen to it. I gained status. I need to explain that word because it is the single most important mechanic in the rest of my life, and there is nothing like it below foundation establishment. Cultivation is a number. Status is a category. A foundation establishment true person is not simply stronger than a chi refining cultivator. He is a different class of thing. And the reason a chi refining cultivator cannot hurt him is not that his defenses are good. It's that the attack does not qualify. It is a letter delivered to the wrong address. That's why the heaven-mending peak master stopped my river with a finger. Not because the finger was strong, because I was not, in the world's opinion, a party to the conversation. Saint's theft, at major achievement, gives you status without giving you cultivation. I was still chi refining great perfection. My chi didn't move. My meridians didn't change. But the founder of 140 million people's Tao is, as far as heaven is concerned, a saint of that world, and attacks from below simply stopped arriving. I found this out about 11 seconds later when the Guang family's old ancestor called down heavenly lightning on me. Borrowed lightning. A foundation establishment technique in a mortal realm aimed at a chi refining cultivator who had just made a public spectacle of himself. It hit me and did nothing. Not blocked, not resisted. It arrived and found that it was not addressed to anybody and went out. And then I turned around and looked at him. I have replayed the next 10 seconds many times. He'd spent 60 years in a baby's body, 40 of them building the trap, and it had been a genuinely excellent trap. And the last piece of it had just failed in a way he could not have modeled. Because Saint's theft is on the 3rd shelf of an archive in a sect he does not belong to, and nobody has drawn it in a century. He ran. He ran into Tianjing because a city with 2 million people in it is the best cover in the world when the man chasing you is trying not to be seen. So I erased Tianjing. 2 million people. I compressed the space to corner one man. And the way you compress space in a mortal realm is that you remove what is standing in it. And I did it in about 4 minutes, and it was not difficult, and nothing in the world tried to stop me. I have done many things I'd do again. That one I've thought about in every life since, and the reason I've thought about it is not guilt exactly. It's that I noticed how easy it was, and how quickly I stopped thinking of it as people and started thinking of it as terrain. And I have met the men who do that professionally. I was in a cave with a jug, doing what my sect does, and I had built a whole philosophy about how we were at least honest. Guo Boyuan was in that city. He'd refused to leave when I offered. He died looking up at the crack in the sky with an expression I could not read as anything but relief. Because 40 years of proving that his world was a forgery had ended with the forger stepping out of it in front of him. And a man like that would rather be right than alive. The old ancestor made his stand in the ruins. He burned his last life. He'd had 3, and he spent the 3rd on a single strike. And the sword he did it with was the one that exterminated the witch ghost Dao 4,000 years ago, and I could not have survived it. So I lied to him. I told him the realm was already sealed from outside, and that Han Kai, Immortal Master, was inbound. And I gave him a number of specific details that were entirely fabricated. And I kept talking for about 90 seconds, because 90 seconds was what I needed. Then, Han Kai, Immortal Master, arrived. He was not inbound. He'd been watching for 11 years the way he watches everything. But a lie stops being a lie the moment the thing shows up. And the old ancestor had spent his final life on a strike he no longer had time to complete. Han Kai took the soul out of him like a man taking a cork out of a bottle. Then he and I looked at each other over the wreckage of a capital city. And we came to an arrangement, which is that neither of us was ever going to mention any of it. He had used a Saint Sect disciple as bait for 11 years and burned 30 of his years of luck. I had run an unlicensed Saints theft operation inside the sect's own resource realm for 70 years and killed a Jade Pivot Foundation establishment true person's 3rd life in it. We buried it, professionally. It's the only completely honest transaction I have ever had with a superior. I spent the next 10 years with the Kai Dao Jade Slip in my hand, which is the treasure I took instead of an ascension order, and which was the correct call by a margin I can now measure in centuries. It gave me 2 things. The first was the Yin Spirit method, a way to die without dying, from an angle the corpse liberation could not reach. And I will come back to it because it is the entire spine of my 7th life. The second was stealing Heaven's secrets, recovered whole out of my own memory of a text I had deposited under an 80-year seal and had never actually read. That was the joke I'd made to Hui Heng in a tower 70 years earlier. 80 years is fine. I'll read it next life. I got it in this one. Sometimes the joke pays. Yimo, the corpse refiner, attempted foundation establishment in the 11th year and died in it, which is what happens to about 4 and 5. And Han Kai came to my cave and gave me an ascension order after all. Not as an apology. He doesn't apologize. He gave it to me because I had become, in 10 years, a chi-refining great perfection cultivator with the status of a saint, a great divine ability, a soul danner, a secret realm's founding karma, and an unbroken record of never once leaving a building. And the Sanhe Association had done the arithmetic on what I'd be worth at the next tier. I took it. And on the first clear night of the following spring, in my 6th life, in a sealed cave on the outer peak, I attempted foundation establishment. It went beautifully. One thing about that, because of how it ends. The ascension was clean. Saint's Theft's status put me halfway up the mountain before I started, which is not supposed to be possible. The ascension order opened the 9 gates in sequence without a stutter. My chi went up through them like water going downhill. I got most of the way. And then a thought came into my head. It wore Han Kai's face. It said what he would have said, in his voice, in his flat, courteous foreman's tone. And what it said was that I had been the bait every single time. And that a man who has been the bait 6 times is not a player, he is a component. And that the only reason I was being permitted to build a foundation at all was that somebody upstairs had decided a foundation establishment component was worth more than a chi refining one. That's a heart demon. That's all a heart demon is. It's the sentence you have been carefully not saying to yourself, arriving at the worst possible moment in somebody else's voice. I fought it for about 9 seconds. It cost me 30% of my chi. I had exactly enough to complete a foundation, and I finished the ascension with 70% of it, and what I built was structurally perfect and about 2/3 the size it should have been. A half foundation. A true person with a permanent ceiling. I looked at it for a long moment, sitting in my own dantian, shining, undersized, and irresistible. Then I put my thumb through it. You cannot rebuild a foundation. Ever. In this world, that is the one absolutely final decision a cultivator makes, and men live 900 years with a bad one, rather than face what I did on purpose in about 4 seconds. I had 94 pages. Page 94. Thumb, wrist, mountain, rope. Cultivation, obviously. And this time, the number that came back with me was chi refining great perfection, in a body that had been on the cart for 4 hours. Plus the status. That is the detail I hadn't dared hope for. Saint's Theft's major achievement is not cultivation, and it is not a treasure, so it should not have carried. And it carried anyway, because Heaven's opinion of who I am is apparently a more durable object than my own meridians. 140 million people in a bottle in a life that no longer exists still think of me as the founder of their road. I have never worked out whether that's beautiful or obscene. I've stopped trying. So my 7th life started with a named disciple stepping off a tribute card at the ceiling of the mortal realm with the karmic rank of a saint. And so, the first thing I did with all of that, I picked a pocket. Xuelan, day 1, in the courtyard while she was reading the intake register. The innate primordial chaos divine talisman out of the inside pocket, and a folded square of blank yellow paper in. I'd had 6 lifetimes to practice being invisible and about 9 seconds to do it in. She never knew. She went on carrying a blank piece of paper for years and it did exactly nothing. And everything she got away with in that period she got away with because nobody was looking very hard. Note the second order effect because it's better than the theft. The heaven-mending peak master eventually noticed that somebody in his sect was holding an anti-deduction artifact. He went looking. He found nothing because the thing that hides you also hides that you're hiding. And a foundation establishment true person who finds nothing does not conclude that he's wrong. He concludes that he's being blocked by an equal. Within the year, he had decided the only man in Jiangbei with both the means and the motive was Taoist Jiangbei, who had been running his own operations out of the same sect for 400 years and who had, in fact, done absolutely nothing. 2. Foundation establishment. True person started a feud over a piece of paper in my pocket. It lasted the rest of the life. It is, to date, the highest return I have ever gotten on a single act of petty theft. Now, the actual plan, which I had spent the last 10 years of my 6th life designing and which required me to be killed on the first day. The tie-in corpse liberation completes at the moment of death. That's the wall I could never get over because my deaths turn pages. But I had the yin spirit method out of the Kai Dao Jade Slip, and the yin spirit method does something very specific. It separates the timing. Your body dies. Your soul does not go with it. There's a window, and in the window you are a spirit standing over a corpse that is technically finished. And the corpse liberation, which is watching the corpse and not the soul, begins. The page does not turn because I have not actually finished dying. I just need to be killed on a schedule by somebody reliable in a controlled setting on the first available day. Reader, I knew exactly where to go. Mei Li took delivery of a new Joyous Union Hall intake on the 2nd morning of my 7th life. And I let her run the transfer, and I did not turn the flow around, and she drained a chi-refining great perfection cultivator's borrowed body down to the floor in front of 11 people with tea. She broke through so hard she cracked a pillar, and she was, for about a day and a half, the happiest woman in the Primordial Saint Sect. Then I stood up, yin spirit over a corpse, invisible, with a great divine ability halfway through assembling itself in a body on the floor, and 11 witnesses filing out of a hall, and 1 senior sister glowing in the middle of it, and I put stealing heaven's secrets into her. This is the technique I had deposited under an 80-year seal in a life that no longer exists, and had recovered out of my own memory with a jade slip in another one. And it is worth explaining what it is, because it is the single filthiest thing in the Primordial Saint Sect's catalog, and I say that having personally flayed myself. It's a foundation establishment method for people who intend to take a shortcut. You do not cultivate with it, you install it in somebody else. The host becomes an engine. Every transfer they perform, every drop of foundation chi and fortune and cultivation they take out of anybody is skimmed, and the skim goes to the person who planted it. The host feels nothing wrong. The host feels magnificent. The host feels, in fact, like the most gifted cultivator of their generation, because they are advancing faster than anyone around them, and they will never once ask why. Mei Li was already the best harvester in the Joyous Union Hall. I made her the best harvester in Jiangbei. Within 3 years, she was untouchable, cold and correct in public, spoken of as the coming thing, promoted twice, and in private, she was working through the outer sect's entire crop of promising young men at a rate I frankly found alarming, and every single point of it was arriving in a dead man's account. She poisoned Xuelan in the 2nd year and drained her over a fortnight. I did not arrange that. I want to be clear, I had put an engine in a predator, and the engine did what engines do, and Xuelan had been Xuelan at her for a decade, and the two of them worked it out between themselves in a way I'd rather not describe. I found out afterward, and I laughed until I had to sit down on a step, because I have never once managed to kill Xuelan quickly. I've drained her, I've banner-spirited her, I've had her explode on people 11 times in an afternoon, and in this life I did not have to lift a hand. Because I gave a technique to the right woman, and the 2 most efficient people in the outer sect eventually ran into each other. And in the 4th year, I pointed Mei Li at Ye Lei, not out of cruelty, out of accounting. The colored karma fish comes out of that pool in year 6. I have known this since my 3rd life. It is not a lottery, it is a retrieval operation. And the retrieving hand is a lucky boy who has been loaded with borrowed fortune by Taoist Jiangbei for the purpose. Nobody can take it off Jiangbei. He's foundation establishment. You cannot rob him. But you can rob the boy if you own the woman the boy trusts, and if the technique inside her sends the proceeds to you. I set that up 4 years in advance and then left the sect entirely. 2 more things happened before I went, and both of them matter. The first was Li Xiaobo. I pulled him into a room and I did something I had never been able to do to anyone before, which is suppress a cultivator by status alone. Saint Sect's rank does not care that he was a true disciple. He simply could not act in the same way a letter cannot argue with the post office. And then he told me something that reorganized my last 4 lifetimes. He was not Li Xiaobo. He was a fragment, a split-off piece of a soul with the memories and the manner and about a fifth of the substance. And the original was somewhere else entirely and had been for 11 years, which means the missing true disciple of Heaven Mending Peak did not get murdered by an outer affairs officer. He got divided, deliberately, by someone, for something. And 1/5 of him got handed to Xiaolan along with a banner and a legacy by a hermit who was doing it out of spite. I still didn't have the whole picture. I got the last of it 2 lives later, and it is worse than you're guessing. He also gave me the Heavenly Silkworm, which is a great divine ability, and which is the 3rd of the 3 techniques Guo Tian once listed to me over a jar. The Heavenly Silkworm is a method for cutting your own soul into 9 pieces and severing every one of them from your karma. The manual is 15 pages, and 11 of them are warnings. The second thing was that I left, openly, with paperwork, on a Sanhe Association posting to a border market, decades before anybody expected a young disciple to want one, because the Witch Ghost's secret realm surfaces at Skull Mountain in about 40 years, and I had absolutely no intention of waiting for Hankai to arrange it. I went and let myself in early. The sword lets you in. That's the first thing you learn about the Witch Ghost's secret realm, and it takes about a day to learn the second thing, which is that the sword does not let you out. I had a golden core true monarch sword between me and the exit. I had gone in on purpose, and I had assumed I'd solve it once I was inside, and this is the exact reasoning pattern that killed everybody I have ever robbed. The realm is a feeding ground. There is no spiritual chi in it. None. Not thin, not poor. Absent. A cultivator who goes in stops being able to recover anything, and everything he spends is gone. And the sword collects him at the bottom of the arithmetic, and living in it, on a continent of dry hills, there are mortals, millions of them. Real people, with towns and grain and grandmothers, and they have been in there since before my sect existed, and they are hunted by ghosts, shamanic ghosts, masterless, formless, mindless things that come out of the ground at intervals and take people, and against which there is no defense. Because the ghosts are not alive and cannot be killed and are not, in the strictest sense, attacking anybody, they're grazing. The largest human institution in there is called the Nether Whisper Sect, and it has survived 4,000 years, and I looked into how, because I always do. They feed themselves to them, on a rota, volunteers mostly, and when volunteers run short, allocations. It's organized, it's ceremonial, it has a liturgy, and it works, in the sense that a village that makes its delivery on time is not visited out of season. I have been calling my sect a slaughterhouse for 7 lifetimes. I stood in a Nether Whisper hall and watched a very old woman explain the schedule to a room of teenagers, kindly, with visual aids. And I thought about a gray-robed man drawing a line through a name, and I understood for the first time that my sect is not unusual. My sect is just the version with better funding. Then I looked at the ghosts properly and found out what they actually were, and it changed everything. They're not ghosts, they are the fragments of a great divine ability. Somewhere, 4,000 years ago, something enormous came apart in there, and what has been walking those hills eating farmers ever since is the debris of a single technique, distributed across a continent, still executing. The technique has a name, and I got it out of the 6th fragment I caught. The Xuanming Prefecture Lord's seclusion position. I started collecting. The Primordial Chi Myriad Spirit Banner is a soul container, and it turns out it does not care whether the soul was ever a person. I went across those hills for 11 years with a pole and a piece of gray cloth, catching pieces of a dead man's divine ability one at a time. And it was the most peaceful stretch of my 7 lives. I also learned, in year 4, that this is a task with no end. I found the source of one ghost line and destroyed it. Big ancestral statue in a canyon, obviously significant. Took me 2 months to crack. It respawned in 11 days. The fragments are not in the statues, they're in the ley lines, and the ley lines are the realm. And as long as there is a realm, there will be ghosts coming up out of the ground on schedule, forever. And the Nether Whisper Sect's rota is not a superstition, it's a maintenance contract. While I was in there, my woman in the sect was doing extremely well. Mei Li's harvest by the 9th year had reached 3 separate men I recognized. Hui Heng, ruined and grateful. Ling Qiankun, intersect and ambitious. Yi Mo, the corpse refiner, who in another life would have processed a martial king for me, and who in this one walked into the joyous union hall of his own accord. And in the 11th year, the Heaven Mending Peak Master walked in too, not as a client, as an auditor, because stealing Heaven's secrets is his. He invented it 400 years ago for exactly the purpose I was using it for. And there are perhaps 6 people alive who can recognize the technique running in someone else's meridians, and one of them is the man who wrote it. He put a hand on Mei Li's forehead and read the whole architecture in about 4 seconds. And then he asked, out loud, in a room she thought was private, who was on the other end. That is the single worst moment of my 7th life, and I was 11 years away in a sealed realm full of ghosts. I negotiated from inside it, through her, in a conversation that took 8 days each way, and I opened with the only thing I had. I had a fifth of his sun. Li Xiaobo's fragment was in my banner, in a realm nobody could reach, held by a man he could not deduce. And I made it extremely clear at the outset that the fragment's continued existence and my own were the same object. He took it well. That is the man, entire. He's the most reasonable monster I have ever dealt with. He countered with an offer of marriage, his daughter, Ling Wei. Real proposal, real dowry, real position in the heaven-mending line, and both of us understood perfectly that this was the same offer he'd made me with a finger in the sky in my fifth life, and that it ended the same way, with a son-in-law being harvested at a convenient hour. I accepted in principle. He accepted my acceptance in principle. Neither of us believed the other for a moment, and both of us were entirely sincere about intending to eat the other one later, and we shook on it. And it was, genuinely, one of the most cordial arrangements I have ever had with a superior. He also agreed to cover Mei Li's karma. That was the real prize, and I got it for free. And I got it for free because of the paper in my pocket. He was in a feud with Taoist Jiangbei over an artifact neither of them could find, and Jiangbei was 4 years from fishing a colored karma fish out of the karma pool with a lucky boy. And my woman was going to be standing between them when it happened. A foundation establishment true person agreed to personally shield a chi refining harvester's cause and effect, out of spite, from an enemy who had never done anything to him, over an object I had stolen off Shulan on my first afternoon. I want that on my grave. Around the same time, I finished the ghosts, and I went to find whatever was left of the man they'd come off. He was in the city of the wrongfully dead. That's a real place with that name, in the middle of that realm, and it is the only settlement in there with cultivators in it. About 300 of them, holding a fortified city, running the Nether Whisper sect's upper hierarchy, living entirely off the chi they strip from the mortals they administer. I walked in through the front gate and beheaded every cultivator in the city with one gesture. Not a technique, status. That's the whole mechanic, and I had spent a life and a half learning what it means. Saint's Theft's rank puts me in a category, and every cultivator in that city was below the category, and when I made the gesture, there was nothing available to them that could constitute an objection. 300 in one motion. It took less effort than opening a door, and I felt nothing at all doing it, and I noticed that I felt nothing, and I made a note of the noticing, because I have been keeping an eye on that in myself since Tianjing. Then the last sect master of the Witch Ghost Dao came out of the tower. He introduced himself properly, which I appreciated. Silent contemplation, ancestral master of a lineage that got exterminated 4,000 years ago by the Jade Pivot Sword Pavilion. And he had been in that realm ever since, and he was on his 5th reincarnation. He looked about 25. He'd looked about 25 for a very long time. He was extremely polite, and he complimented my banner work, and he asked me a number of well-informed questions about the Xuanming fragments I'd been collecting. And then he explained, with real regret, that he was going to be taking my body. 5th reincarnation, that's the ceiling. A soul can be recycled about 5 times before there's nothing left to recycle, and he was at the end of his. And he had been waiting in a sealed realm for 4,000 years for someone to walk in who was worth the trouble. I'd just beheaded 300 cultivators without moving my feet. I was, from his perspective, the single best piece of news since the fall of his sect. The duel took 4 days. He opened with Yama Palace, and I need to describe it, because I own it now, and I use it constantly. You seat 9 cultivators in a formation modeled on the courts of the underworld. Judges, messengers, the wandering gods, the impermanent ones. And when the 9 are seated and the roles are filled, the formation as a whole is granted a status. Not power, status. A fake foundation establishment, assembled out of 9 people who are nothing of the kind, borrowed from an office rather than earned by a body. He had 8 restored elders of the Witch Ghost Dao and himself in the 9th seat, and when the palace came up around me, my status advantage evaporated. Because for the first time in that lifetime, somebody had arranged to be a category rather than a number. I answered with everything. Talismans, formations, the Tai Yi golden flower, the Xuanming fragments I'd spent 11 years catching and had never once tested. And on the 3rd day, he fired Heavenly Collapse at me. I should explain, because people who know what that is usually stop me here. Heavenly Collapse is what happens when a foundation establishment ascension fails at the top. The gathered chi of the attempt comes down instead of going up, and it lands on the man who gathered it, and it is generally the last thing about him anybody sees. Silent Contemplation had been in a sealed realm for 4,000 years, and had, at some point in there, decided to keep a failed ascension in a jar. He aimed it at me like a man emptying a bucket. It went off over that bay like a mountain being dropped on a dinner party. The city, what was left of it, is now underwater. I walked out of it. Got a few tricks. Purple grade. Any attack that falls within my limits can be handled. Then he tried to take my body, and the possession failed exactly the same way, and consider how badly that must have landed. A soul seizure is an attack. The talent does not care about the category, it cares about the ceiling. And by my 7th life, the ceiling was high enough that 4,000 years of preparation arrived within it and got handled like a hand catching a cup. He stopped. He stood in the shallows of a bay that used to be a city, on his 5th and final life, out of options. And he looked at me with an expression I had absolutely no idea how to read at the time and have thought about ever since. He said, mildly, that he had been waiting a very long time and that he had apparently chosen wrong. And that is the exact moment the sword woke up. The golden core true monarch sword at the bottom of the realm, which had been asleep since before my sect existed, and which had let me in and never once looked at me. It had checked me before. In a life that no longer exists on the flagstones of a border market. It had gone through 6 lifetimes of theft and fraud and murder, and none of it had mattered. Because the only question it asks is whether you have eaten souls for power. It did not look at me this time. It looked at the last sect master of the witch ghost Dao, whose lineage that sword had personally exterminated 4,000 years ago, and who had spent every one of those 4,000 years in a realm full of mortals, farming ghosts out of the ground with a rota. He got about a second and a half. I think he saw it coming. I think he'd known the whole time that the moment he made himself visible enough to matter, that thing was going to remember him. And I think that's why he had spent 4 millennia waiting for a body instead of simply walking out. He did not run. He turned around to face it, which I have never forgotten. Then there was no more witch ghost Dao, and I was standing alone in a flooded valley with a pole in my hand and a very great deal of extremely valuable debris settling out of the water around me. I caught the pieces. That's the whole reason I'm still telling this story instead of a shorter one. When a soul that has been reincarnated 5 times comes apart, it does not simply stop, it scatters into thoughts, and the thoughts are still his, and they last about a quarter of an hour before they go out. I had a soul banner and 11 years of practice catching things that used to be part of a divine ability. I got most of him, and what came with him, because it was tangled all through him, and had been for 4,000 years, was the legacy of the witch ghost Dao, not a manual, the actual inheritance, the thing the realm had been sitting on, transferring to the last man standing in it because there was nobody else left to argue, which is how I acquired, in one afternoon, both the greatest asset of my 7th life and its worst liability. The liability first, because I noticed it immediately and it has never gone away. The golden core true monarch sword did not go back to sleep. It killed the thing it had been left there to kill, and then it looked at the man holding the residue, and it went back down to the bottom of the realm. And there is now a thread of karma running from me to a weapon that belongs to a golden core true monarch, who is, as far as anyone knows, still alive somewhere. I have carried that string in every life since. I do not know what's on the other end of it. Nothing has ever pulled. The asset was Yama Palace. I described what it does when he used it on me. 9 seats, 9 roles, an office rather than a body, and the whole assembly is granted a status it did not earn. Here's the part I didn't understand until it was mine. It's regional. The 9 seats are not 9 people, they're 9 posts, and the posts belong to the underworld's administration of a place, which means the palace does not care how strong the 9 occupants are. It cares that the seats are filled, and that the jurisdiction is real. I can build a fake foundation establishment out of 9 cultivators who are individually worthless in any territory I actually hold in about a day. I have used that 4 times. I would take it over any treasure I own. And underneath it in the same legacy, in a section the witch ghost Dao clearly considered minor, was the great incarnation method. You build a god. You take a soul, you seat it in a role, you feed it worship or fear or simple recognition, and it becomes a protector god, which is a thing that exists in the world's paperwork rather than in its physics. And a protector god's function is to carry. Everything you do, it did. Every death you cause, it caused. All of it lands on a divine office instead of on a man, and the man walks around with the karma of somebody who has not done anything in particular. I read that section 3 times, and then I sat down on a wet rock in a flooded valley and laughed until my ribs hurt, because I had spent 7 lifetimes being read, deduced, hunted, priced, and fished, and somebody had left the answer in a dead sex basement 4,000 years ago. I now needed 1 soul of good quality that I did not mind spending. I had a woman in my sect who had killed me twice. Ye Lei won the karma pool in year 16, on schedule, exactly as he had in 5 other lifetimes. He just won it for a different reason this time. Mei Li had been working on him for 2 years by then, and she was extremely good at it. And the arrangement she'd built was that a boy with no friends in a great sect had exactly 1 person who treated him like a person. She got him into a small sealed realm on the edge of the sect. Private, romantic by the standards of a place like that, and she made sure he knew that a woman of her position could not stay attached to an outer disciple unless he made something of himself. So he went to the karma pool, for her, and he drew a colored karma fish out of a 100-year pool in front of a crowd. Because the fortune Taoist Jiangbei had loaded into him was at flood tide and would draw that fish out of anything. And then, because she'd asked him to, he ate it. That is a thing you can do with a colored karma fish. And nobody ever does it, because eating it converts the entire jackpot into raw personal fortune instead of into treasures and standing. It is the single most wasteful use of 1 billion points in the sect's history. It is also the only way to get the whole thing into 1 body where it can be taken out of 1 body. I triggered stealing heaven's secrets from 400 kilometers away, in a valley in a sealed realm, sitting on a rock. It ran through her and out the far side, every drop of it. The fish, the century of accumulated pool, the borrowed fortune Jiangbei had spent 40 years loading into that boy, the boy's cultivation. And then, because the engine does not know where to stop, and I did not tell it to, the boy himself. And then, because Mei Li was on the same circuit and the circuit was mine, her as well. Taoist Jiangbei arrived about 6 minutes later. He'd felt it go. Of course he had. He'd been fishing that pool for 4 decades with a lure he'd built out of a child. And he came down into a small sealed realm on the edge of the sect, expecting to collect, and what he found was 2 husks and no karma trail whatsoever. I have often wished I could have seen his face. I've had to make do with knowing about it. Ye Lei has now died in 5 of my lifetimes. I have caused it in 3. The first time I sat with him while it happened, and I have never entirely stopped doing the arithmetic on that. And this time, I did it from 400 kilometers away without looking up. And I am naming the difference out loud because I noticed it at the time and did not like it. Then the 2 of them came for me together. And I had about 11 days to prepare. And what I did with those 11 days is the single cleanest piece of work of my first 7 lives. Taoist Jiangbei, who had just lost 40 years of investment. The heaven-mending peak master, who had been feuding with Jiangbei for 16 years over an artifact neither of them could find, and who was not about to let his enemy collect a prize alone. 2 Foundation Establishment true persons, converging on Skull Mountain, where I had a sealed realm with a golden core sword in it and no way out. So I unpinned the talisman. I had been carrying the innate primordial chaos divine talisman in my inside pocket for 17 years, and it had made me invisible to heaven the entire time. And 11 days before they arrived, I took it out and stuck it to the witch ghost secret realm instead. Understand what that does. Suddenly, I am readable. A chi-refining nobody, standing at Skull Mountain, radiating guilt in every direction, findable by any competent deduction. And the enormous sealed feeding ground I am standing in front of is not there at all. Not hidden. Absent. A blank. The heaven-mending peak master arrived first because he was closer and because he wanted the son-in-law arrangement resolved on his own terms. He found me exactly where the deduction said I'd be, standing in a valley with my hands empty. And he did what any Foundation Establishment true person does when a chi-refining disciple has embarrassed him. He walked straight in. He kicked open a door he could not see, into a realm he could not perceive, that contained the sword of a golden core true monarch, which had been awake and irritable for 11 days. I did not fight him. I want to be extremely clear. I have never fought a Foundation Establishment true person on purpose in my life, and I have now watched 4 of them die. While that was happening, I was in the valley building a god. The great incarnation method needs a soul of quality, a role, and a name. I had Mei Li's soul in the banner, drained clean, and I had a realm's worth of ambient reverence lying around. And I had a role in mind that I've been thinking about for a while. Protector God. The office that stands between the master and everything aimed at him. All damage, all consequence, all karma. Her whole career formalized. She had drained me to death in front of 11 people with tea and called me trash on the way out. And I turned her into the thing that stands in front of me and takes the hit, permanently, as a job. I named her An Wen. I have been asked whether that was revenge, and I've always said no, it was a resource allocation. That's a lie, and I think you've probably worked out that it's a lie. It was revenge, and it was extremely good, and it is still working. The Peak Master survived the sword, barely, and in pieces. He came out of that realm with about 1/3 of himself, and he was still, at 1/3, more than I could handle in open ground, and so I did not meet him in open ground. I met him inside Yama Palace with 9 seats filled, and An Wen standing in front of me eating every single thing he threw. It took 2 days, and I did not land a meaningful blow the entire time. That was never the objective. The objective was to make him talk, and a man who is losing a fight he expected to win talks, and what I got out of him in the second day is the reason he stopped being a threat to me for 200 years. His Tao path. Every Foundation Establishment true person in this world is walking toward a fruit position. That's the actual goal above Foundation Establishment, not power, a seat. There are a finite number of them. They are the property of Golden Core true monarchs, and a true person's entire second half of life is a quiet campaign to arrive at one before anybody else notices which one he's aiming at. That's the secret, not the technique, the destination. Because the moment your rivals know which fruit position you want, they can stand in front of it. The heaven-mending Peak Master was walking the Lord of the Sitting Mountain through the red rue scales toward pomegranate wood. I got that out of him in a flooded valley, and I said it out loud, in front of witnesses, in a place where the whole thing was recorded. He stopped being a rising power that afternoon. Everything he did for the next 2 centuries was done by a man whose destination was on a public notice board. And there were at least 4 true persons in Jiangbei who adjusted their own plans within a year. I also ate one of his split souls, which was a bonus, and which is how I finally learned what had been done to his son. He'd split Li Xiaobo himself, his own son, into 5, deliberately, as a distributed reserve, pieces of a true disciple stashed in different places so that the family's line could not be extinguished by anything less than a coordinated hunt. One of the pieces had ended up in an outer affairs officer's banner because a hermit thought it would be funny. That's the man who offered me his daughter twice. That's the entire righteous versus demonic distinction I keep going on about, incidentally, and it is why I have stopped going on about it. There is no distinction. There are only institutions, and the institutions eat their own children in the order that the accounting recommends, and the ones with better robes have a longer word for it. Profound abyss. Immortal Master arrived a week later. Foundation establishment true person, acting head of the sect's outer affairs, and the single most competent human being I have ever dealt with. And the first thing he did set the shape of the next several lifetimes. He assumed I was one of them, not a genius, not a prodigy. He looked at the wreckage, a dead-colored karma fish operation, a wrecked peak master with his Tao path in public, a secret realm nobody could perceive, 300 dead cultivators in a city that was now a bay, and a chi refining nobody standing in the middle of it looking tired, and he concluded, calmly and immediately, that I was a reincarnated immortal master operating under a junior's face. Everyone did. That assumption has followed me for 4 lifetimes, and I have never once corrected it, because the truth is stupider and harder to believe. I asked him for a posting at Skull Mountain. He gave it to me on the spot, and he did not ask why, and I understood immediately that this was a man I was going to be doing business with for a very long time. Hankai Immortal Master came to the same market about a month later wanting the Heavenly Corpse Fiend, which is a thing the Witch Ghost Tao used to grow out of the Hao Earth Chi, and which was still down there in the realm's lower reaches. We struck a 30-year deal. He was pleasant about it. Neither of us mentioned the 11 years he had spent using me as bait in a different life, which was easy since in this one it had not happened. Then I spent those 30 years doing the actual work. I loaded everything into the banner, every spirit, every fragment of the Xuanming Prefecture Lord's seclusion position. On Wen, the protector god, complete with her office, the entire Yama Palace, all 9 seats folded down and stored. Because here is the thing I had learned across 7 lifetimes and had never once been able to use properly. When I restart, I carry 1 treasure, 1, and I had spent 6 lives choosing between a sword pellet and an array treasure and a lump of chi. And every single time I had left 90% of a life on the table. But a treasure that contains things is still 1 treasure. The Primordial Chi Myriad Spirit Banner is a container. If everything I own is inside it when I die, then everything I own comes back with me. And it comes back with its karma scrubbed, because a restart wipes the causal history of anything I carry. I have never told anyone that. I'm telling you. I also used Anwen as a dumping ground, which is the other half of the Heavenly Silkworm method and the part I'd been putting off. 9 severed souls. You cut yourself into 9 and you sever each one from your karma. And the fragments have to go somewhere, and where they go is a protector god who was built specifically to hold consequences on my behalf. 30 years. And at the end of them, on a cold morning at Skull Mountain, the Taiyin corpse liberation finally completed. Xianxia immortal. I had died on the 2nd day of that life, in a hall with 11 witnesses, and my body had spent 30 years liberating itself from the corpse while my soul walked around running a market. The technique that could never be finished because finishing it required a death I could not afford to spend. I'd paid it in advance, on day 2, before the life had anything in it worth losing. I have never been more pleased with myself. That's important context for what happened next, because completing a great divine ability at that tier does something visible. My status went up, and my chi went up with it. And I stepped, in one movement, out of chi refining entirely and into the foundation establishment realm. Not the cultivation, the realm, the place, the layer of the world where true persons stand and talk to each other, which a chi refining cultivator cannot enter, and which I walked into on foot without an ascension, without a foundation, without the sect's permission, in one step, on a Tuesday. And there was somebody standing in it, waiting for me. He was a monk, bald, plain, unarmed, with an expression of enormous patience, and he greeted me by a name I had never used. He called me the inheritor of the serpent bloom, and then he introduced himself. And the whole introduction is worth having, because it took me about 4 seconds to work out what it meant, and those 4 seconds were the worst of that entire lifetime. True person, serpent bloom, whose legacy I had taken off an island in my 3rd life, whose 9 transformations, dragon transformation art, I had rebuilt my entire cultivation around in my 5th, whose foundation establishment method I had memorized word for word on a causeway in the fog with a curse in my mouth. He was not dead. He had never been dead. He is the dragon subduing Arhat of the Jiangxi Pure Land. He has been in that seat for a very long time, and Serpent Bloom Island was not a ruin. It was a trap he set and reset and has been resetting for centuries. You leave a 3rd-grade dragon legacy on an island where demonic sect disciples will find it. Every so often, one of them survives long enough to cultivate it properly, and that one has spent his whole life turning himself into a vessel built to the specification of a dragon technique that a Pure Land Arhat wrote. The 9 transformations was never a road. It was a mold. I had spent 5 lifetimes filling it, very diligently, and I had been so pleased with myself for switching to a third-grade path early that I had never once asked why a third-grade legacy was lying around unguarded on an island a sixth-layer disciple could reach. He was extremely polite about all of it. He said I had done exceptionally well. He said the vessel was finer than any he'd had in 400 years. Then he came for me, and what came out of him was fire-blazing dragon, and fighting an Arhat of the Pure Land from below goes like this. It is not a fight. It is weather with an opinion. I ran for 6 days. Carp's liberation is the best escape in the world. He would kill me and I would come apart, and the liberation would put me back together somewhere else. And he would walk after me at a constant speed with no expression at all. He did that 9 times. He was not remotely inconvenienced. He was a man collecting a crop that had run a short distance. And on the 6th day, cornered at the eastern end of Skull Mountain with nothing left, I finally did the arithmetic that mattered, which was not about winning. This is what I had. I had a heavenly corpse fiend that Han Kai wanted, grown out of the Hao Earth Chi, sitting at the bottom of a secret realm. I had 800 miles of ley line under Skull Mountain that the witch ghost Dao had spent 4,000 years cultivating, and which had been feeding ghosts up out of the ground on a schedule since before my sect existed, and I had a Pure Land Arhat standing on top of it. Merit is the Pure Land's entire currency. A monk at that height is not carrying power. He is carrying accumulated merit, centuries of it, and every scrap of it is bound to his karma, and karma is a ledger, and a ledger can be made to take an entry. So I detonated all of it. The corpse fiend, the ley lines, 800 miles of the most saturated karmic ground in Jiangbei, at once, with a Pure Land Arhat standing in the middle of it, and both of us named on the paperwork. The cost to him was every scrap of merit he owned. 400 years gone in an afternoon, because when 800 miles of ley line dies violently, somebody has to be responsible for it, and he was the only party present with an account large enough to be debited. The cost to me was considerably worse. I lost the secret realm. I lost the corpse fiend, which was Han Kai's, which ended that relationship permanently. I lost the market. I lost the 30-year deal, the posting, the ley lines, and about 2/3 of the value of my 7th life in one event. I did it anyway, and I did it happily, and here is why. Because this is the closest thing I have to a principle. He had been setting the same trap for 400 years, and it had worked every time. I could not beat him. I could make the trap unprofitable. A man who takes 4 centuries to build something and loses it in an afternoon does not simply try again. He has to start over, from zero, at an age where zero is a very long way down, and he has to do it knowing that some chi refining nobody worked out the trick. I set off the bomb standing inside it. Page 93. Thumb, wrist, mountain, one treasure. I carried a piece of gray cloth on a black pole out of a burning 800-mile crater and into a tribute cart, and inside it was every single thing I had built in my 7th life. 240 banner spirits, every fragment of the Xuanming Prefecture Lord's seclusion position, the whole of Yama Palace, 9 seats, folded flat. An Wen, protector god, carrying 9 severed pieces of my own soul and the accumulated karma of 2 lifetimes, all of it scrubbed clean by the restart. Because the restart wipes the causal history of whatever I bring, and heaven's opinion of that banner on the morning of my 8th life was that it had never done anything. I sat on the floor of the cart with the most dangerous object in the outer sect in my sleeve and a rope on my ankle, and I nearly cried, and not from relief. I'd worked out what I'd been doing wrong for 7 lifetimes. I'd been choosing. Every single restart, I'd stood in front of that book, agonizing over one item. And the answer had been sitting in my hands since my 6th life. And the answer is that you do not pick the best thing. You pick the bag. And in the 2nd week of that life, testing the banner in a cave, I found the second half of the trick. And the second half is worse. A banner spirit can borrow its own original body's karma. I'll say it more plainly. If I have a man's soul in the banner, and that man is currently alive out in the world, then the spirit and the living man are the same person as far as heaven's paperwork is concerned. And if I put the spirit into the world in the living man's place, nothing objects. The world does not notice a substitution. It cannot. The karma matches, which means I can replace people. I sat with that for about 3 days, and it is the only power I have ever acquired that frightened me on arrival. Then I went and found Hui Heng. He was, in this life, exactly what he always is on day 1. 6 layer, good boots, warm handshake, junior brother 14 times in 4 minutes. And I sat him down and told him he was a reincarnated immortal master. Let me walk through this carefully because it is the most elaborate lie I have ever built, and it ran for 11 years. I gave him memories. I had a great divine ability for cutting souls apart and a protector god stuffed with pieces of my own. And it turns out that if you are careful, you can go the other way and lay a false continuity into a living man in thin slices over months and let him assemble it himself. That's the trick. You don't tell them. You give them fragments and let them do the work, because a lie a man builds out of his own materials is load-bearing. By the 11th month, Hui Heng had worked out, entirely on his own, with mounting excitement, that he was the reincarnation of true person Serpent Bloom. He had the dragon technique, he had dreams of an island, he had a nagging sense of destiny that he had frankly always had anyway, and had previously expressed through marriage brokerage. And somewhere in the Jiangxi Pure Land, an Arhat who had lost 400 years of merit in an afternoon in a life that no longer existed was, in this life, still fishing for the vessel his mold had produced. Now there was one walking around with a name on it. Hui Heng went into that decade absolutely radiant with self-belief, and I have never once regretted it. And if you'd like to feel sorry for him, I invite you to count the 13 names off that boat. Meanwhile, I finally got the shape of the world. I'd had a mole in heaven-mending peak since my 6th life, in the form of a fragment of a true disciple who I had never once let out of the banner. And in my 8th life, I stopped treating Li Xiaobo as a hostage and started treating him as a research department. And here is what a named disciple is never told. The war between the righteous path and the demonic path does not exist. There is no war. There has not been a war in 9,000 years. There are 4 great powers in this part of the world. My Primordial Saint Sect in Jiangbei, the Jade Pivot Sword Pavilion in Jiangnan, the Dao Court in Jiangdong, the Pure Land in Jiangxi, and they are not enemies. They are 4 estates. At the top of each one sits a Golden Core True Monarch, and a Golden Core True Monarch holds a fruit position, which is the seat above Foundation Establishment, and a fruit position is not a rank. It's a territory in Heaven's own structure. And every so often, the True Monarchs agree to expand. They call it a battle for the Tao. They select a target, a small world, a boundary heaven, a realm nobody in it has ever heard of, and they contest it. Whoever's people win, that True Monarch's fruit position grows into it, permanently. Everything I had ever been told about righteousness and demonry was the flavor text on a boundary dispute between 4 landlords. 9,000 years of sectarian slaughter, named disciples in crates, whole generations of teenagers taught to hate a color of robe, property. I went into that life with 3 objectives, and they belong on the record because I actually completed all 3, which has happened exactly once. 1. Get true disciple status, not for the prestige. A named disciple cannot legally hold assets in this sect, and I was tired of everything I owned technically belonging to whoever asked. 2. Get the Skull Mountain ley lines back, 800 miles of the richest karmic ground in Jiangbei, which I had personally detonated in a previous life, and which was, in this one, entirely intact and unclaimed. 3. Rob the Guang family's old ancestor. That last one has a specific target. In this timeline, he has not yet reincarnated into the Great Zhou, has not built a 4th step, has not aimed 7 celestials at me, and is sitting in Jiangnan being an unremarkable Foundation Establishment elder of a declining family. He is also, right now, in possession of the Jiu Tian instrument, the heaven-hiding treasure, the thing his sect gave him for a mission he has not yet been sent on. I had spent 40 years in a previous life unable to find a man because he was holding it, and I had wanted it ever since. Skull Mountain first, and I got a nasty surprise there, because the ley lines were already spoken for. Han Kai, Immortal Master, in this life, had gotten to the Witch Ghost Dao's ground about 11 years ahead of where I remembered, and had a claim on it, and was in the process of quietly developing it, so I did not fight him for it. I walked into the Sanhe Association's main branch, requested an audience with the head of the house, and introduced myself as the 367th generation inheritor of the Witch Ghost Dao, which is, and this matters, completely true. I had the legacy. I had the Xuanming fragments. I had Yama Palace and the Great Incarnation Method and a soul banner full of the sect's dead, and I could recite 4,000 years of a lineage that had been exterminated by a Golden Core True Monarch sword, because I had eaten most of its last sect master out of a bay. Han Kai checked, extensively, everything checked out, and a Foundation Establishment true person who has just found the last living heir of a dead legacy sitting on ground he wants does not fight the heir. He funds him. He handed me the ley lines. He handed me a substantial upgrade for An Wen, because a protector god with a proper lineage behind her is worth a great deal more than one built out of a dead harvester in a valley. He handed me the ghost population, formally, as an inherited asset, and he handed me a second heavenly corpse fiend, grown from Hao Earth Chi, because the Witch Ghost Dao's heir ought to have one. A word about how funny I found this. In my 7th life, I detonated his corpse fiend and 800 miles of his ground to inconvenience a monk, and it ended our relationship permanently. In my 8th, he gave me a new one as a gift, with paperwork. Then I told him who I actually was. Not everything, never everything, but I let him understand that the man he was funding was a Primordial Saint Sect disciple, and that the Witch Ghost Dao's entire legacy was therefore in the Saint Sect's hands rather than the Sanhe Association's, and that this was excellent news for everyone. And then I traded it upward. The Witch Ghost Dao is a dead lineage with a Golden Core era legacy attached, and my sect had been trying to acquire exactly that kind of thing for 9,000 years, and I put it on the table in exchange for one thing: true disciple status, not a treasure, not a technique, a rank, in writing, with asset holding rights. They took the deal in 11 days. I became a true disciple of the Primordial Saint Sect 14 months into my 8th life, having arrived on a tribute cart with a rope on my ankle. And I would like to say that I felt something. I felt like a man who had finally gotten the correct form stamped. Then, in the 3rd year, the sect called a summit, and the world got much larger. Azure Peak's Xia True Monarch came out of seclusion. Golden Core, our Golden Core, the one at the top of the estate. And she had not been seen in about a century. And when she stepped out onto the cloud sea, every Foundation Establishment true person in the Primordial Saint Sect went to one knee, including the ones who had been fighting each other for 200 years. She is a beautiful woman with an unstable laugh, and she is the single most feared entity in Jiangbei. And I have since learned that this is not a coincidence. And she announced a battle for the Tao, which is where I met Profound Abyss Immortal Master again, on the good side of the table this time, and where I did the thing that made my career. The summit was held over the Equilibrium Sea, which is a body of cloud on the sect's upper reaches that reacts to the chi around it. It's a decoration. It is also, at a gathering of every Foundation establishment true person in a great sect, an extremely accurate gauge of exactly how badly everybody in the room wants to kill everybody else. That day, it was throwing waves 10 stories high. I put it flat in one stroke, not by being strong, by being a formation master with a lineage's worth of Xuan Ming fragments and a fake Foundation establishment in my sleeve. And by having spent about 9 minutes working out which 4 points of a decorative cloud sea were doing the actual work. Every true person on that platform turned around. That's what buys you a seat in this world, not power. A demonstration of competence in front of the right 40 people, at the right moment, in a way that costs you nothing and cannot be replicated by anyone watching. Profound Abyss Immortal Master came and found me afterward and asked me my name. The target of the battle for the Tao was a boundary heaven. How they took it deserves telling. Because I had been in this world for 8 lifetimes, and I had never once seen what the top of it actually does. 3 golden core true monarchs stood on the cloud sea. Ours and the Tao courts and the Pure Lands, each on their own ground, hundreds of kilometers apart, in 3 different provinces, and each of them raised a Dharma body. A Dharma body is what a true monarch is underneath. The person is a convenience. The actual entity is a figure standing about as tall as a mountain range with the sky going through it. And when 3 of them came up at once, the daylight changed color across the whole of Jiangbei. Then they reached up and took a star out of the sky. Not a metaphor. There was a star and it came down. And by the time it stopped moving, it was a world about the size of a large province, hanging in the air over a battlefield that had been prepared for it. And it had oceans and mountains and people in it who had absolutely no idea. That's a boundary heaven. That's what the 4 estates fight over. Not gold, not territory in Jiangbei. Whole small worlds, harvested out of the sky and set on a table. And the winner's master's fruit position expands into it permanently. And into it they sent us. Foundation establishment. True persons cannot enter. That's the rule of the contest, and it's the only reason it's a contest. The realm rejects anything above a certain weight, and so a battle between 3 golden core true monarchs is fought entirely by their disciples, at chi refining and below, in a world none of them have ever seen. 400 of ours went in, about the same from each of the others. We lost the first day completely. The Tao Court and the Pure Land had cheated, and they had cheated in the specific way that only 2 allies can, which is with a matched pair of treasures. One of them gathers everyone on your side to a single point, instantly, wherever they land. The other maps every enemy in the realm. So within about 4 hours of the drop, the Tao Court and the Pure Land were 2 consolidated armies with a complete picture of the battlefield. And the Primordial Saint Sect was 400 individual demonic cultivators scattered across a continent, each of whom had been raised in an institution that taught them their fellow disciples were competitors for a finite crate of resources. We did not form up. We could not have formed up. Our people were robbing each other by day 2. I landed alone in a forest 300 kilometers from anyone I knew. And here, then, what I did with the first 11 days, because it was nothing. I walked, I hid, I mapped, I did not engage. On the 12th day, I came over a ridge and found 17 Pure Land monks running down a Saint Sect true disciple named Ren Hao across a river plain. He was going to die in about 90 seconds. He was a freeloader and a coward, and he had spent the entire journey out attaching himself to whoever looked strongest, and I did not like him even slightly. I came down on the monks from above and killed 16 of them in one gesture. Not a technique, status. That is what nobody in that realm understood, and it is why my 8th life went the way it did. Saint's Theft's rank came back with me, the way it always does. Every cultivator in that boundary heaven was chi refining. Every single one, on all 3 sides, because that's the rule of the contest. And I was, in heaven's opinion, a saint. 16 elite monks of the Jiangxi Pure Land stopped existing between one step and the next. And there was no attack for them to defend against, because an attack from a higher category is not an event you can be ready for. It is a decision that has already been made about you. The 17th got away. His name was Glimmering Path, and remember him, because that was the single most expensive escape of my 8th life. Ren Hao attached himself to me immediately, obviously. I let him. A freeloader who has just watched you delete 16 men becomes an extremely loud and enthusiastic advertisement. And I had 400 scattered disciples to gather and no treasure that gathers them. I harvested the 16 monks into the banner before we left. Pure Land cultivators, in a banner run by a demonic sect true disciple, in a boundary heaven where the Pure Land was one of 2 enemies. Keep hold of how ugly that is, because I am about to do it about 100 more times, and I need you to understand that I knew. They came back for round 2 11 days later, and this time they brought 108. That's a formation number. The Pure Land does everything in formation numbers. 108 elite monks in a Vajra array is a genuine army, and it produces a combined defensive body that a chi refining cultivator cannot scratch. And they came down that river plain in perfect order with Glimmering Path out in front pointing at me. I let them get all the way in. Then I shook out the banner. 240 spirits plus 16 of their own dead, and a banner spirit does not care about a Vajra array. Because a banner spirit is not attacking the array. It is walking into the array and detonating, and then walking back out of a piece of cloth 90 seconds later to do it again. They had 108 men and no way to make it stop. And when the array finally cracked, An Wen came out. I have not described what she looks like since the upgrade, and I'm going to keep it short. Protector God, Witch Ghost Dao lineage, 4,000 years of a dead sex authority behind the office, and she is 9 meters tall, and she does not hurry. She put the combined Vajra body face down into the river plain in one movement, and this time I went for Glimmering Path first. He got away again. I do not want to talk about how. It involved a treasure I had never seen, and a decision that cost him a limb. And he went into the ground and out of my deduction, and I stood there in a field of dead monks with a banner in my hand and a very cold feeling in my chest. Because a man who has now escaped me twice is not lucky. He is somebody's. I gathered what was left of our side over the following month, and I want to introduce them properly, because I have been calling my sect a slaughterhouse for 8 lifetimes, and these 4 are the argument for the defense. Ren Hao, freeloader, attached himself to me on day 12 and never left, contributed nothing, ate a great deal, and was the single best morale instrument I have ever fielded. Because a man who is loudly certain that we are going to win is worth about 40 men who quietly think we might. Shui Tao. Smiling knife, extremely polite, extremely capable, and I counted 6 separate occasions on which he considered killing me and decided against it on the numbers. We got on very well. I would not turn my back on him now. Shun Kai, the son of Profound Abyss Immortal Master, and he had his father's talent and about a third of his father's judgment, and he had never in his life been in a situation where his surname did not fix it. And Taoist Teng Hu, who had grafted a dragon's flesh onto his own body somewhere below the ribs and did not like being asked about it. 4 true disciples of the Primordial Saint Sect, 21 survivors between us out of 400 at the end of the first month, in a boundary heaven with 2 consolidated armies hunting us. We won it in 8. Here's how. And I want to be brief because this is the part of my 8th life that people always want to hear, and it is genuinely the least interesting thing that happened in it. The Pure Land traveled by Earthship. A great buried vessel that moves through rock carrying their entire force, which is an excellent way to keep 108 monks safe and a very bad way to keep them separated. We raided it in the 4th month. Their commander was a monk named Bo Jing, and he did something I had not seen before, which was to borrow status directly from the dragon subduing Arhat of the Jiangxi Pure Land, 4 realms away, through a merit link. It arrived as a category, not a technique. Everything on our side simply stopped qualifying, and silent contemplation answered it. I need to back up about a paragraph because I have been putting this off. I ate him out of a bay in my 7th life. That was the word I used at the time. I caught the pieces of a soul that had been reincarnated 5 times, and I put them in the banner, and I told myself it was a resource. He came back together over about 11 years. Not fully. He is not what he was, and he never will be, and he is on a pole in my sleeve rather than in a body. But somewhere in my 8th life, the fragments finished assembling themselves into a very tired man in his late 20s who is 4,000 years old and who has, I want to stress, absolutely no obligation to help me with anything. He helps anyway. That day, he built a Yama palace out of dead Pure Land monks in about 40 seconds, seated 9 of their own elite in the roles of the underworld's courts, and produced a counter status out of the enemy's own casualties, and Bo Jing's borrowed authority hit it and stopped. I asked him afterward why he'd bothered. He said that the Witch Ghost Dao had been exterminated by people exactly like that, and that he had been waiting 4,000 years to be on the correct side of a formation. And then he asked me whether I had eaten anything today, because apparently I had not. He is the only entity in this entire story who has ever asked me that. Not Han Kai, not Profound Abyss, not xianxia, not any Peak Master, any true monarch, any woman who has ever leaned on my table with wine. 8 lifetimes, 4 estates, 3 golden core true monarchs, 1 Arhat. And the only one who ever asked whether I had eaten is a dead man on a stick who tried to steal my body and has never once apologized for it. I have thought about that a great deal. The boundary heaven had a native, and it was not a person. The chi-eating insect king. Every world has a childhood destiny. It's a structural thing, apparently. The realm produces something to defend itself, and what this one had produced was a species that eats spiritual chi, breeds on what it kills, and had been quietly waiting under that continent for whatever came down out of the sky. The Dao court allied with them, which was clever, and which was also the single stupidest decision made by anyone in that war. And I say that as a man who has personally allied with worse. They put a beacon in their own camp. Glimmering Path did it. Through a clone, at distance, still limping from the river plain. And I have to give the Pure Land credit for turning their only survivor into a delivery system. He walked a marker into the Dao Court's staging ground so the insects would know where to go. And I put the 12 capitals' heavenly god's secret demonic light on top of it. That's a Xuanming fragment technique out of the Witch Ghost Dao's legacy, and it does one thing. It removes the boundary between things that were separate. The Dao quartz formations and the insect swarm and the earth under both of them stopped being 3 items and became 1 item. And the item was extremely hungry and had no leadership. The Dao court lost 1,100 people in a night to allies. The Pure Land lost their entire remaining force trying to hold a line against a swarm that ate qi and multiplied on it. And 21 demonic cultivators from the Primordial Saint Sect, who had never once formed up and who had spent the first month robbing each other, walked across a continent picking up the pieces. We won the battle for the Dao in the 8th month, and then the world paid us. I had not known it would. Nobody tells you this, and I have since worked out why nobody tells you, which is that it only happens to the people it happens to. A boundary heaven that has been won belongs, from that moment, to the winner's true monarch, and its fruit position expands, and the world itself acknowledges the acquisition by rewarding the instruments. Every surviving disciple of the Primordial Saint Sect was granted, on the spot, the single most valuable thing in this world: certainty. You need to understand what a foundation establishment attempt actually is. It is a gamble. 4 in 5 die. Not fail, die. And the odds are set by your foundation, your resources, your technique, your karma, your luck, and about 9 other things you cannot see. And there has never, in 9,000 years, been a way to know your number in advance. The realm handed each of us our number. Ren Hao got 60%, which for a freeloader is obscene, and he screamed about it for 2 days. Shui Tao got 71. Shun Kai got 88, which is what a foundation establishment true person's son gets, and he was insufferable about it in a way I actually enjoyed. I got 100. Let that sit for a moment, because I have been dying in a machine for 8 lifetimes, and it is the only time the machine has ever given me anything. 100%. No gamble. No 4 in 5. A foundation establishment attempt that could not fail, offered by a world I had just taken to a man who had spent 7 previous lives being priced, lent against, fished with, and used as bait. I stepped into the foundation establishment realm, and I took it. I'm not going to be clever about the ascension itself. It went perfectly, that's all. The 9 gates opened in sequence. My chi went up through them like water going downhill. And there was no heart demon, because a heart demon is the sentence you have been carefully not saying to yourself, and I had said all of mine out loud on a rock in a flooded valley about 40 years and 1 lifetime ago. I did not use the flying fish. 4 lifetimes I had carried that button, the first transformation of the true dragon path, the one that breaks a bottleneck on demand, and I had refused to spend it on anything smaller than this, and in the end, there was no bottleneck to break. A world I had just taken handed me 100% instead, so it is still in there, unspent, and it has been ever since. What came out at the top was a perfect foundation, not adequate, not large. Perfect in the technical sense, which is a term that gets used about once a century and which means that there is no ceiling built into it anywhere. I sat in the middle of it for a long time. 8 lifetimes, 11 witnesses with tea, a rope on my ankle and a thumb on my wrist, and a boy called Hao Kai with a line drawn through his name. I did not celebrate. The uncomfortable part of that, what I actually did was sit very still, in the middle of my own dantian, and think about the fact that a foundation establishment true person is exactly the kind of thing that had been putting fingers through me for 8 lives, and that from tomorrow I was going to be one, and that nothing about the machine had changed, only my department. And then I learned the truth about what I just bought, and it is the single most disgusting fact in this world. The heart demon is not psychological. Every manual says it is. Every teacher says it is. Master your mind, they say. Purify your intent. It's a lie that has been running for 9,000 years, and I would never have caught it if my ascension hadn't been perfect, because a perfect ascension is quiet enough to hear the mechanism. There is a wind up there. Above the foundation establishment realm, in the place a true person's soul sits, there is a constant erosive pressure. And it does not target your weaknesses, and it is not personal. It is simply always blowing. And it grinds a foundation establishment soul down to nothing in almost exactly 300 years. That's the lifespan. That's the actual lifespan, not 500, which is what they tell you. Everything past the 300-year mark is a true person spending resources to stand in a wind that is going to take him regardless. And the entire foundation establishment tier of this world is a room full of people who found out too late and have spent the rest of their existence pretending they didn't. It's not a demon, it's weather, it's a wind that eats saints, and every single one of them knows, and none of them will say it, because the only thing worse than 300 years is 300 years of everybody knowing. I found that out on the first morning of my foundation establishment, and the Book of 100 Lifetimes turned a page for me while I was still sitting there. Not a death. It had never done that before. It added something. Anchor point. So, what it does. And I had to read it 4 times, and then I put my head in my hands. Until that morning, every death sent me back to the cart. The thumb, the wrist, the mountain, the rope. 8 times. Every single thing I had built in a life was demolished on my way out, and I got to smuggle exactly 1 bag through the wall. The anchor point lets me set a marker, and when I die, I go back to the marker instead. I had spent 8 lifetimes treating death as a total loss and a page as the only currency I had. And the instant I built a perfect foundation, the book acknowledged that a foundation establishment true person is worth keeping and gave me a save. I said it there, that morning. Perfect foundation, in the foundation establishment realm, with the banner in my sleeve, which means that from that day forward, dying stopped being a demolition. It became a reload. Both enemy true monarchs tried to recruit me within the fortnight. The Dao Court's offer came through an intermediary and was extremely generous. The Pure Lands came directly from a bodhisattva and was more generous still, and had the specific quality of an offer that is not going to be repeated. I turned down both. Not out of loyalty, let's be clear. I turned them down because I had just watched the Pure Land lose an entire force in a boundary heaven and the Dao Court get eaten by its own allies. And because a man who changes estates is a man with no history in the one he arrives at. And because my sect had, for all its faults, never once told me it was doing me a favor. And Profound Abyss Immortal Master, who had been watching all of it, gave me a name. That's how it's done at that tier. A foundation establishment true person does not go by the name his village gave him. He takes a Dao name, and by tradition, if he has a superior worth the word, the superior gives it. He called me Vajra Soul. Then he gave me a mountain in the Cloud Sea, which is what a true disciple gets when he becomes a true person, and which was the first piece of property I had ever legally held in 9,000 years of that institution. And then he sat me down and told me the thing that has run under every single day since. He asked me what my Dao Path's fruit position was. I told him. My foundation is built on the 9 transformations. Dragon transformation art, out of a legacy I took off an island, and its road goes up through a specific fruit position, and I named it City Wall Earth. And Profound Abyss Immortal Master looked at me with what I eventually recognized as sympathy, which is not an expression that man has often, and told me that City Wall Earth has been sealed by the Jiangxi Pure Land for a very long time. Not occupied, sealed. The seat exists. It is not empty, and it is not held by anyone who intends to use it. The Pure Land took it centuries ago and shut it, and nobody knows exactly why. And there is no mechanism by which a foundation establishment true person of the Primordial Saint Sect is ever going to reach it. So I sat on a mountain in the Cloud Sea on the first week of my foundation establishment with a perfect foundation, a Dao name, an anchor point, and 100% success rate. And I learned that the road I had spent 5 lifetimes building myself for ends in a locked door owned by an enemy. I laughed for a while. Then I went and got to work, because a locked door is a formation. And I have been a rank 9 formation master since my 4th life, and I have eaten better men than the ones who said it. 30 years, and I'll go quickly. I seeded the law-refining secret realm with the chi-eating insect. Yes, that realm. 140 million people in a bottle, which my sect still lists under materials, and which in this life I had acquired legally as a true disciple with asset holding rights, instead of as a settlement from a contract I signed unread. The insects do not eat people. I want that clear. I bred them down and made them symbiotic, and what they became was a nervous system. 140 million hosts, each carrying something I can see through. I caught the Guang family's old ancestor 11 minutes after his reincarnation. He came into that realm the same way he had in my 6th life, as a baby in the Great Joe, with 60 years of memories and a heaven-hiding treasure. And the entire operation was flawless, and it was observed from the moment his mother went into labor by an insect on the ceiling. I took the Jiu Qian instrument off him before he could walk. Objective 3 completed, roughly 70 years ahead of schedule and without a fight. I have never had a better afternoon. I rebuilt the Witch Ghost Dao on Mount Lufeng, not out of sentiment. A Dao lineage with a mountain is an institution, and an institution can hold assets and recruit disciples and generate the kind of steady low-grade fortune that a foundation establishment true person needs in order to not be somebody's bait. Silent contemplation runs it. He does not have a body, and the disciples have never seen him, and he is the best administrator of a sect I have ever encountered, including Shui Lan, and I did not tell him it was happening until the halls were built. He was quiet for a long time when he saw it. Then he asked me what the ancestral hall's foundation stone was cut from, because if I had used granite, he was going to have words with me. And I have never in my life been so relieved to be criticized. There was a man named Mei Jin who came to that mountain twice a year for 11 years demanding an audience. Zhou bloodline. Old, obscure, faintly aristocratic. And he had a claim to make about my Dao path, and he made it at increasing volume to increasingly junior members of my sect, until eventually he made it to me. I erased him mid-sentence. I regret that one actually, and not for the reason you'd expect. I regret it because about 4 years later I found out what he had been trying to tell me, and it was important, and it took me another 2 decades and a great deal of money to buy the same information from his cousin. Never kill a man who has been shouting the same thing at you for 11 years. He is not persistent because he is stupid, and in the 31st year, Han Kai Immortal Master came to my mountain with a job. Gourd Island. There are 2 spirit treasures on it, genuine ones of the tier that foundation establishment true persons kill each other for, and they had been sitting there unclaimed for 160 years, and everybody in Jiangbei knew exactly where they were. The reason nobody had taken them is that they belonged to a great true person who died badly, and his karmic debt did not die with him, and it sits on the island, and whoever picks up the treasures picks up the debt. Han Kai showed me the number. It was, accurately, the largest single liability I have ever seen written down. A foundation establishment true person taking that on would be crushed inside a decade. It is the sort of debt that follows you into your next life, and the one after. And it is the actual reason those treasures were still lying there. I took the job in about 4 seconds, because I have a protector god. An Wen was built for exactly one purpose, which is that everything lands on her instead of on me. And she had been carrying 2 lifetimes of accumulated consequence and 9 severed pieces of my own soul and had not once complained, because I did not build her with the capacity to. I walked onto Gourd Island, picked up a dead great true person's crushing karmic debt, filed it in a divine office that exists specifically to absorb such things, and walked off with both treasures. The first was the Imperial Dragon Carriage, and I'll come back to it because it is the thing that finally finishes the Shen Wu sect. The second one opened its own box. It came out as a sword the color of dried blood. And then it came out again as a small girl in a red padded coat sitting on the lid swinging her legs, looking at me with enormous interest. The Abyss Sword. She eats cultivators. That's her mechanism, and she is entirely open about it. Feed her a foundation establishment true person, and she gets stronger, permanently, and she keeps a running tally. And she was extremely direct with me on the first afternoon about her expectations regarding frequency. Her previous owner was a blood demon immortal master who had been feeding her about 1 a decade, and she considered him weak and incompetent and said so. I asked her what she wanted. She said more. I have never had a more straightforward professional relationship in my life. I went back to Skull Mountain in the 34th year to collect the ley lines properly, and the Shen Wu sect was there because the Shen Wu sect is always there. Mo Jian had grown up in this life without ever being split in half 1,000 feet from home. True disciple, Qi refining great perfection. 2 spirit treasures, exactly as promising as he had been the first time. I killed him with a breeze. That is not a figure of speech, and it is not a boast. I was in the foundation establishment realm, standing 300 meters up, and I moved some air, and a young man who had once cost me 11 detonations and a 9-day siege came apart on a hillside like a wasp on a window. I had spent 6 lifetimes learning to fear that boy's whole category, and the actual difference between us, once I crossed the line, was that I no longer had to think about him. That's status. That is the whole of it. And consider the specific feeling, which was not triumph, it was embarrassment, on behalf of the world. Their acting sect leader came out for the real fight, and that one is worth laying out because it's where I finally got to open the second treasure, the Imperial Dragon Carriage. It is not a chariot. It looks like one, and it has wheels, and there is nothing in this world further from a vehicle. It has 4 powers, and they are the most obnoxious 4 powers I have ever held in one object. First, it sets distance. Not travels it, sets it. The gap between me and anything else becomes whatever I say it is, and it changes when I say so. And there is no technique in the mortal realm that outruns an arbitrary number. Second, it borrows force. Anything moving toward me is moving because it was made to move, and the carriage takes the credit for the movement. Third, it holds ground, which is technical, and which means the space it occupies stops being negotiable. And fourth, it does not stop. The Shen Wu sect's acting leader was a foundation establishment true person of about 2 centuries, with a proper cultivation and a proper legacy and an entire sect behind him. And he lost that fight in the first 11 seconds and spent the next 40 minutes finding out slowly. The Shen Wu sect never came at me again. Not once in the 60 years I had left of that life. That was the day my sect started using my Dao name in memoranda. Mei Fan came to my mountain about a year after that. Zhou Yu clan, cousin of the man I had erased mid-sentence for being persistent, and he had spent a year working up the courage. And the first thing he did on my doorstep was tell me that he expected to die and had come anyway. I let him in because I had by then found out what his cousin had been shouting about, and I was extremely interested. City Wall Earth was theirs. The Zhou Yu are not a sect, they are a bloodline. And they are very old, and a long time ago, before there was a Dao court in Jiangdong, the fruit position that my entire Dao path leads to belonged to their line. Then the Dao court's founder took it from them, and the Zhou Yu became a curiosity with a good pedigree and no property. And the seat itself eventually ended up sealed by the Jiangxi Pure Land, for reasons that nobody outside the Pure Land has ever been told. They have spent about 4,000 years waiting for somebody with a legitimate claim to walk up that road again. And then a demonic sect true disciple built a perfect foundation on the 9 transformations dragon transformation art, and pointed himself straight at their seat, and a Zhou Yu elder started coming to his mountain twice a year to explain the family history, and got erased for it. Mei Fan pledged the clan to me on the floor of my hall, the honest version of how that felt, because I have described a great many acquisitions in this story, and this was the first time anybody had ever offered me something without an angle. They wanted their seat back. I wanted the same seat. That was the entire alignment, and it was enough, and it is still the only alliance I have that has never once been renegotiated. Now, the Arhat. Because the dragon subduing Arhat of the Jiangxi Pure Land was, in this life, still fishing, he had not lost 400 years of merit because that had happened in a life that no longer exists. Serpent Bloom Island had produced its crop, as usual. and the crop was walking around Jiangbei with a perfect foundation and a Dao name, and he had noticed. He came for me the way a Pure Land Arhat comes for anything. Slowly, correctly, and through the proper channels. He bought help. He went to the heaven-mending peak master who was in this life entirely intact and had never had his Dao path shouted across a flooded valley. And he offered him two things, a cauldron for the family's use and his own future relic. That second one requires explanation. A Pure Land Arhat's relic is what's left when he dies, and it is worth more than most sects, and offering yours in advance is the single most serious commitment available in that religion. It is a promissory note secured against your own corpse. I watched the entire negotiation through the Jiu Chen instrument, which hides you from heaven and which nobody in Jiangbei knew I had, because I had taken it off a baby 70 years before he was supposed to receive it. 2 foundation establishment powers arranging my death in detail over 11 days, while the man they were discussing sat in a cloud sea watching with his chin on his hand. So I built them a bomb, and I built it out of Hui Heng. He had been walking around for 40 years believing he was the reincarnation of true person Serpent Bloom, because I had spent 11 months laying that belief into him in slices in my first year. It had aged beautifully. He had a following. He had a manner. He had, by that point, actual disciples of his own who called him ancestor. I gave him the Skull Mountain ley lines, 800 miles of the richest karmic ground in Jiangbei, deeded over in public as a gift from Vajra Soul to his old senior brother on the eve of Hui Heng's foundation establishment attempt. Everybody thought it was sentiment. I planted one compulsion in him, very small, buried under 40 years of fabricated memory. If his ascension were blocked, he would detonate the ley lines. And then I severed my own karma from that mountain entirely. The Zouyu handled the paperwork. It took 9 months, and it was the most boring legal work of my 8th life. And at the end of it, 800 miles of loaded ground belonged completely and provably to a man who was about to attempt foundation establishment in front of an audience. A karma bomb with somebody else's name on the deed. Hui Heng's ascension drew 8 foundation establishment true persons into the foundation establishment realm. The Arhat, obviously, the heaven-mending peak master, fulfilling his end. 6 others from 3 estates, because the reincarnation of true person Serpent Bloom ascending on top of the Witch Ghost Dao's ley lines is the kind of event that people clear a schedule for. And there was a Ling Wei there, blocking the exit. Everybody saw me. Everybody has said since that they saw me. I was extremely visible, at the eastern gate of the Ascension Ground, in my own robes, refusing to let a man leave. It was on when. The real one was 400 kilometers away, inside the Shenwu sect's treasury, taking everything that was not bolted down. Because 8 foundation establishment true persons in one place means 11 mountains somewhere else are being watched by nobody. I got their entire reserve. It took 2 days. Nobody has ever worked out where it went. And on the Ascension Ground, Hui Heng got about 2/3 of the way up, and his exit was blocked. And he looked around at 8 true persons arranged in a ring around his ascension, and he finally, 40 years late, understood the shape of his own life. He'd been bait. He had been bait for the Arhat's mold, and bait for the Peak Master's ledger, and bait for a man he had genuinely believed was his junior brother. And he worked all of it out in the middle of a foundation establishment attempt with his own chi coming apart around him. And he decided that nobody was going to enjoy it. He set it off himself. He did not need the compulsion. I have checked several times, and the compulsion never fired, and I have decided to be honest about that rather than take the credit. 800 miles of ley line went up under 8 foundation establishment true persons. Divine punishment is not lightning. That is where everyone goes wrong. It's a bill. When something of that scale dies violently, heaven identifies the parties present and assigns responsibility. And every single person standing in that ring was on the invoice. Hui Heng died. The dragon subduing Arhat lost every scrap of merit he owned. 400 years of it, plus the future relic he'd already pledged. And the judgment against him was 10 lifetimes as livestock, which, for a Pure Land Arhat, is not a punishment, it is an unmaking. The heaven-mending Peak Master lost about half of everything. The other 6 went home with debts that took them a century. And Vajra Soul of the Primordial Saint Sect was documented as being 400 kilometers away at the time, with witnesses. And the figure at the eastern gate could not be produced by anybody, and the ley lines had provably belonged to the deceased. Here's the thing I need you to understand about the Arhat, though. It did not kill him. He was ruined. He had nothing. And he was still a foundation establishment true person with about 80 years of natural life in him. And he was still a Pure Land Arhat, and a ruined enemy at that tier is a man with nothing left to lose and 8 decades to spend. He came after me in the open, without merit, without support, for the rest of his life, and I did not fight him once. Here is my actual plan, which took 50 years, and which the entire Primordial Saint Sect found completely humiliating. I outlived him. That's it. That's the strategy. I went back to my mountain in the cloud sea, and I sealed the door. And I stayed inside for 50 years, while a ruined Arhat camped in Jiangbei shouting challenges at a rock. He was 211 years old when it started. The wind grinds a foundation establishment soul down in 300 years. And it does not care about your merit or your sect or your grievance. And a man who has lost everything ages considerably faster than the schedule. I bought decade pills off the heaven-mending Peak Master to extend my own count while I waited. I want that detail preserved. I purchased extra lifespan at at market rate, from a man who had lost half his fortune helping the Arhat try to kill me in order to outlast the Arhat. He sold them to me. He needed the money. The sect called me the Old Turtle, not behind my back, to my face in memoranda at gatherings. Vajrasoul, the great Vajrasoul, perfect foundation, hero of the battle for the Tao, who has not left his mountain in 4 decades because a bald man is standing outside. Shun Kai brought it up at a banquet once, laughing, in front of about 60 people. I let him. 50 years of being called a coward by an institution that has never once produced a disciple who lived past his second ambush. I only fight the old, the weak, the sick, and the crippled. And in the 50th year, the dragon subduing Arhat became all 4 at once. I went to watch. That is the peace I have never apologized for, and never will. I opened my door for the first time in 5 decades, walked out to where he was, and stood in front of a 260-year-old monk with no merit, no relic, no sect backing, and about 9 days left. And I did not say anything clever. I just made sure he saw me. He was extremely calm about it, which I had not expected. And he told me that the mold had been set for a very long time and would be set again after he was gone, and that I had not defeated anything. Then he died of old age. I picked up the golden relic, which forms regardless of merit and which was the only thing of value he had left, and I put it in my sleeve and went home. I found out later that the heaven-mending peak master, on hearing the whole account, said one sentence to his own household, and the sentence was that nobody in the family was ever to give Vajrasoul a reason. He then immediately gave me a reason because he wanted the relic. He offered a technique for it, and the technique he offered was about one of the most valuable objects in Jiangbei, and it was a substitute tribulation method. When a foundation establishment true person attempts to advance past the middle stage, there is a heavenly tribulation. It kills most people who attempt it, and this tactic lets you take a person of your own blood and stand them in it, so the lightning goes into them instead of you. He wanted it for his own children. He said so, out loud, in the negotiation, as a selling point, in the tone of a man explaining that the carriage seats 4. I took the deal. 2 weeks later, Lady Lianhua came to my mountain, the heaven-mending peak master's wife. And I had assumed, along with everybody in Jiangbei, that she was a qi refining ornament with a good marriage. She was a foundation establishment true person, had been for 140 years. She had concealed it from her own husband for the entire marriage, which is a feat I would rank above anything I have personally done. And she came up my mountain alone and made me one offer: kill him. She had terms. They were excellent terms. She had clearly been drafting them for about a century. 11 days after that, Ling Wei came to my mountain. The daughter, the one I had twice been offered as a wife by that man across 2 lifetimes, and who I had never actually met, and who arrived on her own, without her mother's knowledge, with an entirely separate set of terms. Kill my father. I sat in my hall after she left, and the exact texture of that feeling was not triumph and was not disgust. It was recognition. I had spent 8 lifetimes inside an institution that prices its children at intake, and I had built an entire philosophy about how at least we were honest about it, and here was the family at the very top of it, 4 people. And 3 of them had separately hired the same outsider to kill the 4th, and not one of them knew about the others. They didn't need me. That's the part. A foundation establishment true person's wife of 140 years could have arranged that herself. What they needed was somebody outside the family to be responsible. The tribulation came in the spring. He had prepared beautifully, both children in position, sedated, seated in the substitute array, entirely unaware. The technique he had bought off me for an Arhat's relic, deployed on his own son and daughter in a ceremony with 40 witnesses, because a foundation establishment tribulation is a public occasion. And at the moment the sky opened, Lady Lianhua woke her daughter up, in front of everybody, loudly, with the full explanation delivered in about 9 seconds, and she made absolutely sure that every one of those 40 witnesses heard exactly what the array was for and whose idea it had been. Li Yue self-destructed rather than take the lightning, and so did Li Xiaobo. I need to stop here. Li Xiaobo had been my mole in heaven-mending peak for 4 lifetimes. A fifth of a soul in a gray banner, taken off a woman's belt on a mountain path, interrogated under status suppression, installed, used. He gave me the shape of the world. He gave me the battle for the Tao. He is the reason I knew what a fruit position was before I had a foundation. He was also, in this life, restored and walking around as his father's second child, because the peak master had reassembled his distributed reserve. I had put him back together. That's the truth of it. I did it because a whole mole is worth more than a fifth of one, and I had told myself several other things at the time. He was awake in that array. He had been awake the whole ceremony, and when the sky opened, he did not wait for his mother to say anything. He looked over at his father, who had split him into 5 pieces and stored them in different provinces, and who had now seated him in a lightning rod, and he took himself apart. I felt it go. 4 lifetimes of a working relationship ending in about a second and a half from 400 meters away in a crowd. I did not do anything about it. There was nothing to do about it. I'm telling you this because I have made a great many jokes in this account, and I am not going to make one here. The heaven-mending peak master took the full tribulation with no substitutes. He burned in front of 40 witnesses, and it took a while, and his wife watched the entire thing from the front row with her hands folded. I became acting peak master of Heaven Mending Peak 11 days later. Not by ambition, by process. There was a vacancy. There was a foundation establishment true person with a perfect foundation and no faction. And the Sect's administration filed the paperwork before anybody thought to object. The peak was a wreck. Half the assets were gone with the old man's debts. The family was a crater. I inherited an institution that had just eaten itself in public, and in the private vault, behind 3 formations that took me 9 days, I found the thing that all of it had actually been about. A note, handwritten. Not a manual, not a technique, a document of about 4,000 characters in the hand of a golden core true monarch. The purpose of observing the golden core. That is the map from foundation establishment to golden core. There is no such thing. That is the received wisdom of every institution in this part of the world. A true person advances by his own comprehension, or he does not advance. And the reason there are 4 golden core true monarchs in this entire region is that the road is not written down anywhere. It is written down. It is 4,000 characters. The Heaven Mending Peak Master had been sitting on it for 160 years and had told nobody, including his wife, including the Arhat he sold his help to. And he had been walking it so slowly and so carefully that he had drawn no attention at all. And then he decided he needed a lightning rod and shopped for one at home. I read the whole thing standing up in the vault. Then I sat down on the floor of another man's treasury with the map to the top of the world in my hands. And the first coherent thought I had was that within about a year, every single person in Jiangbei who could count was going to work out where it had gone. Before the vultures arrived, I signed one order. The first document I put my name to as acting master of Heaven Mending Peak ended the peak's named disciple intake. No more tribute batches, no more crates from the Hao Kingdom, no more gray-robed man in a courtyard with a register and a brush. It cost me a great deal. Heaven Mending Peak ran on that intake, 3 other peaks were furious, and I lost about a decade of political capital in an afternoon over an administrative decision that benefited me in no way whatsoever. I never explained it to anyone, and when Shun Kai asked me directly at a banquet, I told him it was a supply chain efficiency. The actual reason is that in my third life, I lay on a mat in a cave and listened to a boy called Ren Jia die through a wall. And I did the arithmetic on how many pages I had, and the arithmetic won. I told him I'd get to it. It took 5 lifetimes, and it is the smallest thing in this entire account, and it is the only one I would not trade. Then Hui Long came for the book, and I had my first real fight. Let me not dress up that phrasing, because I have described a great many violent afternoons. I have detonated ley lines and erased cities and killed 300 people with a gesture, and none of it was a fight. It was arithmetic arriving. Hui Long was a fight. Loose cultivator. No sect, no backing, no lineage, and foundation establishment, which is a combination that should not exist. He had gotten there entirely alone, and a man who reaches that tier without an institution is a very different animal from one who was funded into it. He had a 3-power divine ability, which is 1 more than I had, and he had the heavenly furnace fire, which does not burn things, it refines them. It treats your body as an ingredient and your defenses as slag, and it does not stop once it has been introduced. We went for 11 hours. I put 140 million people's worth of chi-eating insects into him, and he burned about 60% of them, which I had not thought was possible. And I have never met anyone else who could have. He put the furnace fire through my left side and most of what was under it, and in the 9th hour, with both of us ruined, the Abyss Sword unlocked her first property, because she had finally been fed properly. Human butcher. Every cultivator she kills makes her better at killing that kind of cultivator, permanently, cumulatively, forever. She had been on about 1 foundation establishment true person a decade with her previous owner. She had been with me for 60 years. Make your own estimate. She came out of that fight singing. Hui Long left with his life, barely, which nobody has ever managed before or since, and I lay in a cloud sea for 11 days growing my side back and worked out what the fight had actually been. He hadn't come for the book. He'd never heard of the book. Somebody had written it down. There is an object called the Book of Fate and Fortune. It is a fruit position treasure, which means it belongs to the tier above foundation establishment. And what it does is that you write a sentence in it, and reality is obliged to attempt the sentence. Somebody had written, Hui Long kills Ling Wei. The somebody was Kang Jie, a peak foundation establishment true person, which is the tier just under Golden Core, and he had no grudge against me at all. He was stalling Profound Abyss. Profound Abyss Immortal Master was rising. He was the acting head of my sect's outer affairs, and he was walking a fruit position of his own, and he was going to get there. And the correct way to slow a rising true person is not to fight him. It is to remove his people. I was Profound Abyss's man. That was my entire crime. I had spent 8 lifetimes learning that I was never the target, and I had gotten used to it. And it still took me 11 days in a cloud sea to accept that the first genuine duel of my life had been a maintenance action performed by a stranger on somebody else's schedule. So I left the continent, not from fear, from arithmetic. A man who has just been written into somebody's book should be somewhere the book cannot conveniently find him. And there is an ocean, and across it there is a place called the Azure Sun Cultivation World. Let me set down what that place is. Because it took me about 4 days to work it out, and I have never been angrier at an institution in 10 lifetimes. And I say that as a man who was sold with a cow. It is a cultivation world governed by an immortal alliance, and the immortal alliance issues spiritual roots. At birth, formally. There is an assessment and a ceremony and a grade, and the grade determines everything about your life. And everybody there understands this to be the natural order of a just world. The roots are not natural, they are installed, and they are not free. Every root of grade 3 and above is powered by a draw on the lifespans of everyone below, and the whole thing is a pyramid with about 1 billion people in the base, and the base does not know, and the middle knows and has decided not to think about it, and the top designed it. It is my sect's entire operating model, with better manners and a longer supply chain. I toppled it in about 6 years. I did not intend to at first. I killed their nascent souls by accident, which is a sentence I have to explain. The Immortal Alliance's ruling tier called themselves nascent souls, which is the rank above Golden Core, and which would make them the most powerful entities I had ever encountered by an enormous margin. They were Foundation Establishment, early stage, most of them. The titles had drifted over about 900 years of a closed system with nobody to correct it. I killed 4 of them in one afternoon under the impression that I was picking a fight with something serious. After that, it was mostly administration. I took over the Divine Firmament Sect, which was the Alliance's largest member, and from inside it, I found the actual design documents. And the truth is worse than the pyramid. Taoist Jiangbei built it. That Taoist Jiangbei, vast fortune of my own sect, who set down a lucky boy in a life that no longer exists and said the word dead end and went back up into the clouds without asking my name. He built a 1 billion-person farm across an ocean, and he built it on top of an older design by somebody called the Origin Lumina Patriarch. And the purpose of the entire structure was not power or territory or worship. He was forging a true treasure, that is, the tier above spirit treasure. There are perhaps a dozen in this part of the world, and the material cost of one, it turns out, is roughly 1 billion lives, harvested slowly over 900 years through a lifespan pyramid that the material itself administers. I read that and thought about 140 million people in a bottle labeled materials, and I sat with the arithmetic for a while. Glimmering Path turned up in the 4th year, the monk who had escaped me twice in the Boundary Heaven 60 years earlier, and who was now considerably more senior, and who arrived in the Azure Sun cultivation world in a manner designed to be noticed. He was bait. He had been bait the first time and the second time, and I finally understood the pattern, which is that the Jiangxi Pure Land has been running the same man at me for 6 decades because I keep going after him. He came with an escort of the Alliance's Tao Integration Elders, which is another drifted title, and which meant about 11 Foundation Establishment true persons. I stalled them for 9 days with a promise. I told them I had a first-grade Mahayana True Chi. That's a fictional tier in this world at that time. Nobody has one. It does not exist. And the reason it worked is that a closed system 900 years out of contact has no way to check. And the reason they wanted it is that men at the top of a pyramid always believe there is a higher grade of root available to somebody. They negotiated for 9 days. I spent 9 days building. Then I dropped all 11 of them into a Blood Sea sky-piercing sword formation, which is the Blood Sun Sword Pill's grandchild, and which I have been improving since my 4th life, and which now has a protector god standing in the middle of it. And I let Glimmering Path go. Again, 3rd time. On purpose this time. Because a bait that keeps escaping is a bait that keeps getting sent, and I would rather know which hook they are using than have to learn a new one. Then I ran the 4 steps on the Immortal Alliance. That is not a technique, it's what my sect does to a territory, and I had watched it done to me for 8 lifetimes, and here it is in full, because I have never seen it written down anywhere, and it deserves to be. Step 1. Terror. You demonstrate, once, at a scale nobody can misread, that resistance is not a strategy but a category error. Step 2. Reassurance. You immediately, publicly, guarantee everything they already have. Nobody's property is touched. Nobody's rank is revoked. The people who cooperate are visibly better off within the week. Step 3. Manufacture factions. You find the 3 or 4 seams that already exist in the institution, and you fund all of them, evenly, and you make sure each one knows the others are being funded. Step 4. Withdraw. You never need to do anything else. A society with equally funded factions and a guaranteed floor will fight itself indefinitely. And it will do it in the direction you set, and every single participant will experience it as their own choice. 900 years of a stable alliance into permanent civil war in about 3 years, without a single further intervention from me. And out of the wreckage came the thing I had actually crossed an ocean for, the Hui Earth Chi, a celestial stem. That's the class of material a Foundation Establishment true person needs to advance, and there is no way to buy one, and they do not occur. The Hui Earth Chi is the chi of a mountain that is crushing something, not a mountain, the pressure of one. And it only manifests at the moment the mountain is removed, and it manifests once. There had been 1 billion people under an immortal alliance for 900 years. I took the mountain off, and I stood underneath and caught what came out. That's the whole reason, not justice. Let me be blunt, because I have spent this account being unpleasant about institutions, and I would hate for you to come away with the wrong idea about me. I did not free a billion people. I harvested a pressure differential, and freeing a billion people was the mechanism. They are, to be fair, actually free. It is the largest good thing I have ever done, and it was a side effect, and I have never once claimed otherwise. And that is when the trap I had been walking into for 6 years finally closed. Hui Long came across the ocean after me, except it wasn't Hui Long anymore. There was something wearing him. The Origin Lumina patriarch, whose older design Taoist Jiangbei had built the farm on top of, had attempted ascension a very long time ago and had failed. And what a failed ascension leaves is not a corpse. It leaves a Dao Nye, an unmade thing with a dead man's method and no body and enormous patience. And it had gotten into a loose cultivator with a 3-power divine ability and a furnace fire. It hunted me across an ocean for 19 days. I could not fight it. Hui Long alone had cost me 11 hours and most of my left side. And this was Hui Long plus something that had been the peer of the man who designed a billion-person farm. I ran until there was nowhere to run. And then, at the edge of the world with the Dao Nye coming and the water behind me, help arrived. A bodhisattva of the Jiangxi Pure Land came down out of the sky. She was luminous, and she was kind, and she was, genuinely, offering to save my life. That's what made it work. There was no threat in it at all. She offered conversion, take the Pure Land's vows, enter the order, accept the seat they had been holding open for me since the boundary heaven. And the Dao Nye would be handled, and my Dao path would be restored, and city wall earth, which the Pure Land has kept sealed for 4,000 years, might one day be discussed. Everything, all of it, every locked door I had, opened by the people who had locked them. And the reason Glimmering Path had escaped me 3 times. And the reason he had turned up in an ocean world 4,000 kilometers from anywhere. And the reason the Dao Nye had been aimed and pointed and released at precisely the moment I finished the harvest was so that a bodhisattva could arrive at the edge of the world and be my only remaining option. 6 decades, 3 escapes, 1 monk, 1 ocean, 1 offer. I had been the fish the entire time. Again, 8 lifetimes. So I said no. And let me get to exactly what I said because I have been asked and I have always dressed it up. And the truthful version is that I did not say anything clever at all. I said that I had been in an institution that prices its children since I was 18 years old, and that I had at least always known the price, and that I was not going to spend eternity somewhere that would give me the same arrangement and expect gratitude for it. Then I reached for the curse I have carried in my soul since my 3rd life, and something looked at me through her. I need to be careful here, because this is the last thing that happened in my 8th life, and it is the thing I have thought about most. The bodhisattva's face did not change. She did not speak, but there was a moment, about a second long, in which the entity standing in front of me was not the entity that had been standing in front of me, and something enormously further up looked out through a bodhisattva of the Jiangxi Pure Land, the way a man looks through a window at a stone in his garden. It did not say anything. It was simply interested. I have met a golden core true monarch. I have stood under 3 dharma bodies pulling a star out of the sky. I have been read by a foundation establishment true person, like a ledger, and dismissed as a dead end. And I have had a golden core's sword go through my history twice looking for a reason to kill me. None of them felt like that. Not one. Then I said the word, and I went up, and I took a good part of the coastline with me. Page 92. Here's where I'll leave it for now, because there's a natural stopping place, and this is it. And it is not the explosion. It's what happened afterward. I opened my eyes, and I was not on the floor of a cart. There was no thumb on my wrist. There was no rope on my ankle. No 19 strangers in undyed hemp. No boy crying about water, and no mountain range coming up over the pass with palaces in its teeth. I was on a mountain, in the cloud sea, in my own hall, in a perfect foundation establishment, with the primordial chi myriad spirit banner in my sleeve, and An Wen standing at the door, and a dead sect master 4,000 years old asking me, in a tone of considerable irritation, whether I had eaten. The anchor held. 8 times I have woken up in that cart. 8 times I have knelt in that courtyard and watched a brush come down through the name of a boy who had good bones and a bright face and about 4 seconds left. And 8 times I have started again from a rope and a price list. The 9th time, I woke up as an immortal master. The first time I died, I was a numbered bag of blood on the floor of a hall, and the woman who did it never learned my name, and 11 people watched with tea and applauded when she stood up. The 9th time, I chose it myself, at the edge of the world, to spite a Buddha who was offering me everything I wanted. That's the distance. That is the whole of it. Everything in between is bookkeeping, and I would love to tell you that I sat down in that hall and felt like a man who had finally won something. What I actually did was sit very still and count, because a locked door in Jiangxi is still locked, because there is a wind above the foundation establishment realm that grinds saints down in 300 years, and I now have a name on that list. Because somewhere out there, a man named Kang Jia wrote a sentence in a book about me, and there is no reason to think he only wrote one. And because for 1 second, at the edge of the world, something with no name and no face and no interest in the 4 great powers of Jiangbei looked out through a bodhisattva and noticed a foundation establishment, nobody who would not stay dead. It didn't do anything. It didn't have to. I have 92 pages and a save point and a very short list of things I am certain about. And the first item on that list is that whatever was behind that window has a much longer list than I do, and I am on it. Ask me again in 100 years whether the anchor was a gift. Packaging. Title: I was sold to a demon sect as raw material, so I died 8 times on purpose. Description: sold with a cow, shipped to the Primordial Saint Sect as raw material, and drained to death by his own senior sister on day 1. Ling Wei wakes up back in the cart with a book that gives him 100 lifetimes and 1 rule. He only moves forward when he dies. 8 deaths later, he has stolen a soul banner, farmed a sealed world, outlived a Buddha by 50 years, and worked out the thing every immortal in Jiangbei is hiding about their own lifespan. A xianxia recap of a cultivation manhua-style reincarnation loop with a scheming OPMC, a demon sect that prices its disciples at intake, and a system that pays in second chances instead of stat points. How many pages would you burn to get out of a place like that? Thumbnail prompt: a young man in a torn gray robe kneeling on a stone floor being drained of light by a glowing figure above him, and beside him the same man standing in black robes with a soul banner in one hand and a red-bladed sword in the other, both halves of one image split down the middle by a giant turning page. Text block 1, upper left, sold as material. Text block 2, upper right, died 8 times. Text block 3, centered bottom, small, 100 pages left. Style: dark cinematic xianxia, deep red and cold jade lighting, heavy contrast, face fully visible on both halves, no clutter.